He once stood at the peak of magic, Oscar Sage, master of the White Tower, savior of mankind. But even legends must die. 20 years later, he awakens in the body of a weak apprentice who can barely cast a spark. The tower he ruled now crumbles, mocked as the weakest among the four. Yet behind those powerless hands burns the will of the man who once reached the stars. He saved the world once, now he'll save its magic. What happens when the weakest mage carries the mind of a god? Let's find out. Somewhere in the starry sky, amid blood-soaked ruins, surrounded by his fallen fellow mages, sat Oscar Sage. But he, too, was at the end of his strength thanks to the sword piercing his body. He used magic and contacted the others, asking them to answer him if any of them had survived. If they couldn't speak, then let them move or make a sound. His words became a plea. A wave passed through the sea of blood, but no one responded. No one? Was he really the only survivor? He glanced at the head of his enemy, the one who had plunged the blade into him. The one who had first united the demons and led humanity to destruction was the High Priest. The demons were merciless. They created chaos and were not at all averse to murder. But when the mages arrived, Oscar, the head of the Mage Tower, immediately began restoring order on the battlefield. In the war against the demons that came from their realm, he and his followers, the mages of the White Tower, put everything on the line for the future of humanity. They fought bravely, slaying the enemy leader, but fell in battle themselves. Edna Sol Laplace, the last dragon in the world and a caretaker recording history, arrived. She recorded that today, April 28th at 3 hours and 12 minutes, the death of the High Priest was confirmed. He looked up at her, and she said she had good news and bad news. He asked her to start with the bad news, and she informed him that, as expected, an army of demons had invaded the White Tower. As a result, most of the mages perished, and the tower itself was partially destroyed. Those mages and research resources were almost burned. The good news: the Empire's forces arrived earlier than expected, so they managed to rescue some survivors, including his students. He said he was glad to hear it and then coughed, covering his mouth with his hand. And she asked if he regretted his choice today. He told her that he didn't. He chose each of them and brought them personally. Even in front of them, he wouldn't say he regretted it. She asked if he had anything to add, and he looked thoughtfully at his bloody palm. He asked her to keep an eye on his students sometimes. They were still young, so he was sure they would be very worried. She bowed to him as a sign of respect and promised him this, and her gesture made him laugh and ask, "Does a dragon bow its head to a pathetic human?" She said that he had the right to such an attitude. Neither the continent nor she would forget the sacrifices made by the heroes of the White Tower. He smiled and closed his eyes, saying that so be it. In fact, he lied that he had no regrets. He may be the best mage, but he's a lousy leader. If he were given another chance, he'd live solely for his people, even if it meant being called a villain. He looked up at the sky one last time, thinking that this was how he wanted to live, and then his hand fell lifelessly. Edna closed his eyelids. On April 28th at 3:47 minutes, the death of Oscar Sage, the head of the White Magic Tower, was confirmed. As a result of the battle with demons, 132 6th-level mages of the White Tower, 19 7th-level mages, 2 8th-level mages, and the 9th-level mage, Oscar Sage, died. These historical records passed through the decades, and now the White Magic Tower still existed. A young man was sleeping in one of the rooms. A leaf fell on his palm, and he immediately woke up and jumped up, hitting the boy who came to visit him. He was startled by the unexpectedness, and the water spilled out of the bowl in his hands, after which he exclaimed in displeasure that he was completely soaked. He just wanted to change his towel. In his sleep, he behaves creepily and doesn't even show gratitude for his care. The guy was very surprised and wondered if he was sleeping, and in a defenseless state, he put his hand to his chest, and feeling his heartbeat, thought that he should have died. MC woke up in this guy's body, but he didn't understand it yet. And feeling this rhythmic beat, he was amazed. He clearly remembers how the High Priest pierced him with a sword. He wanted to ask what exactly happened, but Maxim burst into the room, knocking the door off its hinges, and he was furious when he learned that he woke up. Frank immediately rushed to calm him down and said that less than 5 minutes had passed since he opened his eyes. Maxim ordered him to step aside. He had already let him get away with it a couple of times, but now he would definitely make a man out of this idiot. Frank objected, because he was still sick, and MC, meanwhile, was perplexed. He asked them how he survived, and they looked at him in surprise. This only made Maxim even more angry, and he asked if he was also surprised that he was alive. MC noted that judging by his cape, he was a mage of the White Tower. Let him explain to him what was going on, and why was he addressing him so disrespectfully. Frank became very nervous, and his words only infuriated Maxim. He shouted, did he really need to explain everything to him? He really didn't understand anything. Let him show respect and beg for mercy. He swung his arm to hit him, and he thought, was he an assassin sent by demons? He used the wind shield and thought that if it instantly blocked his hand, it would hit his wrist, which would bend like a straw. He's a low-level weakling who doesn't think before acting, but when his hand touched the shield, it disappeared, which he didn't expect. He was surprised that his magic was so bad and looked at his hands in confusion. Maxim, meanwhile, calmed down after seeing his magic and praised him, saying that apparently he hadn't just been lazy until now. He left the room, and parting words said that he would postpone the punishment for embezzling the research fund for now. Let him focus on recovery. Frank said goodbye to him, then turned to MC and asked, was he completely crazy? He was in shock. How long had he slept? If the windshield disappeared as soon as he set it up? Frank walked to the other side of the room and said that he knew what kind of character Maxim had, but he had gone a bit too far. He wasn't listening at all, clenching his fists and thinking that the mana circles, quantity, and purity were at their lowest levels. Was this really his body? What happened to him? He excitedly asked what day it was, and Frank, startled by his sudden question, told him that it was September 21st and that he had been unconscious. MC asked, so he had slept for 5 months? The guy closed the window and told him that it had been a day at most, and Frank, realizing that he wouldn't get a proper answer from him, asked him to call Lloyd, and if he wasn't there, then Juliet or Shasha. Let them tell him what happened. Frank was surprised and thought, is he pretending? Has he really lost his memory? He told him to forget about the traitors. And why does he call the head of the tower so informally? MC didn't understand which traitors he was talking about and asked, he forgot about that too? Was this a side effect? Lloyd Schultz renounced the White Tower and became a disciple of the Red Tower, and Juliet Dominic stole a high-class magic book and fled. MC was indignant and asked in a displeased tone, how dare he utter such nonsense? Frank stared at him in shock and thought in surprise. Not a muscle on his face moved, so he wasn't lying? He asked. So Shasha is the head of the magic tower? The guy added that she was incredible, and he wondered how a 5-year-old could become head. Frank tiredly ruffled his hair and asked, he's also lost 20 years? MC sighed heavily and thought that he had a wild imagination, but he wouldn't be angry with the young man, even though he presented this fiction very convincingly. Frank moved away from the window, and when he saw his reflection, he shuddered. It wasn't him. At first, he thought it was someone else and touched his face, and when the reflection repeated itself, he mentally exclaimed, who is this? Time passed, he got used to it a little, and now he looked at the city streets and couldn't believe it, even though he saw everything with his own eyes. It turns out that 20 years have passed since his death. Everything has changed a lot. Are these glowing things called lanterns? And cars drive here, all thanks to the magical engineering revolution. He smiled and thought that they would like that. When the world collapsed, only those who renounced everything remained. He decided to stop indulging in memories, and having made the window mirrored, began to summarize everything he learned about the owner of this body. Oscar Crushen was accepted into the White Tower at the age of 10. Now he is 20. He's a first-level mage from a noble fallen house, but he is simply a terrible mage. Having only reached level 1 at 20, he apparently decided to speed things up by embezzling research funds to buy an illegal elixir. He lost consciousness after taking it. If he had succeeded, his mana would have increased several times over, but if he had failed, he was risking his life, which is why the potion was illegal. Frank said he was unconscious for a whole day. But to be honest, the other guy ultimately died from the mana surge. He suddenly felt a flash in his chest. It was mana, but it was too much for a level 1, which surprised him. Most mana is pure and hasn't yet been refined, meaning the elixir did have an effect. He noticed a black liquid appear in the mana's core. It flowed through the vessel in his hand to the tip of his finger and came out. The accumulated black drop fell to the floor and burned through it, and MC realized it was poison. He looked at his hand and began to wonder why there was poison in this body, and then smirked. He began to guess what was going on. Firstly, this elixir wasn't a fake, it was real, and such a thing is usually unobtainable, even at a high price. The problem is that Oscar Crushen didn't know it contained poison. Considering how much poison remained and the time he lost consciousness, it's clear the cause of death wasn't the mana surge, but poisoning. The poison class is too high to waste it on a first-level mage. If someone other than him had seen it, they would have had a hard time finding any traces. He clenched his fist and stared thoughtfully into space, then rose from his chair and thought that he didn't know who had decided to play with his soul. But in the end, he was given the second chance he had been thinking about before his death. He took the empty elixir bottle and thought that this selfish life, for the sake of his people, was a pretty good start. He glanced at the reflection on the bottle with a smile, and told Oscar that he would avenge him as a token of gratitude for his body. Time passed. Somewhere on the outskirts of Siren, a guy came to his boss and said, "Hey, there's news from the shop." The man ordered him to call him boss. How many times did he have to repeat this? The guy nervously apologized to him and got down to business. The shop was completely destroyed inside. Some magician had done it. His boss, enraged, put the bottle of alcohol on the table and exclaimed, "Who dared do this?" He answered that he wasn't sure. The magician asked who sold him that elixir. Could it really be Oscar Crushen? The man said it was impossible. Oscar was a mage only in theory. Besides, how could someone on the verge of death defeat their guys? His subordinate became worried, wondering if the White Tower had decided to investigate this matter. The boss asked if he had forgotten who exactly had asked them to deal with Oscar. He was wearing a White Tower ring, meaning a local mage wanted him dead. Someone entered their room and said that wasn't a fact. What kind of idiot would you have to be not to hide your origin? They both immediately turned around in fear, hearing an unfamiliar voice. It turned out to be Oscar. He had snuck up to them through the balcony, drawn there by the faint scent emanating from the vial. After examining the building, he realized that more people were involved in this matter than he had thought. The man stared at him in shock and asked if he really had smashed the shop. He went into the room and confirmed it, after which he asked them to continue their conversation. He was very interested. The man chuckled and said he planned to let him go if he pretended he hadn't heard anything. He ordered his subordinate to kill him, and the man immediately drew his sword from its sheath and enthusiastically rushed to the attack. Oscar said that since they were playing such games, he wouldn't hold back either. With a wave of his hand, he cast a wind cutter spell, and a stream of wind enveloped the guy's body. The wind wrapped around his neck, squeezing it, and blood spurted from the wound. He quickly finished the guy off and clicked his tongue in displeasure, thinking that he couldn't even believe his head had flown off. It reminded him of the high priest's head. The guy's boss jumped up in alarm, calling him a scumbag, and then pulled out a revolver and fired several bullets into him, trying to avenge his comrade. Oscar glanced at the bullets with a smile and remarked that it was quite interesting. In an instant, he erected a shield in front of himself, and after carefully examining the bullet up close, said that he did not feel mana. What then gave off so much power? The man exclaimed in surprise, how he was able to stop the bullets, and now Oscar knew why it was called. With a slight wave of his palm, he returned the bullets to the man, and they pierced his shoulder, side, and leg. Because of such wounds, he immediately fell to the floor, and MC approached him, saying that his subordinates would not be coming here anytime soon. He blocked all outgoing sound. The man exclaimed that this was impossible. How could a pathetic first-level mage use a first-level silence spell? Oscar sat down on the couch and put his legs on the man, saying that that was not entirely true. He used sound capture, which simply does not allow him to leave this room. Now he wants to hear answers to his questions. Who ordered them to harm him? The man stated that he would not tell him anything, but he was immediately hit in the face by his boot. He asked with a cold expression, "Is pride more important to him than life?" That's not bad. He pressed on his face and cast a spell that immediately made him twitch in pain and scream. He channeled wind into his body, so it should feel like 1,000 needles were piercing him. He said he didn't like torture because it made too much noise, and ordered him to speak. Choking and crying in pain, the man touched his boot and begged him for mercy, promising that he would tell him everything. He immediately deactivated the spell and ordered him to tell him everything he knew about his patron. He caught his breath and told him that he had given them the elixir and money. He told them to sell it to him cheap. Refusing was not an option. Oscar asked about his appearance, and he described him. His face was covered by a hood, and he definitely had the White Tower ring on his finger. Oscar sighed, thinking that it was probably a trick to confuse the guy, and told him to continue. The man excitedly exclaimed that he had an unusual odor. He smelled of something fresh and purely minty. That's all he knows. Oscar decided to commit this to memory and asked how he planned to clean up the aftermath of his murder. He answered that the White Tower was currently occupied by the exit from the 4 magic towers, so he doubted a real investigation would have begun. Oscar was confused by his words and asked what he was talking about. The man asked, "Doesn't he know that?" He answered that he had forgotten everything after drinking the elixir, and he sighed heavily, saying that he would let him look through the documents. He crawled to a nearby chest of drawers, rummaged around there for a few seconds, and then handed him 3 folders with documents. He decided to start with the White Tower and read everything that was there. April 28th will be considered the White Night, as it was the day the High Priest died. The Emperor commemorated Oscar Sage's sacrifice by granting the tower enormous benefits and exempting it from taxes for 30 years. However, of all the towers, it was the White Tower that had produced the worst results in the last year. The White Tower, having lost everything 20 years ago, has not recovered since. At this year's White Night Festival, the imperial family made a significant announcement that experts had identified the lack of advanced magic as the biggest problem. He wondered what it meant that the White Tower lacked advanced magic. He remembered giving Edna documents to prevent such an outcome, and yet it had happened. He decided to look into this matter separately. For now, he was only interested in the fact that the White Tower had produced the worst results. He asked the man to tell him what businesses the 4 main towers were currently engaged in, and the man told him everything. The Yellow Tower in the east controls lightning and ushered in a great era of magical engineering, contributing to the creation of such revolutionary things as street lamps and automobiles. The Blue Tower in the south contributed to drinking water, agriculture, and potions. The Red Tower in the hellish deserts of the west joined the ranks of the militants and helps with monster-slaying missions. He asked about the White Tower, and he answered that it was engaged in delivery. He was so surprised that at first he couldn't even believe his ears. He grabbed his head and clarified, "Does the tower engage in something like delivery?" He confirmed this and added that thanks to its post office and wind riders, the White Tower has greatly succeeded in the fast and safe delivery of items. Oscar wondered what wind riders were. The mages of the White Tower fly high in the skies and rule them. This is considered a symbol of freedom and courage. That's why they are compared to dragons and eagles. His face darkened and he angrily asked who exactly started this ridiculous business. The man nervously answered that, as far as he knew, it was the current head of the tower, and Oscar remained silent. That is, it was his own apprentice. He sighed heavily and asked, "What about drinking water and agriculture? Aren't potions the biggest source of income for the Magic Tower? Why is the Blue Tower doing this?" He answered that the Blue Tower was different. It practically had a monopoly on the potion market, and he thought that 20 years ago, it was the White Tower that was the largest supplier. Although, if the methods for creating potions burned out, then everything is understandable. The man told him that the drinking water and agriculture business sells clean water at an inflated price and sends it to places where there is a drought. MC raised an eyebrow in confusion and asked why people need to buy clean water. He replied that it had become fashionable among the rich lately, and he, with a disgruntled sigh, called them idiots, and noted that they had earned a little extra money and were now doing nonsense. You could drink water from a well. The man laughed nervously, and he, returning to the documents, thought that the White Tower was inferior to the others in terms of income. Well, it was true that the level of business of the other towers was several times higher. Next year's White Night Festival is their last chance to prove their worth. The problem is, there are only 7 months left. At that moment, the man felt really bad and called out to Oscar, and he thought, is he dying of pain shock? Has he lost too much blood? His information turned out to be very useful. Maybe he should help him? He decided to read the ledger and learned that they are engaged in arson, assaults on people, illegal loans, extortion, and even requests for murder. He was very surprised by such a list of crimes and decided not to save him. Having grabbed the documents, he headed to the balcony and said that he was trash. The man called out to him excitedly, asking him to stop, but he ignored him and jumped off the balcony before leaving. Finally, he wished him to be a good person in the next life. Closer to dawn, he returned to the White Tower, and entering his room, he sighed heavily from fatigue. Throwing the documents on the table, he sat down in a chair and thought that he couldn't believe that a couple of spells had exhausted him. What was wrong with his body? Would he be able to use that very magic in his current state? The magic that made him the greatest mage in history. He tried to use the wind reserve, but it simply dissipated, and he thought with annoyance that it looked like he wouldn't be able to do it for now. First, he needed to fully understand the state of his body, and he decided to start with a magical scan. After casting the spell on himself, he thought he would learn more about this matter from the documents than from Frank. Although he did share some information, his memories are mixed. It is crucial to learn everything about Oscar Crucian to save his body. He read all the information about him in the document. He is the heir to the Duke of Crucian, the only survivor of a terrible fire in the mansion. His genius in the world of magic was recognized early. Expectations were so high that they fought over him to claim it for themselves. He studied for 6 years at the Imperial Academy in the Faculty of Magic and received only the best grades. Thanks to his published dissertation, he was able to prove that he was an undeniable genius. MC wondered why he was only level 1 then, and then he came across the following line. If only he did not have mana deficiency syndrome, he would have become the greatest mage of his generation. Upon learning this, he was very surprised and thought that if this was true, then his only level was explainable. He understood magic better than anyone else, but he couldn't use it. At that moment, the magical scan was completed, and he looked at the magic ball that appeared in front of him. The scan result was confirmed, the ball burst, and a screen with all the information appeared in its place. Seeing what was written there, MC was very surprised. In fact, he didn't have mana deficiency syndrome. Most likely, someone sealed his mana circle. Mana deficiency syndrome, as the name suggests, is a condition in which mana cannot circulate through the body or accumulate. A mage can establish up to 20 physical circles on top of his own, which affects his level. Even if he trains all his life, he won't even reach the 3rd level. With Oscar, things are different. His physical circles aren't curved from birth. Rather, someone deliberately connected them. If this guy really was a genius, then he knew he didn't have this disease. He walked over to the shelf and, taking a few books, thought it was a pity he didn't keep a diary. According to Frank, he was an alcoholic, but what if he became like this on purpose? He knew someone had blocked his mana and wanted to kill him, so he was acting like this on purpose. If so, then it's now clear why he decided to use the elixir. In a situation where no one could be trusted, he had to try to break the shackles himself. He placed several books on the table and thought that all he had to do was figure out where all the clues led, and he could do it. He noticed a book with many bookmarks. It described a different interpretation of the basics of magic. When he opened the book, he found numerous notes on the pages and was very surprised. The previous owner of the body wrote that the trajectory of the wind cutter was too boring and could be supplemented. The wind shield belongs to the defensive type of magic and does not have a wide range of applications, but an advanced windshield can be used offensively. Modern weapons are ideal for reinterpreting the magic of the White Tower, using the principle of a circulating bullet. He thought the principle of the advanced windshield described here was similar to how he used it. It's completely different from the principle of a simple defensive ability. In addition, he described how to use it in various situations, and there are also a few basic spells that he came up with himself. Oscar couldn't use magic, but he performed all these experiments in his mind. Now it's clear why he was called a genius. They are similar when it comes to theory. In addition, judging by the book alone, he can say that he hasn't given up on magic. He worked harder than anyone else. His passion screams out a love for magic. On the first page of the book, Oscar left a message that he hoped this book would direct even the slightest wind towards the White Tower. From a mage about to take on his greatest challenge. After reading the signature, MC realized that he knew everything, but he had to act alone. Oscar Krusian, a young mage forced to be weak, but not by cruel fate, wandered alone along his path. He put his book aside and sat down on the sofa, swearing on his name, the 17th head of the magic tower, that he would untie the knot that wouldn't let him. He would also make those who broke his wings pay. After a while, he opened his eyes and realized he was in a greenhouse. He remembered falling asleep from exhaustion while trying to untie the knot on the physical circle. Suddenly, he heard the voices of his students, and he saw himself and the children gathered nearby in the past. Oscar told them to sit down and invited them to begin today's lesson. MC immediately understood why he was seeing all this. It was because of that dream. The Lord of Nightmares from the demon world had cursed him. Now, every time he falls asleep, he remembers the past. To be honest, he expected the curse to lift, since he had moved to another body, but it seemed to be connected to the soul, not the physical body. But he was lucky. There was nothing to spoil the dream about his students. Everything was calm with them. Oscar asked the children what he had said they would study today. Lloyd, a 9-year-old boy, reminded him that he had to explain the magic system to them. Knights and mages divided it into 4 categories, known as the 4 types of magic. Oscar confirmed this and added that magic only looks the same, but in fact there are 4 types: enhancement, acceleration, balance, and special types. He asked if the White Tower adheres to balance. He confirmed this and said that wind magic is best for balance. Shasha, a 5-year-old girl, asked if each tower has its own preference in the type of magic. Oscar confirmed this and said that different types of magic have different properties. The Yellow Tower considers speed the most important, so it uses acceleration magic, while the Red Tower worships fire, so it adheres to enhancement. The Blue and White Towers are in balance. Juliet, his 7-year-old apprentice, happily raised his hand and said he wanted to master acceleration-type magic. He was irritated by its slowness. Oscar smiled and said that, unfortunately, one cannot choose. Everything is given at birth. Shasha asked how they could find out what they were born with, and he, drawing a sign in the grass, said it was easier than it seemed. Let her extend her index finger and try using this spell. She looked at the magic formula and, puzzled, said that she had never seen this before, so she wouldn't be able to do it right away. He advised her to take her time, and she decided to give it a try. A magical flow appeared at the tip of her finger, and she was glad that she was getting something. He told her that it wasn't fast or deadly, but harmonious, so she was a balanced type. She asked if it was the same as his. He confirmed it, and she smiled happily, saying that she liked it, and Juliet decided to try it too. Just like he wanted, he had an acceleration type, which made him very happy, and then it was Lloyd's turn. A beautiful flower appeared on the tip of his finger. He had a special type of magic, but the boy wasn't particularly happy about it. He asked if it could be changed, and his teacher said that special types of magic are very rare and are found in only 0.2% of mages. Why should he change it? Although he can't. He answered him upset that he liked the balance he had, and he laughed, asking, then what should they do? He was going to give him private lessons, but now he'll have to figure out how to change his magic type. Lloyd was happy to hear that he'd have private lessons with a teacher, but he didn't show it. Oscar smiled and said that it was difficult for mages with a special type to improve without proper training, and the boy said that he'd decided that a special type of magic wasn't so bad, but he had to promise to have as many private lessons as possible. Oscar took his little finger, promising him this, and MC, meanwhile, thought with a smile that he was such a brat. They called him the Promise Man. No matter how much of an adult he wanted to be, he was still a child after all. He began to wake up, and these memories quickly faded, after which he opened his eyes and an announcement came over the loudspeaker that the mage Oscar Krusian needed to go to office 4202. He stood up, wondering how long he'd slept, then went to the office and grabbed all the documents with him. After exiting the elevator, he thought that there were 8 physical rings left. He had unlocked 12 out of 20. During this time, he had received the 2nd circle of mana and was now at level 2. He knocked on the office door and, hearing permission, went inside and thought that he never imagined that the day would come when he would be happy with level 2. Inside the office sat Maxim Bisk, the elder of the tower. He asked how he was feeling. Frank said that his memories were returning. He came closer to his desk and told him that it was true, and then looked closely at his face. He used to be younger than him. Now he was 45 years old. He got to the tower many years after him, and now he is younger than him. He is an honest and hardworking man. He knew that a bright future awaits him. He followed him everywhere and called him elder, and then the head of the magic tower, which touched him. Now he's over 40. He's worked hard, and his magic is so vast that it affects aging. These thoughts made him smile, and Maxim asked with displeasure, "What's so funny?" He was informed that the boss and current head of the Gordon family was killed. Does he know anything about this? MC's face immediately became serious, and he told him that he knew nothing about it. However, he was sure that it didn't just happen. After all, he was the one who tried to kill him. His words surprised the elder, and he handed him the documents and a bag of coins, saying that the elixir was poisoned, and here was the reward and a mention of the order for his murder in the ledger. He asked, So, he ended up in the infirmary because he was almost killed? He confirmed this and added that he came to talk to him, but they tried to kill him again. While Maxim was checking the ledger, his face became increasingly surprised, after which he looked at the money and said that since it remained, it seemed to be true. Oscar said the book described a contract killing, and Maxim understood everything. He would close the case since it was self-defense on his part, and MC said he would be grateful for that. Could he ask for a personal favor? He would like to meet with the Tower Master. Maxim was slightly surprised, since he expected something different, and said that there was nothing complicated about it, since they often talked about magic. However, he would have to wait 6 months. He was surprised and asked why, thinking that the White Night Festival would have already begun by then. Maxim told him that she was on a business trip, carrying out an important order, and he excitedly asked why the Tower Master was dealing with such a trifle. But he immediately found the answer. It's all because the Supreme Mage is absent. The case is so important that the Tower Master has personally handled it. He apologized to him for his rudeness and asked what level the Tower Master was now, and he answered that she was a 7th level Supreme Mage. He felt uneasy and thought that at her age, he had been a 9th. Shasha is talented. She should already be level 8. Maxim said the report stated that the transverse incision on her body was flawless. Had he practiced magical strikes before? He replied that all his training took place in his head, and since the elder had no more questions, he decided to let him go. When he left his office, he saw the vice chief in the doorway and, surprised, asked what brought him there. Hummel Grimwiz smiled and said that he came here to tell him not to be harsh with this child, but it seemed he was too late. Maxim said that if he caused trouble, he would have to scold him, and Hummel pointed out that he was right. He was the one who brought him, so he should worry. Maxim remembered how he created a windshield, and thought that although it was basic magic, it was impossible to master it so well in just 1 or 2 days of hard training. He was sure he had been working hard in a secret place. He smiled and said that this Oscar seemed to have trained more than he thought. Hamel said he was glad and invited him to go to the elders' meeting. Fidelina was already waiting for them. Meanwhile, MC went to the 10th floor, where the greenhouse was. In a dream, he saw his students, so he wanted to look there. But it turned out to be much more deserted here. Noticing him, the man working here approached him and asked if he was young Master Oscar. He asked who he was, and the old man introduced himself. He was Welter. He watches over the rooms in the magic tower. It seemed the rumors about him losing his memory were true. They sometimes talked. MC asked in surprise how far the rumor about him had spread. The old man laughed and asked why he called him young master, and he answered that he had worked here under the former head of the magic tower. His name was also Oscar. Hearing this, he was slightly surprised and said with a smile that it was a good way to distinguish them. He would remember that. Could he continue to be his companion for conversation? Walter smiled and thanked him for the offer, but it would not be easy, since he would soon be leaving the tower. MC was slightly upset and asked where he would go, and he said that he had been working here for 40 years. He had outlived 3 heads of the tower. His colleagues were constantly changing, and he was the only one left in this department. The reason he had lasted so long here was because the former head, Oscar Sage, said during the appointment ceremony. He said that they needed everyone who lived in this tower, so let them be proud to be a part of it. MC felt a little awkward and coughed into his fist, and the old man said with a smile that it sounded funny. But from that moment on, he worked believing that he was part of the White Tower. He told him that there was nothing funny about it, and he, thanking him, said that this was exactly why he was leaving. MC didn't understand what he was talking about, and he said that, as far as he knew, the White Tower was going through hard times, especially with renovations to the premises. Funding isn't what it used to be. Next month will mark 40 years since he's been working here. MC asked regretfully, "Is it about the Long Service Award?" All members of the White Tower, with the exception of mages, receive long service medals in their 20th and 40th years of service. Those who work here for 40 years will receive 200,000 bells, which is enough to buy a house in the largest cities. Walter said that the White Tower currently doesn't have the funds to pay out that kind of money. To pay him that much, many people would have to be left with nothing, which would lead to new debts. He can't agree to this. No matter what anyone says, this place is his second home. Oscar became nervous. He didn't know things were so bad. It seemed to him that the Blue Tower was committing lawlessness for money. But who was he to judge their actions? The Blue Tower managed to get rich, and that's why it is now the best in history, while he only has titles. He clenched his fists until they bled and thought that war hero, savior of humanity, noble titles, but they mean nothing if they can't even pay for the work of those who worked for the good of the tower for decades. The old man's worried voice pulled him out of his thoughts. He took his hand and looked worriedly at the blood, asking why he clenched his fists so tightly. MC asked when he planned to leave, and he, having bandaged his palm, said that he would leave in 2 weeks. After that, He advised him to go to the infirmary and ask for medicine, and he said with a gloomy expression that he hoped he would continue to be his companion for conversation. Walter wanted to remind him that he was leaving, but he said he didn't have to. He looked at him with a confident gaze and declared that he would definitely cope. There was a way out. He would earn a ton of money so that something like this would never happen again. After that, he went to his room and, remembering how confidently he had said this, thought about how he would now implement all of this. So far, the only options he could think of were research papers, lectures, and fulfilling orders. But the problem was that they wouldn't be paid right away. And besides, he was only at level 2. He needed a business that would bring in a lot of money. Most likely, potions were the only option. He decided to read the newspaper, and when his gaze fell on the headline, he leaned forward in surprise. Meanwhile, in the tower's vice-head's chambers, Fidelina was indignant. She exclaimed that she wouldn't remain silent this time, because he was a thief. Maxim said that was wrong, but she didn't let him finish and angrily asked what "but" meant. Since she was responsible for finances, she was simply furious now. Maxim said that the culprit would think about his behavior, and she exclaimed, "Will he just let him go? Stealing is a habit that will only get worse." He sighed and told her not to worry about it. There was nothing left to steal in their tower. His words made her even more angry, after which she came closer to him and said that he snapped at her every remark. Let him just isolate him. He refused and exclaimed, "What's the point of sending a first-level mage to solitary training?" The vice-head, meanwhile, sipped his tea and thought, is this really a conversation between two elders who, between them, will soon turn 100 years old? He said that Elder Maxim was right in pointing out that training alone was unnecessary. For him, it would simply be torture. Fidelina wanted to object, and he said that it would be better if he repaid 3 times what he had stolen. She didn't like this proposal, since it was not enough, and the vice chief suggested they move on to another topic. She sighed and said that they were very short on money, so she thought they would have to make a decision soon. She returned to the sofa and said that the tower was full of unused rooms. If they sold the potion-making equipment, the proceeds would be enough for 3 months, otherwise they would simply have to close. Hamel said that he could not approve of this. This was a magic tower. Here mages learn their craft and share their knowledge. Fresh air does not enter a closed room. They cannot sell their future to satisfy their immediate hunger. She asked discontentedly if they even had a future. They had been waiting for 20 years already. Maxim said her name with displeasure, and Fidelina told the vice president that he would have to accept it. Even if there were geniuses capable of saving their tower, they wouldn't turn to them. Hummel glanced at his reflection in his tea. He was about to say something, but there was a knock at the door. Fidelina turned around with displeasure and asked who was there. They were actually having a meeting. The vice president allowed the man to enter, and Oscar appeared in the doorway. He greeted them with a smile, then went inside and told the vice president that he had a proposal. He was asking permission to open a business. Hearing this, Fidelina became indignant and exclaimed that he was a funny guy. Had he already forgotten how he appropriated a research fund a few days ago? And now he wanted to open a business? She continued to be indignant, but he ignored her and told Hamel that while rereading old newspapers, he came across an article saying that the Vince estate had to close due to a terrible flu outbreak. Hamel took the newspaper and said that he had read about it too. They said it was Cadena flu, and if that was true, then it was terrible. There was no cure for it now. In the past, the White Tower had invented a vaccine and the problem disappeared, but its recipe was lost 20 years ago. MC added that even the Blue Tower, which specializes in potions, couldn't stop it. That's what he wanted to do. The old man looked slightly surprised and declared that he wanted to sell the Cadena flu vaccine. That's exactly what the White Tower had a monopoly on in the past, and he intended to reclaim it. They were slightly surprised by his words, and Fidelina sighed in irritation, saying that there was no point in even listening to him. Magic towers and pharmaceutical labs invested tons of money and effort, but in 20 years, they couldn't replicate the vaccine. And he, a 20-year-old boy, thinks he can do it? He turned to her and pointed out that they really hadn't managed to do it, and he really was 20 years old, but he was a genius. The look on his face made her even angrier, and she screamed, "Is he kidding me? He took 723,000 bells from the last 17 research payments, and then pocketed another 25,000 for a miraculous illegal elixir. Does he even understand that a simple farmer earns 20,000 a year after taxes? And now he calls himself a genius? He has no idea how money works because he was born into a rich family." Hamel didn't let her finish and said that Oscar had come to officially offer an investment opportunity as a magician of the White Tower. He knew she was responsible for the finances, but there was no need to be rude. She immediately calmed down and lowered her gaze, apologizing to him, and MC thought that all this time he had been wondering why she disliked him. Now everything fell into place. He hadn't done anything valuable in the past 2 years. However, he was different from the previous owner of the body. He turned back to the vice chief and said that he was confident in his idea, so he asked that it be taken into account. The old man asked if there was a reason why he believed he could handle it, and he asked him to look at the second page of the newspaper. The Archbishop of the El Terra order suddenly changed plans during the pilgrimage. He was going to stop in Siren for a month to pray for a blessing. Isn't that strange? Until now, They only stayed for a month in big cities. The El Terra Order worships Mother of Earth, Terra. There are 7 archbishops in the order. They should be more assertive and worthy of the others, since they are the leaders. But in reality, they are far from that. To become a cardinal, the second most powerful man in the order, you need a huge sum of money for your election campaign. You're allowed to stay at the estate for a month during the pilgrimage. But that's only if you meet with aristocrats and merchants and receive money from them. As for Siren, it was once a great city, but it's getting smaller and smaller. Maxim noted that he was right. He thought it was about praying for a blessing. Oscar said that only made it stranger. What kind of prayer is this for the blessing of barren land? He spun the globe and said that as far as they knew, the route for the order members' pilgrimage had been chosen in advance. Siren, Mosque, Melbourne, and Greenwale. He stopped the globes and pointed at Vince, saying that they would then head there. The Archbishop spent a whole month in Knox before arriving in Siren. If he was not mistaken, he would also stay for a month in Mosque, as in the other cities. Isn't it obvious he's trying to postpone the trip to Vince? When he said this, they began to guess everything. If an accident occurs during the pilgrimage, the Order's people will say that the Archbishop angered the goddess of the earth. That's literally a death sentence for a man trying to become a cardinal. Maxim asked, so Archbishop Baldwin knows that Cadena flu is in Vince and is waiting for the disease to subside? MC confirmed this, and Fidelina noted that he analyzes the situation well, which is to be expected from a mage in theory. And yet, this is just an assumption. The vice principal said he understood what he was talking about, and MC was already overjoyed. But the old man said that they still won't be able to officially sponsor him. MC immediately became worried, and Hamill, opening a desk drawer, said that if did that, they simply wouldn't be able to finance other mages. He wanted to object, but at that moment he took an envelope out of his desk drawer and said with a smile that he could invest his personal money in his business. Fidelina was indignant upon hearing this, and he told her that everything was fine. He only had 30,000. Would that be enough? Oscar thought for a moment, and when he realized that this was not enough, he became very nervous. This money was nowhere near enough. After that, he went to the potion room and tiredly clutched his head. Pulling himself together, he began to examine the equipment and thought that he would have to come up with another plan. With the money he had, he would create a vaccine sample and receive money from the Archbishop, who was currently in great trouble because of the flu. He glanced at Frank, who was carrying boxes of ingredients, and noticed that he was working hard. After that, he put on his protective glasses and thought that it was most profitable to extort money from someone who was desperate. Filled with enthusiasm, he decided to start preparing the potion. In the end, he succeeded. He looked mesmerized at the boiling red liquid in the flask, then extinguished the burner and poured the potion into another container. He took off his protective glasses and looked at the result of his work with a smile, noting that it was quite good. His skill did not disappear. He made an energy drink for a warm-up, but he worried in vain. At that moment, Frank entered the room, dragging 3 bags of ingredients in his hands, and exclaimed that his back was about to fall off. MC noted that he worked hard and asked if he got all the missing herbs. He sat down from fatigue and handed him the check, telling him to look at it for himself. By the way, does he have anything to drink? Otherwise, he's going to die. He told him that he had a full recovery potion, and he exclaimed in surprise that it was very expensive. Of course, he didn't refuse it, and Oscar, taking the check, handed him the elixir. He thanked him and drank it, then noted with a smile that it was tasty and warm. Did he prepare this? He confirmed it, and checking the herbs, noted that everything was in perfect condition. Frank said with a proud smile that he chose the best, which made the seller very angry. MC smiled and said that with such a keen eye, he should have become a merchant, not a magician. He answered that this is what he wanted to do when the tower collapsed, but he didn't let him finish and immediately hit him on the forehead, causing him to cry out and ask why he did that. He apologized, saying that he couldn't resist, he just spoke badly about the tower. Frank asked what he should do now. Elder Fidelina told him to help him. It would be difficult alone. He smiled and thought that she had appeared evil in front of him, but in reality she was kind. He asked him to move some of these ingredients for now, after which he took 2 sacks and decided that he didn't need an assistant. Although Oscar Jr. mentioned that now the White Tower is full of problem children who, although possessing outstanding talents, have shortcomings. If only they worked together, they would make a huge contribution to strengthening the tower. Could Frank Sirius really be one of them? There's reason to believe so, since he was highly praised by a very promising person. He was also interested in him. Now is the perfect time to test him. They placed bags of herbs by the table, and Frank remarked that while he was buying them, he realized they were all poisonous. Black gorge lilies, red camellias, ghost mushrooms, and merva leaves. MC said that just because they were poisonous doesn't mean they can't be used in medicine. He knows how to process them before use, right? He told him to put poisonous herbs in water and boil them for 12 hours to release all the poison. MC confirmed this and said that this method has a downside. Nutrients are also released. Does he know dishes like Yan Dynasty dumplings? He confirmed this and added that he even ate them. But why did he remember that? He told him that a steamer is used to prepare these dumplings. If this is used to detoxify the poison, most of it will remain inside. This way, 98% of the benefits will be extracted from these plants. The guy was very surprised and asked, So, a monopoly on the potion market is possible? He confirmed this, adding that this was the case before, and when steam began to come out of the steamer, Frank asked if the detoxification was complete. He answered him that they only softened the plants, which would simplify the detoxification that was about to begin. Opening the steamer, he used a drainage spell, collecting all the steam, and a thick purple cloud appeared in front of them. He told him to watch carefully. Now they would extract the poison from the steam. He separated the steam from the poison cloud and said that it no longer contained toxins. All that remained was to mix everything in the right proportions. He separated 23% of the red camellia and 47% of the merva leaves from the steam, and the flu remedy was ready. He showed him the elixir and asked if it was difficult, right? He suggested that he try it, and he stared at the vial in surprise, thinking about it. Easier said than done. He doesn't know how to use different spells at the same time yet, but he won't tell him about that. He asked the drainage spell first, right? He used it and Oscar noticed that his mana control was a little unstable, but not bad. He was doing better than he expected. However, that was all. He was stuck on the cloud of poison and couldn't take the next step. He asked what was wrong, and Oscar asked in response, was he making fun of him? He can't use spells at the same time. He must be level 4 or 5 if he can do that, and he's only level 3. MC offered to teach him this, and he asked in surprise, would he share the secret with him? He said that this technique is simple if you understand how it works. Let him just imagine how he creates sections in his brain. The left side of his brain uses spell A, and the right side uses spell B. He focused on forming the sections, after which the purple steam cleared and Oscar applauded him, congratulating him on his success. He mastered the simultaneous use of spells. Frank was very surprised and asked, is it that simple? Why did they hide this technique for so long? He thought it was incredibly difficult. MC said that it was all because they were greedy, and watching how he continued to work on the potion, he thought that they did not want to teach them the technique they worked on for free. It became a tradition. But on the bloody battlefield, such a tradition is just a hindrance. To survive, it is necessary to share techniques and reasoning every day. Now the White Tower needs interactive training and knowledge exchange. He looked at Frank, who was very happy with his success, and with a smile praised him, saying that he was quite talented. To be honest, he did not expect this from him on his first try. Frank told him that he explained everything clearly, and he said that he had previously thought he was angry with him. The guy didn't deny it, and awkwardly cleared his throat, then leaned over to the bag of herbs and said that there were still plenty of ingredients, so he would take care of them. MC grinned and said that he had a bigger steamer, so they could process everything at once. Several hours passed. 514 bottles of the potion were already ready, but Maxim suddenly burst into the room, saying that they had a problem. He showed MC a letter stating that the Blue Tower Pharmaceutical Company, Newtech, had arrived in Siren an hour ago. The supposed purpose of the visit was to meet with Archbishop Baldwin. He said that it looked like they were late, and Oscar, after reading the letter, thought that they had no intention of sitting idle. The elder became worried, because if the contract was signed with them, their flu cure would become useless. Frank was very upset, as they had put so much effort into creating the potion, and Maxim told him not to worry. Failures happen in life. MC said it wasn't over yet. If he remembered correctly, Cadena flu is considered a Class B disease, so there was still something they could do. Maxim turned to him excitedly and asked, is that true? He confirmed it and asked, does he fly faster than trains? Meanwhile, the Archbishop's eagerly awaited guests had arrived. Baldwin granted them entry, and 5th-level mage Moira Main and the managing director of the pharmaceutical company Newtech, Neil Brion, entered the room. They bowed their heads respectfully, saying, El Tia, their order's special greeting. The Archbishop invited them to sit, and they thanked him, after which he inquired about the progress of the flu cure production. The magician replied that everything was fine, and the man rejoiced, saying that this was to be expected from the Blue Tower. And when would they be finished? Moira replied that all that remained was to conduct clinical trials. Neil added that if the results were positive, they would receive permission from the Empire's Food and Drug Administration. The magician became nervous and said that, however, as far as he knew, clinical trials took more than 1 day or 2. Baldwin was very impatient and asked when they would launch production of the medicine, and he promised him that they would complete it in 6 months. Hearing this, he became very indignant and exclaimed that he would have to go to Vince in 4 months. The magician wanted to explain to him that this was their schedule, and another knock sounded at the door. The Archbishop shouted discontentedly, "Who else is there?" He was informed that another magician had arrived, and he ordered him to let him in, after which he sighed warily and asked why they didn't warn him that someone else would be with them. Moira said in confusion that only the 2 of them had arrived, and they all stared at the door in surprise, wondering who had come. Oscar entered the room and said that if he remembered, the correct greeting was El Chia. He greeted the Archbishop respectfully and introduced himself, saying that he had come to make him an offer. The people of the Blue Tower stared at him in surprise, and Baldwin asked why the White Tower mage had come. He answered that he was here about selling the Cadena flu cure, and he noted that he had arrived just in time. The 2 had come to discuss the same thing. MC asked, so he was late? He sighed and answered that that was not true at all. They were not ready yet. He said that he was glad to hear it. He could begin negotiations with the White Tower now. Moira indignantly pointed his finger at him and exclaimed that it was all a lie. The White Tower had neither the money nor the technology to develop a cure. Baldwin pointed out that he was right and asked if they really had it ready. He placed the box in front of him and asked if he would dare lie to the Archbishop of the El Terra Order. He opened it, and Baldwin, seeing a sample of the potion inside, was overjoyed and asked if the negotiations were successful. How much more, and when would they be able to make? Moira called out to him excitedly, and he asked irritably why he was yelling at him. It was their own fault for not preparing properly. He nervously said that they did not have permission from the Food and Drug Administration, and then he realized that the White Tower would not have had time to obtain it either. He turned to Oscar and asked, "Do they have permission?" He told him that they had nothing, and Moira grinned triumphantly, saying that he knew it. He turned to the Archbishop and said that the White Tower was in the same situation as them. They could begin mass production in factories across the continent as soon as they received permission. Let him also not forget that we were talking about the White Tower. Considering the Blue Tower's long history, he assures him that the remedy they were developing with a top pharmaceutical company was much more effective. MC didn't like his words. He said that it was fair, but it was interesting that he mentioned the Blue Tower's long history in front of a mage from the White Tower. Moira looked at him furiously, and releasing a threatening aura, ordered him to take it back. Oscar waved his aura away and asked, "Did he say something wrong? Which tower, according to the continent's history, was built first?" Moira asked, "Was he going to be petty over a difference of only 5 years?" He replied that the leaders of the Blue Tower had always wanted to close this 5-year gap. And so this gap could never be closed. Not in 1,000 years, not in 10,000. That's how history works. He must have forgotten what a monopoly the White Tower had on the potion market 20 years ago. He waved his hand and said that it was in the past. No one remembered it. Feeling a terrifying aura, he fell silent mid-sentence, and Oscar asked, "No one remembers the past? How did he see it?" The mage looked at him in surprise and wondered what that feeling was. A second-level mage couldn't have such an aura. Oscar was about to remind them of what had happened in the past, when the Archbishop's assistant burst into the room and apologized to them for interrupting their conversation. But he received an urgent call from Lord Vince. The Lord had called him to thank him for his immeasurable kindness. After all, it was he who had sent him the Cadena flu cure. Baldwin didn't understand what he was talking about, because he definitely didn't send him anything, and the Lord said that the Elder of the White Tower said that he sent it in secret, and he should be the one to thank. All the sick who took it were cured in a couple of hours. It's just a miracle. It's a true blessing of the goddess. Oscar grinned, and the Archbishop laughed, saying that he was glad to hear it. Were there any side effects? He answered that so far there were none. It's simply amazing. Can you tell him when the second batch will be available? He inquired of the Elder of the White Tower, but he said that he should ask the Archbishop all questions. Of course, he was not rushing him. Baldwin said that they would send the second batch as soon as it was ready. It wouldn't take long. Lord Vince thanked him and said goodbye, after which the Archbishop turned to Oscar and asked with a smile, was this his doing? He confirmed this and noted that everything seemed to have gone well, and Moira indignantly slammed his palm on the table, exclaiming that this was against administrative laws and that he needed to be punished. Oscar said that was not the case at all. Apparently, he had a poor understanding of the laws. Did he know anything about military laws? The mage told him not to change the subject and exclaimed, "What's the point of all this?" He sighed and thought that the last 20 years had been peaceful, and everyone must have forgotten everything. He reminded him that 20 years ago, the weapon that took most of the lives of people in the war against the demons was a pandemic. Even though mages were quickly developing treatments, the administration was unable to approve them. People simply didn't live long enough to see it, and therefore His Majesty supplemented Article 42, Paragraph 8. Treatment intended for those injured during the war is considered special and is not subject to the laws of the imperial administration. He exclaimed in response that there was no war now, and he explained that war is considered 3 types of situations. First, it's military action between one country and another. Second, it's a revolution. And last, it's a threat above Class B. Now the mage understood everything. Cadena flu is the only Class B threat, so there's no point in adhering to the laws. Moira didn't know what to say to this, and Neil turned to the Archbishop, excitedly saying that if the White Tower could handle it, then so could they. They would immediately send the developed treatment to Vince's estate. Baldwin noted with displeasure that it seemed they still hadn't figured out how things were. The rush ceased the moment the White Tower's treatments reached Vince. Besides, the local lord believes he's cooperating with the White Tower. He can't now go back on his word and say it was the Blue Tower. Neil was speechless with shock. To deter him, he promised to lower the price. Then the Archbishop, enraged, slammed his fist on the armrest and exclaimed, "How dare he say such a thing? Does he want to buy his image with money?" He said excitedly that he didn't mean that at all and ordered them to leave. He didn't want to hear anything more. Moira immediately got up from the sofa and headed for the exit, telling Oscar that he would pay for it. He wondered if every idiot had memorized a collection of villainous quotes, or what? Nothing had changed in 20 years. Before he left, he decided to mock him and said with a smile that he had already registered the patent for the treatment and the vaccine in the palace. Moira turned to him in surprise, and he said that if they wanted to sell their treatment, they would have to pay the White Tower tax, otherwise they would have to throw it away. The magician's face turned red with rage, and then he quickly left the room, while Neil respectfully said goodbye to the archbishop. He passed by Oscar, and he caught a whiff of him and turned to him in surprise. He remembered that the man had told him that he smelled unusual, like some fresh and clean minty aroma. Oscar stared in shock at the departing man, and when the door closed, he came to his senses. The archbishop laughed and told him to sit down. They could finally talk. He thanked him and sat down, and Baldwin said that it was better to agree on a price first. Blue Tower and New Tech were asking 2 million bells. Oscar smiled and said that if they wanted 2, he would only ask 5 million. This made the archbishop laugh nervously, but did not object. A few hours later, Oscar returned to the tower with a check for 10 million bells, leaving Fidelina in complete shock. Oscar smiled and shrugged, and she immediately rushed to hug him, exclaiming that she knew he could handle it. Maxim patted him on the shoulder and said he believed in him, and when the check reached Hamel, he asked what had happened. The archbishop wouldn't have given that much. He replied that it included additional fees. The vice priest asked what the money was needed for, and he replied that it was for advertising. The White Tower must officially announce that Archbishop Baldwin received a revelation predicting the flu outbreak, thanks to which they had time to produce a vaccine on short notice. He aims to become a cardinal next term, and receiving a revelation from Mother Earth will sound extremely favorable compared to other archbishops. He must have liked the idea, since he paid 10 million bells for a contract they were asking for, much less. In exchange, he promised that they would produce the vaccines within a week. Hamel said that was simply incredible. The disciplinary action required 3 times the reimbursement of the embezzled funds, and he had exceeded that by 400 times. At this point, they would consider the action complete. Any objections from anyone else? Fidelina happily said that she was completely fine with it, and Hamel told Oscar that if he needed support, he should let him know. The schedule would be tight. He said that it was necessary to gather mages of the 4th level or higher, and as many as possible. The vice chief promised to do this, and said that he would leave the final selection of volunteers to him. He turned to Elder Fidelina and asked her to make an announcement about the tower, and she happily asked what she needed to say. He smiled and said that the potion lab was looking for mages of the 4th level and higher. Those who agreed to participate would receive payments and would eat meat for every meal. A few hours later, a crowd of mages had gathered in the lab, all eager for meat and discussing whose meat it would be. Maybe pork or chicken. Frank entered the lab and noted with surprise that he never would have thought it would be so crowded, and his friend clapped his hands, attracting attention, and asked them to listen to him. But no one even looked at him. They continued discussing the reward among themselves, and then he snapped his fingers and cast a sound capture spell, causing them to hear a loud squeak, and immediately covered their ears. Oscar again asked for their attention, and said that the reason they were there was to produce a vaccine against Cadena flu. He needed their help. The mages looked at each other and asked mockingly, did he call them here? Why did their prodigy decide to ask them for help? And how did he intend to produce all this? Is this really another scam? Oscar was very surprised by this reaction and asked his friend if they didn't like him. He confirmed this and told him to think about what he had been doing so far. He was rude to everyone. He had spent the tower's funding, he had no scientific results, and on top of that, he drank alcohol constantly. Oscar smiled nervously and wondered, was he such a jerk? He thought he had tried at least somehow. Lena White approached him and asked if she could ask a few questions. The White Tower's potion-making methods had been lost long ago, so how would they produce medicine? He told her that he had restored them, and one of the mages asked in surprise, is that true? His friend told him to think about all the coins he had spent on alcohol, and Lena meanwhile asked if its effectiveness had been proven. He confirmed this and added that a contract with the Order had also been concluded, and she said that in that case, its value must be fabulous. If the development methods are leaked, meat snacks will be utter nonsense. Why does he trust them enough to share such precious information? He took out the list and said that he would be honest. He doesn't understand why they are still staying in the White Tower. Lena frowned and asked discontentedly, is this how someone asking for a favor should behave? It seems she has just wasted her time here. She headed for the exit and said that she doesn't know what their great genius meant by this, but no one present has to listen to such nasty words. Oscar said that he knows what each of them gave up for the White Tower. His words made her stop, and she turned to him in surprise. And he said that she is a 5th-level mage, 25 years old. Chasing her talent and prudence, 7 companies, including the Red Tower, tried to poach her, but she rejected them all. He looked at Herakdryan and said he was 26 years old and a 5th-level mage. The royal palace recognized his abilities in combat magic and offered him the position of royal mage, but he refused. Descartes Rhine, a 5th-level mage, 26 years old. The Imperial Academy offered him the position of instructor 4 times, but he refused. Sifia Rose, a 4th-level mage, 23 years old. The Golden Tower tried to recruit her because of her creative approach to alchemy, but she turned them down. All the others he didn't have time to name received similar offers. If he were offered something similar, he doesn't know if he could refuse, but none of them gave up the position. Lena asked, so the elders knew about their secret meetings. He confirmed it and said that they had no choice but to pretend they didn't know, as they wanted to avoid being burdened by it. The White Tower is currently experiencing the coldest winter of its life, and in this situation, although each of them could have escaped to a warmer place, they decided to remain in this freezing cold. If he can't trust such people, then who can he trust? He wiped away the tears that had welled up in his eyes, causing Frank to look at him strangely and say that if they themselves don't want it, then nothing can be done. They, low-level mages, will have to work until the last. His friend asked indignantly. He wasn't talking about him now, right? Oscar didn't answer his question and told him to hurry. Since only he and he were left, they needed to get to work right now. He put on his protective glasses with a sad and disappointed look, and Lena looked at him thoughtfully, then awkwardly coughed in her fist and approached him, asking if they just needed to put all this on. Huruk also approached them and asked why he thought they would have to do everything alone. Where should he begin? Sophia called the others, and Frank, surprised, told Oscar that he had convinced someone with his words. Maybe this was a dream? He noted that it was clearly a good dream, and before they got to work, he warned them that by meat, he did not mean pork. Disappointed sighs were heard in the lab. They thought they would be given some cheap meat, but when they heard that it would be beef, they were all very happy. In the end, vaccine production was successful, reaching 140% of the original goal. A week passed. Oscar came to the greenhouse as usual to read the newspaper and rest. He saw petals folded in the shape of a heart on the grass and thought, was this the work of that old man? Apparently, he was back. He was sure that the vice chief had found him and dragged him back by the scruff of the neck. He would need to see him. Sitting down on a chair, he opened the newspaper and read the news. The Vince territory declared the pandemic over 2 days after the distribution of the Cadena flu vaccine. Could this be a shining sign signaling the beginning of the White Tower's rebirth? A pebble thrown into the potion market caused great waves. Oscar Crushen has been nominated for this year's Peace Prize. The White Tower commented, "It all happened thanks to the goddess." Archbishop Baldwin's popularity among the people skyrocketed. He was delighted that everything was going according to plan, and Frank ran to him to share the good news. Orders for the vaccine are pouring in from all directions. He started jumping up and down with joy and asked, "Have you looked at the list yet? The Northern Territories, the Order, even the Imperial family have placed heaps of orders. Those 10 million bells are nothing compared to this." Oscar said, "If you want to live naturally, you'll get the vaccine. The pressing problems for now have been solved." Frank asked, disappointed. "The pressure will subside after a while, right?" He pretended to be surprised and exclaimed that he was smarter than he seemed at first glance. He realized that the demand would not last long. The guy looked at him with displeasure and asked, did he think he was an idiot? Once there is complete vaccination, who will need this vaccine? The next flu outbreak will happen for at least several decades. Oscar said that they should not worry about money. He developed a potion that will always be in demand. Frank was very happy and exclaimed, "So he restored more than just one formula? He had a plan all this time?" His eyes sparkled with delight. He asked if this could really be Star Tiers, which is only rumored. He answered him that the potions they will sell will be low and medium rank. The time has not yet come for Star Tiers. Star Tiers is the most famous restoration potion of the White Tower. It is said that its miraculous properties can bring the dead back to life. Star Tiers will cause an incredible stir in society upon its release. The development of this potion will attract hyenas, who will try to steal the production methods. This time he is safe, since he managed to use the Archbishop as cover. First, they need to raise the status of the White Tower. He told the guy that, since he brought it up, he should go and collect the ingredients they needed. He immediately became upset and said he shouldn't have mentioned it, and Oscar asked him to collect lantus leaves, pison stems, and Frank didn't let him finish and asked in surprise, "Do you need anything else?" Even the first 2 ingredients will be difficult to obtain. He didn't understand what he was talking about. "These are Siren's signature products." He replied that it was a long time ago. All the fields where they grew were ruined. MC was shocked by this news, and then they set off. Late in the evening, they arrived at the flower fields, and Frank, warily trudging behind him, exclaimed that he had completely lost his mind. Did they seriously have to come all this way here, just because he didn't believe him? Did they really have to walk to a place where even a carriage couldn't go? Oscar told him to hold on a little longer. They had already walked 10 miles, so they would be there soon. Frank looked at him in bewilderment, and asked why he was using units of measurement that had disappeared from use 18 years ago. Hearing this, MC was very surprised, and his friend exclaimed, "What was wrong with him lately? Distances have been measured in meters since the last war, and pounds have also been changed to grams. Did he reread old books or something while looking for potion recipes?" MC was in complete shock and thought, so they got rid of pounds too? With pounds, of course, it's more difficult to count. But that's precisely the fun of all these calculations. He prayed for the repose of the old units of measurement, and Frank said that he saw a house ahead. He approached and knocked on the door, loudly asking if anyone was inside, after which it creaked open, and a man appeared in the doorway. He asked, "Have they come all the way here?" He confirmed this, adding that the carriage had only taken them as far as the entrance, and Oscar, seeing cars rushing along the road, asked, "Who are they?" Not at all sparing the flower fields, the cars stopped near the house, and a rich man turned to the old man and asked if he had any plans to sell them his land today. The man opened the door wider and stepped outside, and the rich man asked if it was time for him to stop resisting. They were offering 10 times more than anyone else. He refused him, saying that he would not agree, even if he built him a castle out of mithril. And then the man said that they could only joke like this for the time being. Who cares that he's going to die here? This man is a businessman named Dever Powell, and his victim was a herbalist, Ivan. The old man told him that it was none of his business, and he said that he was trying for his own sake. Let him sell the land to them, and he would spend his last days in comfort. As soon as a factory opens nearby, these lands will lose value anyway. Ivan gave him a displeased look and told him not to make fun of him. As long as he's here, no one will give permission to build factories. Dever realized that he wouldn't be able to negotiate with him and told his guys to leave. Before getting into the car, he looked around and noticed that they had damaged several flower beds on the way here. So let him take that for the damage. He threw a wad of money on the ground and then drove away, damaging several more flower beds. When they had driven a fair distance, he turned to his subordinates and asked, "Those boys next to the old man wear white tower robes, right? What are those beggars doing here?" One of them suggested they came for herbs. Not long ago, those beggars made a ton of money on the vaccine. Devor didn't believe him and noticed that he was talking as if they had actually made something. He handed him a newspaper and said that the figures there were serious. Let him look at everything for himself. He read the newspaper for a few minutes, then hit his subordinate on the head with it and shouted in displeasure. Why did he only tell him this now? He began to nervously bite his nails and thought, what if the old man secures the White Tower's support? He could afford to hold off on selling for many more years. This couldn't be allowed. He was already barely managing the interest on the loan. He called out to his subordinate and asked if he remembered the mercenaries who had recently contacted them. They're hiring them immediately. He asked what specific job they were supposed to be hired for, and he asked, "Isn't it obvious?" The guy said he was officially appointed by the state, and his boss hit him over the head again, saying they'd just kill him and make it look like he was missing. As soon as the owner disappeared, the land would be put up for auction, and they'd buy it there. He calmed down a bit and thought it was a dirty business, but he also had people behind him. The guy asked, what if the White Tower's mages stayed there overnight, and he answered that they'd kill them if they got in the way. His subordinate became worried, because then there would be trouble. The 4 great towers would become interested in their affairs. And then there was Ivan, that old man. Dever asked, what bad could possibly happen? The influence of the 4 towers was a tale of long-forgotten times. The White Tower was practically in ruins anyway. Night fell, 2 mages went out into the field, and Frank, watching the stars, said that this old herbalist seemed like a good man. Evening came, and he allowed them to spend the night there, and even fed them. Oscar smiled and agreed with him, and remembered what had happened some time ago. When they met the herbalist, he offered them to stay with him until morning, since it would be dangerous to return in the dark. Frank felt a little awkward and asked if he was sure he was okay with that. He answered that he had obligations to the White Tower, which interested Oscar, and Frank asked who the man in the car was. Ivan told him that the madman's name was Devor Powell. He can make people disappear, even ready to kill, if only to get what he wants. 3 years ago, he madly started buying up all the land around, but nothing worked out with him. Many herbalists left Siren or disappeared without a trace, never to return. Frank was surprised and asked why he was going so far, and he replied that he wanted to turn this area into the continent's largest industrial zone. MC asked how he had managed to hold out for so long, and he replied that he couldn't touch a hair on his head, as it would only hurt him. He was a state-recognized master of herbal cultivation. Frank noted with surprise that this meant he was protected by the imperial family. Oscar said that if he sold the land, he could make a fortune, so why was he still here? Ivan said he was asking the obvious. The thing is, he loves this land. This is his home. He was born here, and he will die here. Remembering this, MC told Frank that he was a good person, and he added that even the way he ran inside the house, red with embarrassment, was a little cute. By the way, the stars shine so brightly here. He even felt envious. MC asked, what is there to be envious about? He smiled and told him that he was simply curious about what it was like to live such a vibrant life. Not that a genius like him understood him. Oscar looked at him quizzically and said that he himself was quite amazing, and he, not taking it seriously, thanked him. MC said that these were not empty words. He knew that he only said what he thought. Franks became embarrassed and quickly changed the topic to the stars, and MC thought that he did not even understand why Oscar Jr. decided to call him a problem child. He looked up at the sky and said that before, you could see the stars even from the center of Siren. In his mind, he added that now the night is illuminated by all these lanterns, and they are completely invisible. What was an inconvenience in the past now feels almost romantic. Frank said that it was so long ago, and he is also younger than him. Be that as it may, the herbalism tradition of Siren, can it really be revived? MC replied that he didn't think it was impossible. He'd need to talk to old man Ivan tomorrow morning to be sure. Suddenly, he felt something, stopped mid-sentence, and turned away. Frank became nervous and asked why he was so tense. Did he see a ghost or something? He replied that it wasn't a ghost, but people. 4 of them to be precise. The guy stood up and cautiously said that he didn't sense anyone, and Oscar thought he could sense mana quite well. and even he hadn't felt it. They clearly had no good intentions. He ordered him to get up. It looked like they had guests. Time passed, and the Jack gang's mercenaries were heading toward the herbalist's house. One of them, Max, asked his colleagues what was wrong with them. The last time he'd approached them with an offer to kill the old man, they'd refused. Devor Powell was so afraid of the consequences. His senior colleague asked, "Does it matter?" He was only following his employer's orders. Max reminded him that there was a price on their heads in the north. Didn't he think his behavior was a little passive? They reached the house, and the shooter ordered them to stop chatting. They needed to be on guard. They were told there might be mages there. The old man clarified, "They were from the White Tower, right?" That was good news. It would have been worse with any of the other great towers. Max said with a smile that he hoped they really were there. He had long wanted to fight a mage. He jingled his lockpicks and turned to the boss, asking if he should enter. He nodded, and inserting the lockpick into the keyhole, he thought the house was so quiet. The old man must have already fallen asleep. He went inside, and seeing someone sleeping under the blanket, took out his dagger and thought that this was too simple, even somehow boring. And without mages, that was very sad. When he looked more closely at the blanket, he was surprised. He immediately rushed to the exit, cursing loudly, and MC, pulling his hand out from under the blanket, thought he was too smart. Extending his index finger, he fired a wind bullet at him, piercing his head, after which he crawled out from under the blanket, and looking at his body, thought that this was not bad at all. Wind Bullet is one of the spells described in a different interpretation of the basics of magic by Oscar Jr. It is a combat spell based on rethinking the wind magic of the White Tower in accordance with the operating principle of a gun, faster than he expected. So now there are 3 left. He went outside and seeing only 2, was slightly surprised. The shooter asked him what happened to Max, and he answered with a grin that he fell asleep there. However, he thinks he will sleep for quite a long time, perhaps forever. The old man muttered that he was an idiot. After all, he had told him not to let his guard down, and the shooter asked Oscar to simply tell him where the herbalist was now. Then he wouldn't hold a grudge for Max's death. MC mentally noted that provocations didn't work with them. They avoided unnecessary battles. What professionalism. He suggested that they should still hold back some grudges, and the shooter ordered the old man to kill him since he really wanted blood. He immediately jumped up and headed towards Oscar, striking, but he erected a wind barrier in front of himself just in time, which deflected his weapon, and then rushed past him. The old man looked after him and chuckled, noting that it was not bad, and he smiled back. The old man raised his weapon and exclaimed that he didn't know about its unique ability. What a shame. While he was chatting, MC prepared his magic, and the old man split the weapon in 2 and pounced on him, shouting that he was finished. He immediately created another wind bullet and said that it was cooler than he expected. It fired at 2 of his blades at once, and he, trying to hold back these bullets, nervously thought that this could not be. It caught him off guard, but he did not lose his composure and instead fired a sophisticated shot. His blades could not withstand the onslaught of bullets. Oscar smirked and said that this was complete nonsense. Not a unique weapon. Nothing particularly new. He fell silent mid-sentence, feeling something, and anxiously jumped to the side, and the old man exclaimed that he was retreating in a moment of triumph. Was he laughing at him? A second later, a shot rang out. The bullet passed through him and flew at Oscar. Even though he erected 3 wind barriers in front of him, it reached him and left a cut on his cheek. Without even sparing his comrade, the shooter intended to finish him off, but it didn't work, and he noted that if he had been slightly less vigilant, he definitely wouldn't have survived. MC looked at the dead old man and asked if he wasn't his colleague. He replied that, to be more precise, he was his subordinate, who could easily be replaced. MC frowned, thinking that these criminals were disgusting, and asked what kind of toy he was holding. He reloaded the pistol and said that it would be unpleasant to hear him call it a toy. Let him just know that it was terribly expensive. Oscar noted that the gun contained 3 spells: acceleration, amplification, and penetration. He's right? The man froze at his words, then looked up at him and asked how he knew that. He touched his cut and told him that he couldn't block the bullet, and he thoughtfully remarked that he was arrogant, although with his talent it was not surprising. How about working for him? He pays his subordinates well. MC refused, a kind of unpleasant itch in the back of his head just thinking about it. The shooter chuckled and noted that it was true, after which he said that this meant that further conversation was pointless. After that, several shots were heard. Some time passed, Oscar escaped from the shooter and was now hiding in the grass, wondering how the former leader of the Magic Tower ended up in this situation. Since his wind bullets are slower than his, he loses in a direct fight. He has half a mana reserve left. He can't run forever. And this idiot has one weakness: the period of time when he reloads. After 2 shots, he cannot attack while he reloads his pistol, which takes 1.4 seconds. He glanced at the shooter, who was now walking through the flower beds, looking for him, and thought that there was 1 shot left, which meant he had to finish this in 1.24 seconds. He used acceleration magic and rushed towards his opponent, and the latter, hearing sounds, immediately turned to him. He pointed his pistol at him and laughed loudly, noting how fast he was. But a human cannot defeat Trinity. He aimed, fired, and in a split second, the bullet covered a distance of several meters and touched the barrier. He smiled, already thinking that victory was in his hands. But to his surprise, the bullet slid along the surface of the barrier. MC prepared a spell and headed towards him, and in the meantime, he began frantically reloading the pistol and thought, how did this happen? With acceleration alone, this bullet cannot be dodged. But he didn't dodge. So could it be his shield? When he finished reloading and looked up, it was already too late. Oscar had aimed a wind bullet at him. He stuttered in fear and asked how a low-level mage could do that. MC fired and said he wouldn't have understood anything even if he explained. After finishing it, he sighed in relief, then picked up his gun and thought it was too annoying. It's called Trinity. Acceleration, amplification, penetration. And he calls it that? It's an impressive weapon. Even he has a hard time handling it. He reduced the friction on the surface of the windshield and increased the strength of the inner coating, making the outer layer more flexible and the inner one stronger. Therefore, the bullet couldn't penetrate the barrier and slid along the perimeter. If it hadn't worked, he would be lying on the ground right now. Once he returned to the White Tower, he would need to learn magical methods to combat modern weapons. He tested his limits after just a few spells with this incomplete body. Naturally, he first needed to successfully rescue Frank and Ivan. Initially, he sensed 4 people, and since he dealt with 3 of them, the last one is now hunting for them. Meanwhile, a gang member caught them in the forest, and Frank told the old man to run first. Ivan was worried about him, and he told him that he would be fine. He was quite strong, but he wouldn't be able to fight properly as long as he was here. He would catch up with him soon. He squeezed his shoulder and told him to be careful before leaving. The mercenary remarked that it was so touching. Did he say goodbye? Frank asked why he wasn't running after him. Had he come after him? The man laughed and asked, who the hell was he? Did he seriously think that he would run after the old man if they got separated, so that he could survive alone? Frank frowned and remained silent, and he said that the old man was, of course, his target, but he was always curious. What was so special about them that everyone feared the mages of the 4 great towers? He drew his sword and swung it, then pounced on him and exclaimed that he would finish him off first. Frank immediately cast the wind cutter spell at him, and he, landing on the ground, shattered it and exclaimed that it was too simple. Let him conjure something more interesting. He quickly approached him and plunged the sword into him, after which he laughed loudly and exclaimed, is this all that the Great White Tower is? But something confused him, namely the sound with which the blade entered his body, and the fact that he did not even have to exert any effort. He wanted to jump back, realizing something was wrong, but Frank held his sword and slashed a cutting spell across his neck, causing him to immediately fall to his knees and choke on blood. The mage said he had a somewhat special constitution, and the hole in his chest quickly began to close with the help of the wind. His opponent collapsed to the ground, and he took a step back in disgust just to avoid getting blood on himself. Meanwhile, Oscar hid behind a nearby tree, watching and prepared the whole time. He figured Frank was a special type of mage and also possessed the spirit of the wind. It would never have occurred to him that he had access to magic that allowed him to turn part of his body into air. Since physical attacks didn't work on him, he couldn't be dealt with without magic or the aura of the sword. Even he, the head of the magic tower, had only read about this rare form of magic in ancient books. And even these records only mentioned the 7th head of the tower. It was his innate type of magic. He had no idea that Frank had inherited this wind spirit. He came out of hiding and called out to him, and he flinched in surprise and said that he had scared him. When did he arrive? He answered that he had just arrived here. He was worried, but he had done just fine without him. Frank smiled smugly, and he asked why he was so happy so early. Where had he left Ivan? Remembering the old man, he became excited and started calling him loudly, and MC thought that he just needed to train him well, and his potential would surpass a dozen higher mages. He pointed to the side and said that they needed to go there. He could feel his energy. Soon morning came. They all returned to the herbalist's house, and he, hugging Frank tightly, thanked him. If not for him, he would not have lived until the next morning. He smiled awkwardly and said that it was Oscar who helped him, but he didn't agree with him. He missed one swordsman. Without him, they would be in trouble now. Frank looked at him in surprise and asked what he said. He repeated that if it weren't for him, things could have taken a terrible turn, and he, blushing deeply with embarrassment, agreed with him, after which he excitedly waved his hands and asked, "It's over, right?" Ivan thoughtfully answered him that that wasn't quite true. This scoundrel won't give up so easily. If killing him didn't work, he'll find another method. They sat down at the table, and Frank asked why he was so obsessed with this land, and he answered that it was the largest tract of fertile land in the very center of Siren. The soil's fertility had dropped sharply over the past 8 years, a result of the technological item factory in the western region polluting the Wolf River with its waste every day. And if he starts building factories even closer to this land, then the day will come when staying here will truly become pointless. If the Siren soil isn't allowed to recover, they'll forever lose the ability to grow herbs here. He thought for a few seconds, then told the old man he'd like to ask him something. Yesterday, he mentioned the debt to the White Tower. Could he really be talking about the promise of the 4th chapter, Ranald Ias? At the mention of his name, Ivan smiled and asked if he knew about it. Frank didn't understand what they were talking about, and they told him that this was the history of herbalists past. Long ago, people looked at herbalists very differently. In those days, they were often accused of witchcraft and hunted with pitchforks and torches. They boiled obscure herbs with unknown effects in their cauldrons and sold them. As a result, they had to live on the road, far from human eyes. But then a savior appeared before them and took them in. He was known for his incredible insight, and his name was Ronald Ias. He was the fourth head of the White Tower. He told them to go to Siren. It would become a home for them and their descendants for centuries. No one would look at them askance there. MC quoted his words, and the old man was pleasantly surprised, noting that it was so touching. He had never heard the exact quote. MC told him that he had read it in a storybook and thought that it was actually an ancient tome passed down from leader to leader. Ivan smiled and said that after that, herbalists from all over the continent gathered in Siren, and for the first time in their lives, the wanderers found a comfortable home. Frank was surprised, and the old man said that the White Tower had given his ancestors both a home and pride. So how could he turn his back on it? Oscar was touched by his words. He rose and bowed to him, thanking him for his hard work. From now on, the White Tower would stand beside him. The old man immediately asked what they would do, and Frank said that the imperial family would immediately spring into action upon learning that they had attacked the nation's cultural treasure. MC looked at them with displeasure. He was so moved, and they didn't even react. Ivan said he wasn't sure they'd make it in time. He couldn't leave these lands. The imperial family is extremely meticulous in their work, but because of this, they act slowly. And if Dever launches a full-scale attack at this time, it will be bad. Oscar smiled and told him not to worry. The imperial family will be here in no time, because today they are signing a contract with them to produce a cure for Cadena flu. Time passed, and Dever Powell's office was now in chaos. They were packing in a panic, and Dever turned to his subordinates, exclaiming in displeasure, how did he manage to screw up so badly that things had come to this? As soon as they leave here, they are finished. At that moment, a crash was heard that startled them, and then members of the National Security Bureau broke down the door and rushed inside, ordering everyone not to move. Senior Inspector Walker of the Imperial Ministry of the Interior's National Security Bureau approached the trembling businessman and, showing him a warrant, announced his arrest on charges of attempted murder, blackmail, illegal acquisition of property, and damaging national cultural heritage. Dever became very agitated and exclaimed that they had come across the wrong man. He was an honest businessman. Walker told him that it was up to them to decide, so he should shut up, then ordered his assistant to arrest him. The guy pulled out handcuffs, and Dever looked down, nervously thinking that he couldn't handle this on his own. He just needed to find a way to contact him, and he would somehow get out of this mess. He pulled out a cigar, and with a nervous grin, said he would go with them. But couldn't he at least smoke? Walker didn't react at all, after which he ordered his guys to handcuff him and take him out of there, and the man exclaimed that he was making a mistake. Does he even understand who is behind him? He answered him that he had no idea, but His Majesty the Emperor is behind him. Does he know someone more important than him? Devor became very nervous, after which he was handcuffed and Walker took his cigar from him. Watching him being led away, he noted that criminals always have valuable things, and his assistant Doran said that he had one question. What kind of guy is this that they started work on the same day? In his memory, this had never happened. He answered him that it was an order from above. His Majesty seriously loves the White Tower. Doran didn't understand what he was talking about, and he replied that this was the business of adults. He went to the window and lit a cigarette, thinking that he really didn't understand why he liked them so much. So what if they performed a heroic feat in the past? That was 20 years ago. Even if you launch a bird with broken wings from a height, the only change will be how fast it falls. Roughly speaking, the White Tower of today deserves such treatment. He called out to his assistant and asked how old he would be this year. He answered that he would be 23, and he noted that this meant that back then, 20 years ago, he was 3 years old, and he was 12. He remembered the day when humanity won the war with the demon and finally gained true freedom. What power did the White Tower wield back then, that the powers that be still cling to memories of it? He put out his cigar and told Doran that they needed to go. There was one more place they needed to look. He was surprised, because he thought that the work was finished for today. And he answered him that, unfortunately, this was not the case. He headed for the exit and told the guys to finish up here and go home. And Doran followed him and asked if he could tell him where they were going. He told him that they would go west, where they would issue orders to the factories to stop illegally dumping waste into the Wolf River. In fact, he himself added it to the schedule. Maybe in the White Tower itself he was not sure, but these guys, Oscar Crucian and Frank Sirius, got rid of Gunner Jack's gang, and this is how he would repay them. Doran offered him a bite to eat somewhere along the way, but he turned him down, saying that they would eat only after they finished. Soon evening came. The boys came to the tower, and Frank stretched and said that they were finally here. He offered Oscar a drink, but he turned him down, since he had to report to the vice chief. Will he go with him? He hesitated, and when Hamel came around the corner, he became very agitated and quickly left, saying that he had business to do. Hamel approached Oscar and said that he thought he saw Frank. Was he mistaken? He told him that he was right, but he ran away as if on urgent business. The old man laughed and said that apparently it was something important, and MC thought that it was a joke. Hamel noted that he had once again solved a serious problem, and he had just sent them for a walk. He would listen to his report in his office. He answered him that that was exactly where he was heading, and he pointed forward with his hand, inviting him to go there together. While they were going up to his office in the elevator, MC noticed that he was frowning strangely, and then the old man asked if Frank had told him anything strange. He told him that everything was fine. Did something really happen? He told him that he received a letter from the Sirius family, saying that they wanted to take Frank home. Oscar asked if he agreed to this. The old man answered that he was not sure. They said that they had already talked with him, but he did not know the details. This made Oscar worry, and after the report, he headed to his room. He knocked on the door and Frank, putting his things in a suitcase, asked, "Is this Granz? Let him come in." MC burst into his room and asked who Granz was. "He comes from the greatest trading company of the Empire, right?" Seeing that it was him, Frank called him a scoundrel, and noted that he already found out about everything. Oscar closed the door behind him and asked, "Is he leaving the White Tower?" The guy apologized to him that he could not tell him everything in advance while sober, so he offered him a drink. He should come back to start helping with the work, and he also needs to get married. He asked when he managed to find his beloved, and he said that he was told that she was nice and from a rich family, so his family benefited from it too. MC noted that it was a marriage of convenience, and he didn't mind that. He answered with a smile that she was pretty, kind, and that her family was rich. Why would he be against it? He said that he wasn't talking about a wedding, but about magic. As soon as he mentioned this, Frank immediately became upset and said that he couldn't do anything about it. This was all just the limit of his talent. To be honest, he always thought he was special, and he figured that if he went to the most worthless of the magic towers, he could at least become the head of a snake. He apologized to him for saying that, because he loved the White Tower, and continued, saying that after entering here, it turned out that things were different. He just didn't understand reality. He can't even earn enough to live here, so he understands his family's desire to bring him home. Oscar didn't let him finish and seriously pronounced his full name, and he looked up at him, asking why he was addressing him so harshly. Was it because he called the White Tower worthless? MC seriously told him that he was talented. These words sank into his soul. He embarrassedly turned away from him and thanked him, saying that at least he heard that from a genius as he was about to leave. Oscar crossed his arms and said he was serious. Maybe he wants to see what it's like to be the head of a snake? Their conversation was interrupted by Fran's older brother, Granz. He entered the room and, looking at Oscar, asked if he was his colleague. He turned to his brother and, pointing to the watch, said that he could give him 5 more minutes, so he should hurry up and come down. He was waiting for him. He was about to leave and told him to finish with the goodbyes, but MC stopped him, asking how long he needed Frank to stay. Granz turned to him and asked who he was to ask such questions. He told him his name and told him that he was his friend, and he asked if he was the magician who developed the vaccine. He was Granz Sirius, the older brother of this idiot and the deputy head of the trading company. MC offered him a deal, which made Frank flustered, and his older brother remarked on his impudence. He heard that he was a genius. Was that really the case? How brave is it for a child to offer a deal to the Sirius family? MC told him that neither side would lose anything in this deal. He would make Frank the best mage in the White Tower in 2 years. Frank pointed at himself in surprise and asked, "Is he serious?" Oscar said it would bring profit to their family in the long run, and Granz asked what would happen if that didn't happen. He told him that in that case, he would transfer the rights to receive profits from the sale of the Cadena flu vaccine for the next 50 years to the Sirius Trading Company. His friend was indignant, but he was ignored, and Granz asked if he even had the right to do that. MC told him that the deputy head of the tower would vouch for him as a notary, and the man said he had something else on his mind. Was the reason he was willing to go so far because this guy deserved it, or just because he was his friend? Frank looked downcast, bracing himself for Oscar's answer. But when he said it was because he deserved it, his eyes lit up. His friend said he planned to restore the White Tower's reputation to its former glory within 5 years. Medicines and vaccines were just a signal to the world about the beginning of this movement. He grabbed his friend and pulled him close, saying that for this, he needed Frank Sirius. He was exactly what the White Tower, which existed in his vision, needed. Frank looked at him in surprise, and his older brother said that he was young, but as a merchant, he wasn't going to give up his profits just because his interlocutor was overly naive. Instead, he would add one condition. MC countered, saying that he thought his offer was already strong enough, and he pointed out that he had forgotten one thing. The only thing more important than money was trust. He didn't make deals with just anyone, so he needed to prove he could fulfill his part. A 5th-ranked knight arrived with him as a bodyguard. A duel would be scheduled for noon tomorrow, and once his abilities were proven, he would agree to the deal. Oscar asked with displeasure. He's adding this condition knowing he's a second-rank mage. Upon learning this, Granz waved his hand and said that in that case, let there be a stipulation that he wouldn't use the sword's aura. MC thought he was essentially saying he wouldn't hand over Frank. Apparently, this very marriage of convenience was being planned with an extremely difficult family. Granz left, saying as a parting shot that they would see each other at noon. If he didn't come, he would consider himself given up. Oscar understood that even he would have a hard time facing a 5th-rank knight, and his friend asked excitedly, what was he going to do? He could call it all off if they said so now. He could go with him to ask for it. Granz is acting like this because he wants to teach him a proper lesson. He's really starting to irritate him. If he's embarrassed, then he'll go with him anyway. MC looked at him and said he thought they could handle it, and he excitedly exclaimed, how would he, a 2nd-tier mage, compete against a 5th-tier knight? He asked in response, a 4th-tier mage would be able to counter him somehow, right? Frank asked how he planned to reach the 4th tier in less than a day, and Granz replied that even he couldn't do that, but he could take a mage who'd hit a wall at the 3rd tier and send him to the 4th. He grabbed his shoulders and pointed out that his brother hadn't said he had to defeat the knight. He only said he had to prove his abilities, so he might as well just show it to everyone. Frank looked at him in confusion, not understanding what he was talking about, and his friend confidently said that he would make him a 4th-tier mage, so let him fight in his place. After that, they went to the training hall of the tower, which is on the 40th floor. Frank was still hesitant about this idea, and said that he didn't think they could do anything in one day. He hadn't managed it in the past few years. Oscar told him that it was possible, but he just needed to completely trust him. He said that he trusted him, and he asked him to stand in a natural position, close his eyes, and begin circulating mana. He did everything as he said, and MC, thoughtfully observing the fluctuations of mana, approached him and poked several places on his body, saying that these were areas where there were losses in the circulation of mana. Since these areas existed, the usefulness of his magic was suffering. He asked in surprise, can all geniuses see this? He replied that only he could see it, and he said with displeasure that he was being so annoying. So, he could jump a rank just by fixing this? He asked in response, are you serious? It has nothing to do with rank. 99.9% of mages don't even think about it. However, the remaining 0.1%, those called archmages, each of them dedicated time to this. From now on, let him practice everything he says every morning. He walked around him several times, pointing to different points, and said that in the sections of the chain he pointed out, there are sharp turns, and he is conducting mana along them too quickly, causing it to crash into the walls. Compared to the mana input, the losses are enormous. So let him think about speed. Here, he is conducting mana too slowly, so he needs to increase the speed. And in the other chain, there are 6 input holes, so the mana needs to be divided into 6 streams. This is the only way to minimize losses and get the maximum effect. Frank's head was boiling from this amount of information, and he asked if he needed to think about all this when he used magic. It was too much. He said that the more he paid attention to it, the more natural the process itself would become. Just like with breathing. Frank looked thoughtfully at his palm and asked, so that was all he had to do? He told him that it was not so. Let him now show him the magic that he used in the grass fields. Hearing this, the guy shuddered, and after a short pause, asked if he saw everything. He confirmed it, and he apologized to him, saying that he could not. Oscar noted that he seemed to say that he trusted him, and he answered him that it was not that. He was just scared. He almost died the first time he used this magic. It was obvious that if his magical abilities didn't work, his family would disown him. So he only grew more worried with each passing year. And while he was trying to find something that no one else could reproduce, a rash thought occurred to him. If it wasn't just part of his body, what if he could turn his entire body into wind? Then he would become incredibly strong. At first he thought he had succeeded, that he had managed it. But when the wind continued to consume his body further, he realized that he couldn't stop it and became very scared. It was a complete failure. After half of his body became wind, his mana went out of control. He cried out for help. He was so scared when the wind reached his head. If the tower leader hadn't passed by, he wouldn't be here. To be more precise, he would have ceased to exist in this world altogether. Then, he himself couldn't do anything. He grabbed his shoulders with trembling hands and said that he never wanted to experience that feeling again, when his soul was scattered into hundreds of thousands of fragments and disappeared. MC noted that he had used this magic perfectly there, and he replied that it was activated automatically in dangerous situations. He looked down in disappointment and asked, "Isn't that pathetic?" He answered that it was not so at all. Let him never feel sorry for himself. Many mages face such problems. He asked in surprise, "Is that true?" Oscar confirmed it and added that his solution was quite simple. He took a piece of chalk and said that in his case, the problem was that he was unable to manage his mana, so this gap needed to be filled. Frank noted that it was easy for him to speak. Mana control depends entirely on talent, so how should he deal with it? He began to draw a magic circle on the floor and said that usually this would be the problem, but there was a method to forcibly increase this ability. Frank asked what he was doing. and when he told him that he was drawing a summoning circle, he worriedly asked, "He's not going to make a contract with a demon, is he?" MC answered that demons would never come even if he called them. After finishing, he dusted his hands of chalk and turned to him, smiling, saying that he was summoning the spirit of the wind, which he wanted to implant in his body. After that, Frank cast a spirit summoning spell, but nothing happened. They waited a few seconds, and Oscar said that his affinity with spirits was terrible. Frank said that he just felt a slight wind, and he replied that he sighed heavily. The guy was very upset, and Oscar told him not to worry. After all, an extremely small number of people have an affinity with spirits. He asked, "So is this the end for him from the very beginning? If he can't even summon a spirit, then how is he supposed to control mana?" He answered that there is another method. He remembered visiting the Elven Kingdom in his past life, where he learned about the spirit summoning ceremony. The elves suggested he try it out of curiosity, and he succeeded. It couldn't be that what worked once wouldn't work a second time. They did say, however, that he was the first human summoner in 118 years. Frank asked, "What now? Should he repeat the summoning speech again?" Oscar told him to step aside so he could try, and stood in the center of the circle, thinking that the Spirit King would remember him. He closed his eyes and concentrated. Back then, it wasn't a rundown training hall like this, but in front of a huge world tree. He addressed the wind spirit and asked it to come to him, after which currents of wind swirled around him, causing Frank to cover his face and exclaim in surprise, "Did he manage it the first time?" After that, the wind spirit appeared before Oscar. He recognized it and asked, "Is it the one who called to me?" He approached him for the first time in 27 years. He thought it was him too, 27 years ago, and told him that he wanted to make a contract. Did he need anything for this? The spirit crouched down to close the height difference and answered him that nothing so formal was necessary. The most important thing was the connection between each other's hearts. Was he ready to tie the thread of friendship with the spirit of the highest rank, Celestine? He refused him, and the spirit looked at him in bewilderment, and he realized that he should have told him everything right away. He pointed to the guy behind him and said with a smile that he had summoned him for his sake. The next day, they went to the dueling square and met with Granz and his knight. Granz turned to the deputy head and asked if he had slept well. The fact that he was here must indicate that he agreed with the details of their deal. The old man confirmed this, and said that he had many doubts about it, but decided to agree. The developer of the flu potion turned out to be too stubborn. Granz said that in that case he would gladly accept his part, after which he introduced them to the knight who would fight today. Leslie Morgan, a 5th-level knight, shook Oscar's hand to introduce himself, and Granz decided to explain the details of the duel. A simple variation in which the first one to remove the necklace from the opponent wins. If there are no winners after 5 minutes, they will consider it their defeat. MC noted that this was quite good and suggested that they begin, and the man handed him the necklace and said that if he wanted, the duel could be stopped by raising his hand. Is he sure he wants to fight in such a suit? It looks uncomfortable. Oscar told him that everything is fine. He won't be fighting anyway. After his words, Frank entered the arena, which his older brother was very surprised by, and asked Oscar what was going on. He replied that he wanted him to prove his abilities, not fight personally. Yesterday he taught him something. Granz clearly didn't like this, and said that it was his fault for not specifying that he had to fight himself. But if he thought they would be more lenient because he decided to put France forward, he was mistaken. He told him that it wasn't that. He simply thought that a 4th-level mage had a better chance than a 2nd-level one. The man didn't understand what he was talking about, since his younger brother had only been a 3rd-ranked mage yesterday. MC hugged his friend and said with a grin that to make Frank the best mage in 2 years, he had to show at least this much ability. Granz frowned and ordered Leslie not to spare him, and he stepped forward. Oscar, meanwhile, slapped his friend on the back with all his might and told him that everything would be fine, so he shouldn't be afraid. If he did everything as he said yesterday, he would definitely win. He smiled slightly in response and nodded, then walked towards the knight and confidently said that he would return soon. Leslie bowed to him, noting that they had not seen each other for a long time, after which Granz waved his hand, announcing the start of the fight. Frank immediately increased the distance between them, and excitedly thought that he had reached a distance of 20 meters, which was perfect. But what he felt made him nervous. His opponent emanated powerful pressure. Even without the aura of a sword, and at such a distance, he posed such a threat. This was definitely rank 5. He was scared. Because of this, he wanted to stop the fight and was already raising his hand, but noticing Oscar watching him, he stopped. He remembered everything he had said about him before, and confidence ignited within him. He clenched his hand into a fist and then swung it, throwing a wind cutter at his opponent, and thought that for the first time in his life he heard that someone needed him, so he couldn't let him down. The knight immediately blocked his blow, but several more followed, and he thought that he had improved. He cast 2 spells at once, even coped with his pressure. I wonder if this is similar to the sword control technique used in the East. He blocked his next blow and thought that he had enough observations. The wind cutters headed back towards him, and he broke away and ran towards Frank. This made him nervous and thought that he was fast, and to block it, he raised a wind palm in front of himself as a shield. While the knight tried to get to him, Granz asked how he had grown so much in just half a day. Had he used some forbidden technique and overdone it? MC told him he shouldn't worry. He'd used a reasonable, safe method. The man clicked his tongue in displeasure, saying he wasn't worried. He continued to watch and thought he'd really grown, but that was it. At that moment, his knight pierced the windpalm and pounced on him. And Granz thought the life of a battle mage wasn't right for him. Since he was weaker than the others, this growth would only harm him. Perhaps there would come a time when injuries would be a relief. He'd be better off working at the company. Then he wouldn't have to suffer and make his family worry. He'd never be consumed by his own magic again. Frank stretched out his arms in front of him, trying to defend himself, and the knight almost grabbed his necklace. Oscar remarked that this was the end, and Granz looked at him, but when he saw him smiling, he was very surprised. Last night, after training, MC said the spirit transmigration was successful. It's a pity he was low-ranked. How's his wind god? He's doing well after their training, right? Frank fell tiredly to the floor and thanked him, saying that after someone started beating him up, he got out on his own. His friend said that he still hasn't reached the level of completely turning into wind. After all, they haven't completely gotten rid of his injury. He asked, "Does that mean he has no chance of winning tomorrow?" He told him that's not true. Everything is possible if he can use the wind god to 100%. Frank didn't understand what he was talking about and asked if he really thought that turning his body into air was everything. There's still the most interesting part of the wind god. What really makes him invincible is unification, the ability to turn everything that touches his body into air, be it an object or even clothes. This is the most absurd part of the wind god. In a battle, it's extremely important to hide your cards up your sleeve until the very end. Winning a battle of wits is much more exciting. Frank took advantage of this, and at that moment, his opponent grabbed only air, and he flashed past. A stream of wind swept past Lasley, leaving him bewildered, and stopped behind him. Frank still managed to grab his necklace, surprising everyone. The opponent shouted, "Impossible." Frank then looked at the pendant in his hands, then raised his arms and shouted joyfully, "He did it!" Granz looked forward and thought in surprise, "The god of wind?" He couldn't believe his eyes. All the healers, even the magical ones, said he would never touch him again. Then the deputy tower head laughed and said, "It looks like their match is over. Did they accept the result?" The protagonist waved his hand. Granz looked at him and thought, "Did he say he taught him this in 24 hours? Then he looked at his brother, who shook his opponent's hand and then said he admitted defeat. After a while, Hamel extended his hand and said, they had come such a long and arduous journey here. What a shame they were leaving so soon. Granz bowed and said, "No." He asks that they continue to look after his little brother in the future. He then looked at Frank and noticed that he had matured. Frank apologized and asked, "What?" He turned around and replied, "It doesn't matter." MC, looking at them, thought what a funny guy and pretended not to hear anything. The next day, Frank, perplexed, looked ahead and asked, "Is this the entrance?" The protagonist confirmed it. He pointed to the doors concealing a terrifying aura. He shouted, "Why on earth did he think this door led to the training hall? It's obviously the entrance to an underground prison." The protagonist replied, "It's not that he was entirely wrong. These rooms had been used hundreds of years ago." He shouted indignantly, "Besides, he hadn't done anything wrong, so why was he being sent to solitary training?" He replied that it was a personal order from the deputy tower leader, which means he has especially high hopes for him. Frank grabbed his head with his hands and, throwing it back, shouted, "So if he had high hopes, why the hell was he training alone? He barely had time to rest for a day." MC told him to think positively. He still needed time to get used to the spirit. Besides, he should internalize everything he learned while getting closer to level 4. After that, the protagonist pushed him forward. He desperately said, "Well, yes, but..." The protagonist told him not to be a child. He wouldn't die there. Then, with tears in his eyes, he opened the door a crack and asked, "Is it really?" The protagonist confirmed it and said goodbye to him, then slammed the door and mentally apologized. He thought, to be honest, he wanted to send him to training. The evening after the duel, Hamel, looking at the protagonist, asked, did he want Frank to spend the next 30 days in isolation, training? But he had won, and just like that, he confirmed it. He needed it. The deputy tower leader said they would have to surprise him with something good in a month. The protagonist thanked him, and then he added, "Oh, right, there's good news. The Serious Trading Company offered them the use of their supply chain for free. What's more, MC was surprised. For free? He thought, of course. He'd already calculated everything. Quickly, as expected from a trading company, the benefits for the Serious Trading Company from the revival of the White Tower and Frank becoming one of the best mages are practically endless. Their intentions are obvious, but there's nothing wrong with that." After that, he looked at the deputy tower leader and said, "Truly good news." After that, he continued. They would move on to the next question. He had one request for him. Would he like to give a lecture? The protagonist was surprised. A lecture? Not that he couldn't, but he took a sip of his drink and looked ahead, thinking, as if he should want to focus on potion making at this point. Shouldn't he? He then placed his cup on the saucer and said, "Is there really a reason why the mages of the White Tower need to become significantly more capable in a short period of time?" Hamel smiled and remarked that he was catching on quickly. Oscar. He'd heard of the Night of Magic. He confirmed it. The Night of Magic. A day when mages from all the towers gather in one place. This event was created to demonstrate the tower's performance and the abilities of their mages. The emperor wanted this day to foster a bond between the mage towers, but naturally, things didn't work out that way. At every meeting, everyone simply continued to compete. In a couple of years, the Night of Magic was supposed to be closed. So why is he bringing it up now? Then MC said, His Majesty the Emperor wants to revive the Night of Magic. He replied that it was true. However, the public hadn't yet been told about this. The imperial family will make an official announcement with details after the new year. He hopes it's just the old man's bad feeling, but he's wary of the Black Tower. The protagonist thought, the Black Tower? He said that as long as the Black Tower strives to take its place among the 4 great towers of magic, there's a high probability that the White Tower will be threatened. Right now, all the guys are trying hard, but he still feels a little uneasy. After that, the protagonist declared that he'll take care of it. With these words, he hit himself in the chest, and Hamill asked, Oscar, did his expression seem to change? Sometime later, the Magic Tower, the 36th floor, the campus. MC walked down the corridor, thinking, is the Black Tower planning to make a name for itself? How impudent. The White Tower will only be pushed off its pedestal over his dead body. It's good that he managed to at least pull Frank up to the 4th level. The spirit summoning ceremony was literally an epiphany. He's so glad it worked. Just think. The demigod remembered a pathetic human who couldn't even keep a promise. A couple of days ago during a spirit summoning, the spirit pointed a finger at him and shouted indignantly, no, who even summons spirits so someone else can make a contract? The protagonist asked him to calm down, and he shouted, how can he calm down? After that, the protagonist said, Silafrion of Serenity. He must let her know that the white mage has returned. He said, dare to speak the name of the spirit queen out loud. The next second, he looked ahead in surprise. The spirit queen asked, so who is he? For the spirit queen to give an order for just a human. MC looked at the spirit and said, if he tells, it won't be interesting. So can he or can't he? He replied that she gave permission. Only it wouldn't be a contract, just an infiltration. The protagonist said that was enough. He was grateful. The spirit added that she also asked him to tell him the following. He mustn't forget his promise. That's what she said. MC approached the door and thought, she shouldn't worry, he'll definitely keep it. Although in his past life, he couldn't do it only because he died suddenly. He saved many lives in the White Tower thanks to her, so he will repay the debt with interest. Then he noticed a notice on the door. It said an announcement of a special lecture with participation criteria. Participation criterion, a White Tower mage. Contents, a different interpretation of the basics of magic. Schedule, every Monday and Thursday from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. Venue, the main building, 36th floor, 4th lecture hall. The protagonist picked up the notice and thought, but first he needs to take care of his family a little more. After some time, the mage, throwing his jacket over his shoulders, said, oh, what people? He thought everyone was dead. It's been so long. Amy waved and greeted him. He approached her and asked if this was a lecture for those who hadn't yet reached the 3rd level. He didn't see anyone higher than that. She said maybe it was because they were going to discuss the basics here. All the mid-level mages were very busy. Rena clenched her fists and said, but apparently, it was true that the White Tower had received more funding. She heard that this lecturer had been personally invited by the deputy head of the tower, and the lecture itself was being held in the main building. This is where the Imperial Seminar on Observation was held. Amy turned to her and said that the lecturer seemed to be some kind of celebrity. At that moment, Damien Proud, the sole heir to Proud County, waved his hand and told them not to make fun of him. All this fuss over a lecture hall that no one was really using. Rena turned to him and asked, Damien, don't you think he's being overly pessimistic about this? He replied that if this were a real investment, they would have prepared a high-level lecture with admission by request, like they do in the other mage towers, and not something about a different interpretation of the fundamentals of magic. Isn't it obvious from everyone gathered here? Only one of the low-level mages didn't show up. If this was such a magnificent lesson as they say, then their noblest 2nd-level genius would too. The next second, MC said, enough chatter. He used sound capture. The mages looked at him in confusion. One of them, putting his hand to his throat, thought he couldn't hear anything? What the hell? Is this silence? The protagonist entered the room and said it was nice to meet him. He was the lecturer who would be teaching them a different interpretation of the basics of magic, Oscar Crushin. The students looked at him in confusion. They thought, a 2nd-level lecturer. Then the protagonist added that he was sure many of them were disappointed that he was the lecturer. The students thought, at least he understands. What could a low-level mage teach them anyway? Apparently, he felt ashamed himself, so he used magic to stop them from objecting. Then the MC said that if they had any objections, they could leave the room. They were no longer students under the supervision of the teachers. However, he had one condition. He took an hourglass from his inside pocket and said that they must prove by their own efforts that they didn't need these lectures. He placed the hourglass on the table and said he would allocate 10 minutes for this, during which time they must state that they did not want to participate in his class. Simple enough, right? The students thought, yeah, right. Is he completely stupid? He took away their ability to speak because he wants them to refuse? This is a test. He's 2nd level, so it's definitely not silence. They don't know what kind of spell this is, but it can definitely be solved. Damien gritted his teeth and thought, so he means that since they can't lift the spell and speak up, they need this lecture. The protagonist sat down in his seat and looking at the students, thought that he would test their abilities. He had deliberately left a few vulnerabilities in the spell, but that didn't mean it would be easy. After a while, the sand in the hourglass had almost completely drained. He thought, no one. The next second, Damien stood up and shouted, "It worked!" MC thought, this child was on the list of entry-level mages, right, Damien? Then he snapped his fingers and said that he congratulated him. He replied that it was suspiciously simple, so he had solved the problem carefully, without rushing. After a while, the students cheered, "Oh, he can hear!" He was almost done. Then the protagonist picked up the hourglass and said, "Quiet." Time was up. Damien was the only one who had passed the test. He smiled and said, "Naturally. So he doesn't have to attend these classes?" The protagonist replied, "Of course. Whatever he wants." Damien wondered when he was letting him slack off so easily, even somehow. Honestly, since the first lecture had started like that, he was even interested in what he'd learn in the class itself. But now it would be awkward to say that he really wanted to learn. The protagonist stood up and thought, maybe it was because he was still a child, but all his thoughts were literally written all over his face. He said he wanted to give him a reward for being the only one who had completed the task, and he would teach him one spell, so he should go to the podium. Then the student approached him, and he asked what basic spell he liked the most. He answered, the wind cutter. MC told him to demonstrate it. He concentrated energy in his hand and said, "Wow." He released the wind cutter, flying around him, and asked, "Is that enough?" The protagonist looked at him thoughtfully, and then said, "Not bad. Today he will teach him a real wind cutter." He indignantly asked, "Does he not see what is flying around him?" MC extended his hand forward and said that by his standards this is not a wind cutter. At best, a crude version of it. He grabbed the wind cutter in his hand and said that there are two problems with this. He indignantly shouted, "What is he doing?" He answered, "First, this spell is not created from wind." "Damien, what does he think wind is?" He answered in surprise, "Wind is the movement of air." The protagonist said, "Water remains water, even when collected in a vessel. Fire remains fire, no matter what form it takes. However, wind is wind only as long as it's constantly moving, flowing." The apprentice looked at him and added that this meant he hadn't created a wind cutter, but rather an air cutter. Just as real water rots, magic created from air that doesn't flow is unable to hold its shape. They must keep in mind that the White Tower works with wind, meaning their magic must flow continuously. If that doesn't happen, just as he had just demonstrated, it will be perpetually interrupted. Damien asked, "What's the second problem?" He replied that casting a spell wastes too much mana. Even reducing the cost would help greatly. He asked in surprise how he'd figured all this out after just one glance. Having achieved a certain mastery of magic, one can learn a lot from the way an opponent uses their magic. For example, their character, habits, and even, he asked if he could be tactless for a moment, a little about his background. Since he comes from House Proud, which produced many high-ranking mages in the White Tower, he can assume that as a child, he constantly watched his family perform magic. Naturally, he tried to imitate them, and Wind Cutter must have been one of those spells he tried to copy. And if this happened before he was taught magic, imitating it must have been quite difficult, as it is one of the most difficult basic spells. While he tried and tried, he apparently managed to force his way through, using far more mana than necessary. This habit has remained with him to this day. Manipulating mana extensively is also a method. Damien's mouth dropped open in surprise. MC looked at him, put his hand to his face, and added that, since they'd figured out the reasons, he'd master the perfect wind cutter as soon as he worked on the problems. It's a shame, of course, that this outstanding student isn't interested in his lectures. Damien turned around and said, "God, who said he wouldn't attend?" After that, he walked to his seat. 3 weeks later, the students were chatting. Had he heard rumors? The guy asked what kind. Oscar is an absolutely amazing lecturer. His friend was sitting at the table next to him and asked, "So even in the best case scenario, his lectures will only help those stuck at the most basic level, right?" He asked him in return, "Who knows?" Several of his friends, level 4 and 5, still attend. Their friend asked, "Should they, too?" The student put his hand on the table and said frankly, he was just waiting for him to say it. "They should go right now." He said, "But it's 7 o'clock now, isn't it? And doesn't the lecture start at 9? He replied that they needed to line up in advance, otherwise, if they weren't late, they might not even get in. After that, he stood up, and the next second, everyone else in the cafeteria stood up too. After a while, Rena turned around and asked why there were so many people today. There were also quite a few 4th and 5th level upperclassmen. Her desk mate also turned around and said that these were still basic magic lessons. Wait, isn't Elder Maxim there? Has this reached the level of a Magic Academy seminar? The next second, the protagonist entered the room and wished everyone present a good morning. The spell they would be working with today was very important. They were great for coming. The students clenched their fists joyfully and began to cheer. MC said, "The spell that each of them must consider the most important in the life of a mage is Breeze." The next second, the students' expressions changed. One of them thought, "This is the most basic of the whole database." So he wants to tell them about a spell so simple that it's used freely even outside the White Tower. Maxim raised his hand and said that he was just going to observe, but now he was so curious that he had to ask, "Oscar, does he really want to teach all the people gathered today just the Breeze?" The protagonist confirmed this. Could he ask him to demonstrate it to them, Elder? He was surprised and then said, "Okay." He put his hand forward and used the breeze, and streams of wind spread throughout the room. The students wondered, is this a breeze, and not a gust or wind pressure? Wow, what else would you expect from an elder? Maxim asked, is this enough? The protagonist confirmed it and thanked him. And now, Amy Lavin. She was surprised and shouted, right? He told her to show them her breeze. She thought, why her? There are so many people here better than her? Then she raised her hand and used the breeze. The student smiled, surprised. What? How pleasant. Warm. The protagonist asked if anyone could tell the difference between these two spells. One of the students asked, power and range? Temperature too. Another student added, the mood is different too. Then Veronica, resting her head on her hand, said, the nature of the mana. MC confirmed. Right, Veronica fricks. She was surprised, huh? He said, just like Veronica said. Elder Maxim's spell and Amy's differ in the nature of the mana they are made from. Isn't that fascinating? Even though the entire process, from the formation of the spells to the casting of this one, was the same, one was as hot as a desert whirlwind, while the other was as gentle as a spring breeze. With such a large difference, it could be considered the same breeze, right? Okay, then they should allow one more question. Who here understands what mana character is? One of the students raised their hand and asked if he was talking about the 4 types of mana: enhancement, acceleration, balance, and special type. The protagonist replied that these are 4 systems of categorizing mana, and he is talking about temperament, which is a slightly different concept. To be more precise, they are conceptually different. To understand mana character, one must consider the roots of the White Tower, in other words, balance. He picked up a piece of chalk and, writing on the board, added, who can explain why the white and blue towers are considered representatives of balance? One student raised their hand and asked, because of the elemental characteristics they possess. The protagonist answered, exactly. The red and yellow towers are faster and stronger, but they're unbalanced. That's because there's no such thing as cold fire or lightning in this world. However, air and water can be both hot and cold without limit. That's why they represent balance. But there's a clear difference between the blue tower and the white tower, even though they both represent balance. Take water, for example. The conditions for it to boil are simple. He concentrated the energy in his hand and added, at standard atmospheric pressure, it needs to reach a temperature of 100 degrees Celsius and a little time. It's that simple. However, creating hot air is even easier than boiling water. It's much easier for this one to assimilate with its surroundings and change its state like a chameleon. At that moment, Veronica covered her face with her hand and screamed, it's hot. The student sitting in front of her shivered from the cold. MC smiled and said that wind has far more freedom than any other element. It can display a mighty force like the flame of the red tower, be as fast as the lightning of the yellow tower, and possess the freedom to create forms like the water of the blue tower. Furthermore, the water of the blue tower does not mix with oil, while wind has no such limitations. Relying on the imagination of the mage, it is the only element capable of manifesting any temperament. Only air is in harmony with everything in this world. As a result, like mages of the White Tower, they must monitor how they think about their wind and what they see in it. What kind of essence do they consider it to be? This is the main point of today's lesson. Okay, so at this moment, the student looked at Maxim in surprise and asked, Elder? He said, wind. The protagonist shouted for them to wait. He ran to the elder, and Maxim said, wind for him. The student extended her hand to him and asked, Elder, is he all right? The protagonist shouted, no. Maxim said he was sure. That's for sure. The protagonist shouted for them not to touch him. He came closer and added that everyone should move away and get further. They couldn't disturb the elder's peace while he was attaining enlightenment. Rena approached him and asked, why did he do this out of the blue? MC replied, okay, he's going through an awakening. The next second, Maxim opened his eyes. The protagonist asked, how is he, the elder? He replied, I haven't managed to reach level 8, and yet. He abruptly hugged the protagonist and thanked him. No, since he's the teacher here, he should thank him. The protagonist smiled and said he was pleased to hear it. Maxim laughed and patted him on the back. The protagonist closed his eyes and thought, thanks to him, the next classes would be easier. Now no one below his rank would dare squeak in his direction. And the biggest plus turned out to be meeting Veronica. He caught the attention of one of the problem children listed in little Oscar's diary. The next day, the protagonist walked down the hallway and thought, Veronica said that something interesting was happening in this gym. Yesterday after class, she asked, hey Oscar, are you working out yet? He said, of course. She added, but he doesn't use the fit gym? It's not on the ratings. Doesn't he know about the innovative future training gym? Then she looked at him with disdain. He thought, she must have started the conversation quite friendly because she liked the class. But now he needs to understand why she looked at him like he was a bug. How did she know he wasn't familiar with the fit gym? Then he approached the door and asked, is this where it is? He thought he heard that there are only 3 such training gyms out of 300. Even the color of the doors is different. Could it really be that special? He put his hand to the door and thought, since they decided to distinguish it, why not make the doors magical, so they open on their own? Then he walked inside, put his hands on his waist, looked thoughtfully ahead. He asked, what's so different here? The atmosphere? The next second, a voice was heard greeting him as Argo, a next-generation training assistance system. The protagonist thought, so this room uses the results of magical engineering, which means all the money must be leaking into the hands of the idiots from the Yellow Tower. The system said that after registering the user's information, it will be able to create a personalized training course. Does he wish to register? He answered negatively. The system continued. Registration denied. He will continue training as an unregistered user. Please, he must select the desired difficulty level. MC asked, difficulty level. The system replied, this program has 100 levels, and he can train according to his standards. The protagonist said to start from level 1. The system said, accepted. The next second, 3 balls appeared in front of him. The system told him to burst 3 of them using physical or magical attacks. Using area attacks will end the training early. Before the text had finished playing, the system congratulated him. He had passed the first level. MC asked, is that so? Not bad. He also liked that area of effect attacks weren't allowed. Since he was at that level, he wanted to increase the difficulty. The system asked what difficulty level he wanted to choose. He replied, 100. Suddenly, the light in the room turned red, and the system issued a warning. Starting at level 80, the ball's size would decrease, but their speed would increase. They would also become aggressive toward the user. Elderly people, children, and pregnant women were advised to stop training due to the risk of death. The protagonist said it was fine and could continue. He stretched his neck and wondered how amazing it must be, what all the fuss was about. The next second, a ball flew past his head. The system informed him that he had to pop 1,000 balls using physical or magical attacks. Using area of effect attacks would end the training early. If the balls hit him more than 10 times, the training would end early. The next second, MC used a wind cutter, directing it at the balls, which scattered across the room. He thought, he just needs to pop all the balls, right? That move wouldn't have enough mana. Better to use as little force as possible. He repeated his attacks again and again, wondering if it would be most effective to reduce the size of the cutter and make it sharper. He dodged another ball and thought, but this training is already beyond the limits of a child, right? He flipped in the air, dodging another ball, and then delivered a few more attacks. The system congratulated him again. The protagonist knelt down, trying to catch his breath, and the system announced that he had passed level 100. MC lay down on the floor and said, that was a great warm-up. He thought, so mages of this generation have been training like this since they were little. Current standards have risen significantly compared to the past. He needs to work harder and eat well to make his muscles grow. He extended his hands in front of him, and the next second, Veronica walked into the room, and she asked in surprise, what? She didn't expect him to come. He noticed she'd been training here since morning, Veronica. She put her hand on her bag and asked, did he think she just dropped in for breakfast? Normally, he'd just ignore her words. What happened? He smiled and replied that he just decided to stop by. A healthy body means healthy mana, that was his motto. She was surprised. Why? That wasn't his motto. Then the protagonist wished her luck with her training. She watched him go, wondering if he'd eaten something bad for breakfast or something. And why the hell had he suddenly claimed a famous Oscar sage quote as his own? Why had the asshole who'd always looked down on her just because he'd been born into a noble family, even though they were both orphans, suddenly changed so much? She'd just been testing the waters when she'd asked him about this place. After that, she threw her bag on the floor and walking forward said, Argo, level 50 for warm-up. The system responded, accepted. She asked, is there any change in the ranking? Chillin is still there. Before she could finish speaking, the system reported that there were changes. She was surprised. What? This should show. A system window appeared in front of her, which said, first place, AAA, level 100, 9 minutes 57 seconds. Second place, Killian Lockwood, level 100, 14 minutes 2 seconds. Third place, Veronica Fricks, level 100, 14 minutes 55 seconds. She asked, AAA? Who the hell is that? The system said that it cannot disclose personal information. Veronica asked, an elder or something? No, the ranking only includes mages below level 5. And this someone broke the devilish 10 minutes? Isn't that a record on the continent? The system reported that it was a record. She asked, so who is this record holder? The system replied that it cannot disclose personal information. Veronica asked, is it really Oscar Crushin? The system again said that it couldn't disclose personal information. She said, damn, who cares? The system said swearing wasn't nice. Meanwhile, MC was walking down the hallway, stretching his shoulder muscles and thinking, will they probably hurt tomorrow? Then Maxim called him over. He was surprised. An elder? He came closer and wished him good morning. He asked if he'd had breakfast yet. He replied that he just had, just in time. He wanted to ask something. The protagonist asked, what's wrong? He replied that Fidelina had told him that the market merchants were refusing to buy their potion. The protagonist, surprised, asked, what? Why? Really? He replied, yeah, he thinks they're afraid of the Blue Tower's reaction. He's in charge of potion production, so he thought he should know. They're thinking about how to solve this. After a while, the MC, getting angry, thought, these pathetic idiots, how can he get away with them? And why is the line at the cafeteria so long today? There were postal workers standing nearby. One of them, turning to his comrade, asked where they were sent today. He answered, to deliver letters from the 1st to the 5th house on Velod Street. He asked, to the post office. Lucky him. His comrade laughed and asked, by the way, did he hear? They're raising salaries starting today. The protagonist watching them thought, are these guys windriders? I think so. One of them said, finally. Well, yeah, it looked like they could finally breathe easy. But then again, wouldn't it be enough to just focus on the lands and shut down the delivery already? His comrade replied, he knows the tower leader takes delivery seriously. He said he doesn't really understand why. What does she see in such a narrow market niche? The protagonist thought, delivery really doesn't occupy a large place in the market. They need a lot of workers, and the profits aren't exactly huge. It's not politically connected, so it's not a way to gain power. The only good thing is that ordinary citizens value this business above everything else the magic towers do. One of the postal workers smiled and, looking at his comrade, said, "But they need to work hard. There are plenty of good things here too." He noted that this was true. Besides, the old men treat them to food when they do a good job delivering heavy items. MC looked at them in surprise, then exclaimed, "He's sorry? Can he find out something? Do they often run into people during deliveries?" They answered, "Yeah, they at least need the recipient's signature to prove they delivered the goods." The protagonist shook one of the workers' hands and said, "It was a great help." He was grateful. The next second, he abruptly turned and ran in the opposite direction. After a while, Hummel was sitting at his desk. He looked at the protagonist and asked, "So he wants to use the wind riders, the delivery service workers, for door-to-door sales?" MC replied, "Exactly." He said he understood that since merchants didn't want to work with them, he wanted to interact directly with the customer. But was that really realistic, in his opinion? Their potions weren't exactly essential for everyday life. The protagonist said he could just develop new ones. He asked, "Innovation?" He replied that it couldn't even be called innovation. He started taking notes and added, "The White Tower has a mid-grade recovery potion with the highest potency. They could tweak it slightly and create 4 versions, divided by age and gender. That could be the main goal. They could even design it so that it could be consumed together. Then they could sell the elasticity potion and the muscle strengthening potion together. They just need to adjust the ingredients so they're accessible, and it'll work. Maybe they could work on the name then too." This may seem too abstruse for ordinary people. What would be better, since it will help the absorption of nutrients in the body? A few days later, the old man was sitting on a bench. Looking ahead, he said how he had aged, increasingly not feeling the energy he used to. The next second, a postal worker ran up to him and shouted, "Old man Graham." He looked at him and said, "Oh, he's already here." The guy said he was glad to see him again. He handed over a letter and said that there was a new one today. The old man, taking it in his hand, said that means his friend is not dead yet. The worker added, "They say that his generation is a generation of centenarians. Why should he die?" He was surprised. A generation of centenarians? Even he, an 80-year-old man, is beginning to notice that his head and body are only getting heavier with each passing day. The magician asked him, "Old man, are you sick?" He answered, "No, I just don't have the strength." The magician reached into his bag and asked, "Well, maybe he try this then?" He asked, "What is it?" The magician picked up a bottle and said it was their tower's newest invention, a tonic. It said S0 on the bottle. The old man asked, "What is it?" The magician explained that it was a 0-grade tonic for the elderly. It boosts the immune system and also adds energy. Graham asked, "Well, if an old man like him drinks this, what difference will it make?" He replied, "A lot. He sincerely hopes to see him for another 50 years, sir." Does he know old Miller, the man who lives on 2nd Street? He started drinking it last week and said today he's going hiking tomorrow. The old man was surprised, even though he has knee problems that make him barely able to walk. The magician whispered in his ear that this tonic was developed by Oscar himself, the extraordinary genius of the White Tower. Graham asked, "Oscar?" He seemed to have heard that name somewhere before. He replied, "It's the same magician who developed the cure for Cadena flu." The old man said, "Aha!" Then he coughed and asked, "How much does it cost?" If a genius made it, it must be expensive. He replied that it was recommended to take just 1 bottle a week, which cost 30 bells. He screamed, "No way. This isn't the first time someone's tried to rip him off with tonic. It never worked. He doesn't trust these lousy pharmacists anymore." The postal worker asked, "Did he really think he'd just bring him something so expensive?" "Of course not. He has a special offer for him." The old man looked at him and asked, "A special offer?" He asked, "He's registered in Siren, right? They have a special offer for Siren residents. If they sign up for an annual subscription, they'll deliver a bottle of tonic every week. With a price tag of 799 bells, they even offer a monthly installment payment plan." Graham thought that if he drank and smoked a little less, it wouldn't hit his pocket. Then the worker added, and the first bottle was free. Graham grabbed the tonic from his hand and, starting to drink, shouted at him to give it here, the rascal. "You should have said so right away." Sometime later, the old man was lying in his bed. He wondered if his body felt so light. He had breakfasted at the table and wondered if it was because of yesterday's tonic. He got on his bike and rode down the street. He thought, just from 1 bottle? After that, he rode up to a fountain, next to which stood a table with a chessboard. The old man, noticing him, shouted, "Hey, old man." Miller added, "I haven't seen you for so long," that he thought he was dead. He replied that he decided to lie down for a couple of days, otherwise his whole body was aching. He wouldn't leave before him. He wouldn't wait. He had to join him quickly. After a while, he placed a chess piece and shouted, "Checkmate." Miller asked, "Have you been learning to play this whole time? What's going on?" He replied that he was somehow able to concentrate better today, as if he'd looked 10 years younger. The old man in the group pointed at him and said, "Wow, he must have consumed something expensive while you were resting, right? Did his grandchildren give him some kind of elixir or something?" Miller added, "He has to tell." He replied, "Actually, it wasn't an elixir. He tried a tonic from the White Tower." The old man was surprised. "A tonic? So it's all homeopathy, right?" He replied that it wasn't. He thought this one really worked. They should listen. Meanwhile, in the tower, Lena said they had problems. The protagonist, filling out the paperwork, asked, "What's wrong? Did the potions go bad or something?" She handed him a newspaper and said, "Yeah, if things keep going like this, things are really going to go south. The Blue Tower is having a 50% sale on their potions." The newspaper said the Azure Dragon winter warming sale had begun. Moira Main had announced the sale to help the poor stay healthy during this harsh winter. MC told them to just look at them. How cute. She was indignant. Did he find that cute? They were obviously trying to drive them out of the potion market. With a discount like that, they wouldn't even make a profit themselves, so why else? With that, she covered her face with her hands. The protagonist, looking at her, said, "No big deal. They'll barely last 2 or 3 weeks." She yelled, "What? That's still almost a month," after which they probably won't even be able to set foot in the market. They should start selling Cadena flu cures along with the restorative potions. The protagonist replied, "No way. That's exactly what the Blue Tower wants. If they tried to profit off the Cadena flu disaster, the people would go crazy, which would give the Blue Tower an excuse to vilify them even more, saying they were holding people's lives hostage." She asked, "What then? Did he want them to just take the damage?" He asked, "They still had a ton of potions in stock, right?" She confirmed it, to the point that they wouldn't even notice if someone pocketed 100 or 2. He put the scroll aside and remarked that that was good. She, perplexed, shouted, "Okay?" He said it was the recipe for the Zero series of tonics, and they can afford to use all the mid-grade potions in stock to refine into tonics, right? She asked, "All the stock?" He asked, "What's the point of storing potions that don't sell? They'll even add bonuses. Let's say if one family buys 2 copies of the Zero series, they'll add on the discount, and then the purchasing power of families with children and the elderly will increase." Lena unrolled the scroll and, after thoughtfully reading the contents, said that from now on, she wouldn't fall for discounts anymore. His business acumen was frightening. He scratched his chin thoughtfully and said, "They also need to pay the Information Guild to spread one rumor. That's possible, right?" She asked what rumor. He answered, M0. Doesn't she think it would be funny if they spread rumors that it also helps with male potency? She looked at him in surprise and asked, "Will this help with sales?" He replied that she would see for herself. She just had to wait. Sales would be huge. In 3 weeks, the Blue Tower. Moira folded his arms and thought, "It's done. They've completely crushed them." He looked at the graph drawn on the board and thought, "The branch manager will like this." Then he heard a knock at the door. He told him to come in. The department head came inside and called him. He shouted in surprise. "Yes?" He asked. "Have you seen the news?" He replied, "No, not yet." Then the head of the Blue Tower's potion department hit him in the face with a newspaper and asked, "Then why are you smiling?" He threw the newspaper on the floor and told him to pick it up and read it. He replied, "Yes." Then the department head asked, "Is this the best he can do?" He shouted, "He sacrificed all their profits for these pathetic results." The newspaper said the White Tower had won big by launching tonic production. 10 million copies were sold in the first month, and the Zero series became a popular gift for aging parents. A male enhancement product, M0, was found to have an unexpected side effect of enhancing male health, leading to a shortage. The most effective tonic, the White Tower continues to write its own success story. Moira thought, tonics, not potions? But this isn't on the market, is it? It's impossible for him not to be aware of it. Then he noticed another column in the newspaper, which said it was worth emphasizing door-to-door sales methods and the subscription system, which made shopping from home as convenient as possible. He thought, damn. Naturally, with such methods, market sales volumes reflect real situations. The head of the potion department asked if it had already reached the point where the White Tower announced that they would keep the discounts on their potions forever. They said he had greatly impressed them. The newspaper said Oscar's statement. He was deeply touched by the actions of their comrades from the Blue Tower, and now, following their example, the White Tower promises to keep the discounts on their potions intact. He shouted that it was a scam. They had planned to sell it at this price from the very beginning. The head of the department stepped forward and asked, how did the people know this? They had never sold these vials anywhere before. Staring at this graph and thinking he had won, now, no matter how much pressure they try to exert, the potion market won't be able to simply ignore the White Tower, since people will want potions from that tower specifically. With that, he drew a graph further and added, and taking that into account, they'll end up around here. He'll be busy in the future. He asked, he's apologizing? What? He replied, to recoup the damage the Blue Tower suffered. Even if he works without a salary, the rest of his life won't be enough. After some time, the eastern part of the continent, the Yan dynasty, the monster waved its hand. The warriors standing below prepared to attack. One of them, putting his hand to his hip, shouted, they must stop it. Another warrior added, we can't let it reach the settlement. They must form a formation of 9 dragons and a wind cloud now. Before he could finish speaking, the monster's blow sent him flying backwards and then landed on the ground. One of the warriors standing in front wondered, what should they do now? He looked at the monster's confused face, and the next second, Shasha flew down from above and said, he's been found. The warriors looked at her in surprise. She said, he must return in peace to his lands if he doesn't want her to return him to the dirt. She pointed her hand forward and used her innate magic, the tireless wind. The monster seemed to evaporate in a matter of seconds. She said that this kind of thing has been happening more and more often lately. One of the warriors asked, is she from the White Magic Tower? She looked at him and asked, is he Zhongchen? He shouted, he apologizes for the late introduction. She was right. He was from the 9 Dragon sect. She removed her hood and said she was Shasha Maced, the head of the White Tower. She asked, did they bring what she asked the 9 dragon sect leaders for? He handed her a newspaper and confirmed it, telling her to take it. She asked for a newspaper from the Empire, right? She confirmed it. The sect leader said that lately, the West was full of articles about the White Tower. She looked at the newspaper in her hands in surprise and thought she was afraid to read. What if their tower had gone bankrupt in the 2 months she'd been gone? What if they were forever stripped of their status as one of the 4 great towers? If that happened, she'd never be able to look the master in the eye. The newspaper said the White Tower was continuing to write its success story. She looked at it in bewilderment and then began flipping through the pages. She asked, is this all fiction? Chun asked. What? She asked. Did he make up these stories to avoid upsetting her? He waved his hands and replied, of course it wasn't. She returned to reading and thought, okay, everything else, but what about the fact that the deliveries are doing so well? She hadn't even considered the success of this business at the moment. She hadn't started it for profit, she had other goals. Then she folded the newspaper and said, okay, in that case I'll take my leave. Please, he should send the payment for the order to the Imperial bank account. He bowed and replied, yes. The next second she disappeared into the sky, flying forward rapidly. She thought, what's going on in the White Tower right now? After a while, Lena folded her arms and remarked that he was definitely a wizard. MC asked, what's she saying? She replied, she just thought it all happened literally like magic. How could he even shake the Blue Tower with one newspaper story? She still couldn't believe it. Thanks to him, sales of recovery potions have skyrocketed. He asked, is the reaction positive? She replied, countless cities, besides Siren, are requesting to start selling them. She thought this perpetual discount strategy was working perfectly. He remarked, it's wonderful. She added that since things were going so well, she'd cast the line at the army too, in case they took the bait, but so far they were indifferent. He said the Blue Tower had offered them excellent conditions their entire lives, so they saw no need to change anything at the moment. And by the way, there weren't any problems with potions expected anytime soon, were there? So she didn't have to report all this to him. And why was she reporting to him anyway? She wondered, isn't he the head of the potions department? Then she asked, what about the budget report? He replied, once a month was more than enough. She asked, he leaves all the dirty work to her, and what, he's planning on having fun? He looked surprised. Having fun? He's busy too. Now that the warehouses are filled to the brim, he needs to take care of internal matters, like restoring lost magic textbooks. He figured it shouldn't take long, but no matter how much of a genius young Oscar was, a sudden revelation in the form of a top-level theory would seem strange to everyone, right? He already uses the use of an unrecognized genius too often. He'd just like to present something like this under a false name. A mage well-versed in magical theory, and also quite famous, influential, and mature. Ah, could someone like that suddenly fall out of the sky? Meanwhile, Schweinkok, the elder of the White Tower, a mage theorist, opened into the room, stretched his body, then looked ahead and said it had been a long time since he'd seen the sun. After some time, Maxim said in surprise, it's been ages. Fidelina stood nearby and asked, Schwein, is he quite early this time? What was it, 3 months? How was the research? Apparently nothing good. He confirmed this. They were sitting at the table, and then he grabbed his head and said that he couldn't manifest the spell. He absolutely had to present it at the White Night Festival this year, and he still couldn't find the correct value for finite mana. Maxim told him not to rush too much. His research was complicated. She asked, he'd already spent 7 years on this, right? He confirmed it as soon as he found the correct value in the calculations, the correct value. She said it must be hard for him. After that, Maxim asked what he thought about assistants. For example, there's Oscar. He looked up at him and asked, what? After that, he folded his arms across his chest and said, no way. A first-level mage wouldn't understand anything about this scientific work at the very least. Fidelina noticed that he was already second level. He asked, really? She indignantly added that he had worked hard. He asked if she hadn't been the one who couldn't stand him, saying he was wasting budget money without producing any results. She closed her eyes and said that was before. Maxim smiled and added that it was because he was too busy with his scientific work and didn't know about the latest developments in the White Tower. Didn't the atmosphere seem to have changed somewhat? He glanced around and confirmed it. People looked somewhat healthier. And in a way, one could say they'd won the lottery. Maxim said that it was all thanks to Oscar's potential finally being realized. He was surprised, and Fidelina added, you should have seen it. It's a shame he wasn't there. That's what happened. After a while, Schwein said thoughtfully, so, she's saying the guy turned out to be good at alchemy? She added that it wasn't just that. It was as if the spirit of the legendary merchant had possessed him. Such was his incredible business acumen. Maxim raised his index finger and added, he's also an excellent lecturer. He'd never have guessed he was only a second-level wizard. In terms of theory, he's on par with high-level wizards. And that's no exaggeration. He held his hands out in front of him and said, okay, they should calm down. He'd meet with him, since they recommended it, but he wasn't promising anything. He wasn't being condescending, it's just that his work is inherently complex. The same view from the first-floor windows and from the tower roof would be completely different. In other words, even though he was a genius, the breadth of a second-level wizard's perspective is limited. Not to mention, he was currently studying the restoration of the personal magic of a genius among geniuses, a wizard among wizards, Archmage Oscar Sage. After a while, the protagonist asked, Was it testing right away? He confirmed it. He should let him introduce himself first. His name is Xuan, one of the elders of the White Tower, specializing in magical theory and the restoration of lost spells. He's busy with a research project, but finishing it on his own on time seems impossible. MC thought, a mage well-versed in magical theory, well-known, influential, and mature, that's just what he needs. The very person who meets all his requirements. Meanwhile, the elder looked at him and said he was a little ashamed to have to test him when he himself was asking for a favor. The protagonist smiled and replied, no, when looking for an assistant for a research project, a knowledge test sounded perfectly logical. He remarked on the wonderful attitude. 50 minutes should be enough, right? The protagonist sat down on a chair and, smiling, said he'd try his best. He thought, with Elder Schwein at the helm, no one would even look at the contributions of some second-tier mage. He thought, jackpot. After a while, he started filling out the test, thinking it was nonsense. A 5th or 6th level theoretical mage could have solved it with his left heel. Judging by the level of the questions, he needed an assistant to spot basic errors, meaning he must be at the final stages, at least having almost found the correct mana values. Schwein looked at him in surprise and thought, a 2nd-level mage, and he's solving everything so quickly? That's simply impossible, unless he thinks like a high-ranking mage and is familiar with the concepts of higher theory. Seriously, the last page, maybe he was frustrated by his inability to solve these problems, so he was just idling. Yes, he must be astonished. These problems are of a completely different level of difficulty than those he's familiar with. At that moment, the protagonist thought, this is his spell. Apparently, there are still some books left. How could it be otherwise? Then he looked at the elder and, handing over the test, declared that he was finished. Schwein looked at him emotionlessly and said, good work. He wondered if he'd actually answered the last question without even attempting the calculations. Too bad. He started flipping through the pages and thought, he wanted to see how he'd approach the problems that waited them in his research, but he didn't even try, simply because the assignments were difficult. His expectations were certainly high due to Elder Maxim's recommendations, but the next second, he noticed with surprise that so far everything was correct. You'd have to be at least an academy professor to do this, and he was only a 2nd-level mage? Just how remarkable were his magical abilities? He frowned then, looking up at the protagonist, asked if he thought he'd answered the last question correctly. MC asked in surprise, excuse me? Of course. He asked which of the 4 mana stat spells he'd written down. He answered, all of them. Had he used dynamic stats, or was that the wrong approach? Judging by the formula's structure, certain mana values would lead to calculation errors, so he solved the problem by using dynamic values, which change according to processes. The elder's hands shook, and he said, Oscar, can he use these values right now to conduct trial tests of the spell? After a while, he cast the spell and asked in surprise, how is this possible? He grabbed the protagonist's hands and shouted, what assistant? He'll enlist him as a co-author of this thesis. He's very grateful to him. The protagonist asked in surprise, excuse me, what? He thought, that wasn't how it was planned, was it? Then he asked, was the spell he was researching? He replied, exactly. It was the final task of his testing, a magic developed by Oscar Sage, the head of the previous generation tower, Ouroboros. MC wondered, why did he even bother with this? This spell only requires a one-time injection of mana. By creating a virtually endless source of wind that directly violates the law of conservation of mana, it theoretically created a perfect perpetual motion machine, hence the name. Ouroboros, symbolizing eternity and the endless circulation of energy. It may sound pretentious, but by his standards, the spell was a failure. Humanity had conquered the land and water, but failed to reach the final frontier, the sky. Conquering the entire sky was the goal of the Blue Heaven Project. In the war against the demons, they began developing an airship with which they could gain an advantage, and for this purpose, he created the magic Ouroboros as an engine. Although the spell was almost perfect in theory, in reality, it didn't produce enough energy to propel the airship. He wondered if there were many other spells that would work better, but if the energy for an airship wasn't specifically needed, it certainly wasn't worth spending 7 years on. After that, the elder said, I need to tell Shasha quickly. The foundation for the delivery service is laid. How happy she'll be. The protagonist cried out in surprise, apologizing. What? His little one, the tower leader, founded the delivery service for this magic? He confirmed it. The protagonist thought, Shasha, how she'd miss her teacher. You can't force a guy to work on something like this without even deciding how to use the results. Then Schwein said that he and the tower's leader had fulfilled a long-held dream, that he had taken a step on the heavenly path, and that this was the first step in 7 years. The protagonist asked if he wanted to challenge the strife of the past. He confirmed this. Ouroboros would serve as the engine. He asked, but isn't it impossible to propel an aircraft using only the wind energy generated by this spell? He replied, with this spell alone, a normal aircraft wouldn't be able to take off. The protagonist asked, with just one? He replied, however, a lot has changed significantly in 23 years. He clarified, had it changed? He replied, now they possess it. After that, he demonstrated the device. And MC thought, techno-magic. Schwein replied, yea, sir. The Blue Skies Project, which developed this unique spell, was led by Oscar Sage, but the Yellow Tower also worked on it. eventually taking some of the results with them, and they developed the foundations of technomagic. Taking advantage of this, the Yellow Tower made a remarkable leap in progress after the war. The protagonist thought he should have been the first to lay the foundations of the technomagic discipline. Then the White Tower would receive all the funding. Schwein added that increasing the Ouroboros' output through technomagic and using this energy to propel the airship was the main goal of his work, and he planned to use the battery as a tool. Yes, let's say they fed the battery with Ouroboros' wind currents. And what if they then used this to continuously increase mana? This would become the ship's powerful heart, supplying it with endless energy. The protagonist asked, "Does the Yellow Tower know about this research?" He replied, "Of course that's not true. They consider the idea of airships absurd and are currently developing a different method of transportation, an iron carriage capable of endless travel on the ground. They call this development a train." MC thought, a train? He couldn't possibly know what kind of transportation it was, but he knew for sure that the head of the Yellow Tower wouldn't cling to failed projects. These trains would certainly add new paradigms to human life. However, they wouldn't be able to shock the world as much as the airship. Then he said, "So, he founded a delivery service despite the losses in order to subsequently monopolize the market using air routes." He replied, "Exactly. Right now, they rely exclusively on carts and ships to transport goods. People think everything will change once trains are used everywhere. But once airships hit the market, even that will instantly become obsolete, treading on previously unexplored paths to the sky." To kick things off, he and the Tower Master set themselves the goal of restoring the Ouroboros spell and revealing it to the world at the White Night Festival. Thanks to him, they would finally be able to fulfill their cherished wish. He thanked him from the bottom of his heart. The protagonist lowered his gaze and thought, the dream he had abandoned, deeming it incomprehensible. His students had not forgotten that. In that case, it was his duty as their teacher to pave the way. Then he extended his hand and said, since he was so determined, why not go a little further, to reveal the airship prototype itself to the world at the White Night Festival? Schwein looked at him in surprise, and MC asked, "How about that goal?" He turned around and said that he was right. Seeing something like this in real life would be a much more powerful impression than some vague concept, right? He said, of course. He said that it sounded logical. Then he reached for the notes and said, in that case, he should let him share these notes with him. He handed it to the protagonist and told him to skim through it for now. The protagonist took it in his hand and asked, what was it? He began to read and thought that he had never seen such formulas before. It was all related to the manufacture of technological batteries. After that, he turned around and asked if he would let him sit down and take a closer look at it. He answered, naturally. The protagonist continued studying the notes. He thought, were these formulas derived from Ouroboros? Quite thorough work. He began a huge number of conditions. After some time, Schwein asked, now that he had looked at it, what did he think? The protagonist smiled and said, the calculations are excellent. They'll start development right now, right? He said he was pleased to hear such words. That was the plan. But before they started, he had to tell him something. The protagonist asked what it was. If he was worried about confidentiality, of course he would keep it. He replied that it wasn't that. He had to apologize to him first. The MC asked for what? He wondered why he should apologize for a simple renewal of lost magic. Had he really recognized him? He said for dragging him into an extremely dangerous matter. He closed his eyes and added that as soon as they reveal the results of this work, the Yellow Tower would do everything to stop them, even if it meant getting their hands dirty. Then the protagonist sighed and thought. He thought it was something serious. He said it was nothing to worry about. Schwein looked at him and said, it seems he's taking the situation too lightly. He spread his arms and said, well, in broad daylight, they'll file a bunch of lawsuits with delusional claims. And under cover of darkness, they'll likely try to kill them both. He asked if that bothered him at all. He'd replied in the negative. If he let the fear of the Yellow Tower rule his life, he'd only confuse himself with excuses and never do anything. That outcome terrified him far more. If he hid in fear, he'd never escape the life they were living now, and all that remained would be an empty shell. Their White Tower, simply because it lost power, ceded the potion market and military contracts to the Red Tower. They even have to tiptoe around the Yellow Tower, simply because they research magical theory. He believes this work will serve as the strength that will allow them to rise from their knees. Thinking about it fills him with faith that he can overcome any external threats. In response, Schwein laughed and said he felt a little uneasy. It was as if he'd stolen all the cool words from him. He replied that he was already cooler, without even saying it. He asked why he hadn't realized he was so interesting before. He extended his hand and said that from now on, he would rely on him. The protagonist, smiling, shook his hand. On the first day, Schwein, sitting on the floor, concentrated a spell and said, here, won't using the Euler equation ultimately reduce the spell's effectiveness? The protagonist, sitting next to him, said thoughtfully, he's right. But if they get rid of it, the stability of the process of interacting with technomagic will significantly decrease. Since their goal is to launch the airship, perhaps they should sacrifice some loss of power and prioritize stability. He remarked that this was a good point, so they'll leave it at that. Day 4. Schwein, looking at the notes, said that modifying an already excellent spell is even more difficult. One careless adjustment, and errors pop up everywhere. MC, sitting next to him, thought he was doing an excellent job. After that, he said, It's quite stable now, but if they want even more certainty, maybe it would be better to transfer the entire structure to a parallel one, even if it's more difficult. The protagonist said he was right. Since he would still have to integrate the new calculations for those in magic, there was no need to cling to the old sequential structure. He replied, fine, then they'll try that. Then MC stood up and looking at the elder, said, Elder, he's already missed both breakfast and lunch. Should I bring him something to eat? He looked surprised, then told him to grab him some coffee in that case. The next second, the lights in the room went out. He turned around and asked, did the power go out again? The protagonist added, they've been coming here a lot lately. They might as well take a break if they have the chance. He'll bring coffee and triple espresso. Day 6. Schwein walked forward, looked at the spell, and said he'd been thinking about something for the last couple of days. Would he have been able to finish his research if he hadn't met him? The protagonist replied, of course he would have. He thanked him for his words. The protagonist thought he meant it. Then the elder added, frankly, he didn't believe they'd progress enough to show off the airship itself, but he hadn't expected them to perfect the spells so quickly, and now it was time to really set their sights on it. He thanked him again from the bottom of his heart. The protagonist said, Elder. The light went out the next second, and he smiled, adding, this mana station has no sense of tact at all. The elder smiled and said, oh well, but their magic shines even brighter, so things aren't so bad. At that moment, an announcement came from the broadcast room. Mage Oscar, please, he must go to the deputy towerhead's office immediately. MC was surprised. The elder told him to go. He turned around and added, now it's his turn to show something impressive. He will definitely complete the development of the battery that will interact with Ouroboros, no matter what. So he shouldn't worry. After a while, the deputy tower head looked at the protagonist and said, he thinks he's noticed that the power outages have been increasing lately, right? The protagonist confirmed this. It feels like they're happening every 2 days. He said the mana supply is being interrupted, so he thinks the mana station needs cleaning. The protagonist asked, he means cleaning the slime, right? He'll take care of it. Hamel smiled and thanked him. They've been short-handed lately, and no one's been cleaning up. There must have been quite a bit of slime accumulated in the station area. MC said if he cleaned it up, the outages should stop. When were they supposed to start? He replied, tomorrow at 9 o'clock. He was supposed to meet Miss Veronica at the tower entrance. The protagonist asked in surprise, Veronica? He thought a 4th level mage would really be needed there. He laughed and said that newbies were supposed to work with an experienced partner, and Miss Veronica had seemed worried lately. Would it be bad if they could somehow inspire each other? After that, the protagonist bowed and said, okay. The deputy tower chief laughed lightly and said, in that case, he'll be relying on him. The protagonist thought, so the slime was just an excuse. He wanted him to talk to Veronica. He looked so naive, but in reality, he was surprisingly smart. After a while, Veronica looked away and, crossing her arms, asked why he was so late. MC replied and said good morning to her, Veronica. He approached the open carriage door and asked, but he was 5 minutes early, wasn't he? She told him to shut up and get in quickly. They were leaving. A few seconds later, they were on their way. Veronica said, hey. The protagonist looked at her in surprise, and she told him to let her warn him. They weren't in the lecture hall today. He replied, yeah, they were heading to the mana station. She replied, no, she meant, well, she's the leader on this mission. Maybe he knows a little more, just a little more about mana theory than she does, but she has a lot more work experience than he does. He asked, so basically, she wants him to not try to act like a lecturer outside of class? She replied, exactly. He thoughtfully said that he understood. There was an awkward silence, and then he said, she looks tired. Didn't get a good night's sleep? She replied that if he'd noticed, he should shut up. She needed at least some sleep. He asked, what's wrong? Is something bothering her? She said indignantly that she'd just told him a second ago that this wasn't a lecture hall. He smiled and said, he's just curious. Maybe he could help. If there's somewhere to go, it's worth taking advantage of. She turned her gaze to him. Veronica Fricks, a sorceress with an outstanding talent, which young Oscar had often noticed in his notes. He'd always been curious about this talent, which he'd emphasized so often. He couldn't pass up such a good opportunity. And then he smiled and asked, what's wrong? Don't you think it would be better if you just talked it out? She looked at him silently, then thought, well, by the way, it's his fault she's been sleeping poorly lately. She wants to master a wind as forceful as Elder Maxim's, but she can't even fake it. No wonder she was so angry she couldn't sleep. So she just continued training. So she wasn't exactly asking him for advice, but rather receiving fair compensation for her lack of sleep. She asked, what did he just say? He thought she'd answered, then said, thoughtfully, so far she'd been doing great, but she'd hit a wall recently. It must have been the last lecture on the nature of mana, right? She replied, yeah, she wants her wind to be like Elder Maxim's, but no matter how much she practiced, she couldn't imbue it with that kind of character. He replied, that's understandable. That kind of wind doesn't suit her. She said, he says that because he doesn't know her. She's always wanted her wind to be powerful, and she trained with that in mind. He said, maybe that's true, but sometimes you can tell a lot more from the outside. For example, what kind of wind does she think suits him? She replied, bold, downright infuriating. He laughed and said that wasn't true at all. His wind was known for being very cozy and warm. She was surprised. Known? Well, she'd never heard of him like that. He thought that was a thing of the past. Then he said that he found it strange too. He'd never considered himself particularly good-natured. Veronica, she wishes to wield a strong, fierce wind, right? She confirmed it. He added, well, the nature of mana doesn't depend on what she wants. It's all about finding what suits her best. She asked, what suits her best? Then she lowered her gaze and paused, then said, but by that logic, the wind should be infuriating, not cozy. He chuckled and said, maybe. After a while, the coachman said, the mages have arrived at the entrance to the monastery station. MC stretched his entire body, then looked ahead and was surprised. It was clear why the power kept going out, since the station was running like that. Veronica immediately began attacking the slime, using a wind press. The protagonist thought in surprise, thinking he was beginning to understand why young Oscar had spoken so respectfully of her. A mage of the acceleration type, capable of casting a spell so quickly, that combination. While he was thinking, she had already used the wind press several times. He thought the speed with which she activates it is astounding. Even 5th level mages need to concentrate for 7 seconds. Perhaps she could be trained to be a spellcaster, no worse than Majiro Wilson. Majiro's rapid-fire spell bombardment prevented even high-level demons from getting close. If he could mold Veronica into such a talent. At that moment, she turned around and said indignantly, hey, is she supposed to be working here alone? And he's just tagging along for company? He walked forward and said he understood. She attacked another slime and said there was a bunch of that nasty stuff gathered at one entrance, just so he knew. He snapped his fingers and wondered, just at the entrance? He walked a little further. Veronica, noticing his actions, shouted, Oscar, he should forget about the interior for now. He has to deal with those outside first. He asked if she thought that was strange. She asked what? He told her to watch where the slime was moving. They were all gravitating toward the exit, as if trying to get as far away from the center of the monastery station as possible. She said, he talks like the slime has intelligence. They just crawl wherever they want. He replied that it was precisely because they lacked intelligence that they relied on instinct even more. The strongest instinct was survival. She placed her hand on his waist and asked, what? He thought some terrible monster had taken up residence behind this hall. He said they would find out soon, pointed his finger at the slime, attacking it, and suggested they speed up. She continued attacking the slime and said they weren't in a lecture, so he shouldn't tell her what to do. After some time inside the station, the mages stopped near a huge cocoon. Veronica asked in surprise, what is that? MC replied, a white silkworm cocoon, a type of silkworm also known as a celestial silkworm. Unlike regular silkworms which eat mulberry leaves, these feed on mana, and that's most likely why it appeared here. There's a huge accumulation of mana here. Veronica asked, is that a butterfly? The creature hasn't hatched yet, has it? He replied, not quite. In fact, it already has. To be more precise, it's currently undergoing a metamorphosis. She said, so this, and not the slime, was the cause of the mana outages. All that was left was to sort it out and the problem would be solved. He replied, there's 2 pieces of news, good and bad. She said the good news first. He said, the white silkworm in its chrysalis state doesn't pose much of a threat. If they call Elder Maxim, it'll all be over in 5 seconds. She said, so it's no big deal. He just scared her for nothing. Hey, what bad news? He started to take off his cloak and added, the newborn white silkworm butterfly is extremely hungry and devours everything living nearby. She said, well, whatever. They just need to call the elder before it gets to that point. He said, he's not finished yet. Veronica was surprised. Hey, what was that sound? The protagonist folded his cape and said, judging by the way the slime was pouring out so uncontrollably, the metamorphosis was almost complete. And that sound? The sound of cocoon threads tearing from within. She must prepare for battle. She screamed indignantly, damn. What the hell is so huge? Silkworms can't fly, right? He replied, yeah, they usually can't. However, this one flies quite comfortably. At that moment, a huge butterfly appeared in front of them, and Veronica screamed in fear that they must run. The protagonist said no. She closed her eyes and screamed, what? Why not? He replied, if they run away, it will fly to the nearest settlement and start eating the people there. They must stop it here to prevent that from happening. She looked at the monster and sighed. Then she held out her hand and said, okay, he should stay behind. He looked at her in surprise, wondering if she was trying to protect him. A 4th level mage versus a silkworm. After that, he crossed his arms in front of him and used a message, aiming it forward and thinking that they would hope that their coachman hadn't left yet and was waiting for them. Then he could receive his message and call for reinforcements. At that moment, Veronica created a huge magic symbol above herself and said, okay, stop looking down on her, it's annoying. She used a wind press, aiming it directly at the insect. After that, she used a wind palm, a jet accelerator. She shouted, okay, let's go. The next second, MC grabbed her by the hood, and she indignantly shouted, oh shit, what? He pointed his hand forward and used a breeze. And then he said, transparent pollen, hidden by a white silkworm, instantly corrodes everything it touches. She almost died just now. Apparently, the silkworm deliberately gave her an opportunity to attack. It's much smarter and more cunning than she thinks. The insect flew on, and Veronica asked in surprise how he even noticed the pollen. It's impossible to see. He replied that he concentrated his mana in his eyes and analyzed every particle floating in the air. She screamed, what kind of crazy nonsense is this? He turned around, and she asked, does he mean to say it's possible? He replied, of course, the method is. Before he could finish speaking, the butterfly began to make a loud sound. He said he thought they should set up a wind shield first. The next second, a powerful beam of energy was aimed at them, and the protagonist created a shield and said he'd explain later. He rose to his feet and thought, this is bad. He only blocked one attack, 70% of his mana was gone. He couldn't handle another one with his remaining mana. The only good news is that the celestial silkworm needs about 5 minutes to attack again. Then he turned around and said, Veronica, they need to do something in the next 5 minutes. She said, they're not moving. He asked, what? She looked at her injured leg and said, damn my legs, they're not moving. He thought, even though he blocked that beam, it looks like some of it got through the gaps in the windshield. She shouted for him to go first. Even so, she could still buy himself some time. He needs to get out of here if he doesn't want to die here like a dog, he thought. Liar. The air around her was shaking with tremors. He put his hand to her head. She looked up at him in surprise and asked, what? He replied, no need to shake with fear. He won't leave her here. She screamed indignantly. Who said she was afraid at all? He said, it's okay. A mage of the White Tower would never abandon a comrade. He put his hand on the ground and used acceleration. He thought, there's about a third of his mana left. He needs to finish it all in one go. Then, jumping up and down a few times, he ran forward. Veronica stretched out her hand and shouted, no! The insect started making noises again, and Veronica screamed, you're crazy! What the hell is he thinking? She told him to leave, so if he dies, he'll be the fool who complains underground. She won't leave him alone, she'll bury him again. Then MC used his ability, getting closer to the insect, and thought, good thing he brought that thing, just in case. He aimed his weapon at it and asked, is it still calm? Bye. With that, he fired. The insect screamed loudly and a powerful wave erupted from the protagonist's weapon. The protagonist thought, just one shot and it's already knocked out his shoulder, but he didn't even hit his head yet. Then he looked ahead in surprise and thought, has the beam already recharged? The next second, the insect aimed the beam straight at the ceiling, destroying it. The protagonist screamed. This creature was going to escape from the very beginning. He thought, we can't let it get away now, but he didn't have enough mana left to catch up with it. Then he noticed a silk thread flying behind the insect. He suddenly jumped forward, grabbing the end of it. Then the insect carried him away, and Veronica screamed, he's crazy. Why did he grab that thing? The silkworm carried him higher and higher, screaming loudly, after which the protagonist began to sway from side to side. He thought he was going to throw up. Then the insect accelerated, opening its terrifying mouth full of sharp teeth. MC screamed, what a prude. He pointed his weapon at it and screamed, hey, bug, does it know why people need 2 hands? So that, if anything, he could strike again. He lowered the thread and, moving his other hand to the weapon, fired, hitting him right in the head. He asked, but everyone has the same head, right? Victory is his. The next second, he began to fall and said, Veronica, he has exhausted all his mana, so she must save him. She shouted, air cushion, wind palm. She created magical symbols in her hand and shouted, Oscar, the spell is ready. The protagonist fell onto several air hands, and when he was close enough to Veronica, she shouted, hey, is he alive? She reached closer and said, no. Before she could say this, MC opened his eyes. She screamed in fear and slapped him in the face, shouting that he scared her. At that moment, Maxim ran into the room. He shouted, Oscar, Veronica. Veronica turned around and said, Elder. The protagonist said, Elder. He dislocated both shoulders. Veronica screamed in surprise. What? Dislocated? He added, and Veronica hit him. Maxim asked, what? She replied that she didn't know. The next day, Veronica, standing next to the protagonist's bed in the hospital, asked if he saw it. They'd already been written about, and the reporters were working harder than she thought. So, what was it like for him to be a hero? He read the newspaper's contents and said he didn't know. He used to like it, but not so much now. She, leaning on a crutch, asked if it could lead to personal finance. He should understand, right? He replied that he was just that kind of person. He cared about his own people first. She said, well, that means he's not as ambitious as they think. He said she could take all those ambitions for herself. The next second, Frank ran into the room shouting, Oscar, is he okay? The protagonist looked at him and asked, is he done with his personal training? He answered, yeah, the prisoner was released. He came running as soon as he heard the news. The protagonist said, no wonder he was so disheveled. He asked, what? MC thought. His gaze definitely became sharper. He thinks that now he can be called a full-fledged 4th level mage. He asked, what even happened? And what was Veronica doing here? She indignantly said that she asked him not to be familiar with her. He asked, why? They are friends. She indignantly shouted, that's not true. Not at all. Does he even understand what kind of hell he made her life at the academy because he blabbed to everyone that they knew each other? He asked, so how was he supposed to know? She didn't tell him anything. She shouted, oh, he's a little thing. Then she put her hand to her head and said, he should forget it. There's no point in finding out anything now. Hey, Oscar, he asked, right? She turned her gaze on him and asked, isn't he by any chance AAA? He asked, surprised. What does that mean? She asked. He seriously doesn't know. He answered negatively, and she said, then it doesn't matter. Then Maxim entered the room and said, Veronica, Frank, they're both here. Frank turned around and smiling said, Elder, they haven't seen each other in a while. He said the deputy towerhead was calling him. Frank asked, why? He replied, Frank, for sure to see the results of the training. And Veronica, to reward for her feat. He said, good. Then Maxim approached the protagonist and asked how he was feeling. What happened to his shoulders? He replied that he was fine. After that, the elder handed him the box and said that, in that case, he thought he could give it to him now. The protagonist reached for the box and asked, and this? He replied, the core of a celestial silkworm. And by the way, he got the silk from it too. MC asked. Both, but the value of the core of such a spiritual being, even the tiniest one, would cost hundreds of thousands. He replied that the deputy chief had said he deserved it, and he and Fidelina agreed. The protagonist asked what about Veronica. He replied that he'd already asked her. She said she hadn't really participated in the fight, and that it would be fair to give him the core. He replied that in that case, he'd gladly accept it. Maxim asked if he'd sell it. The protagonist thought for a moment, then said he'd eat it right away. He'd just gone through a metamorphosis, so there probably wasn't much mana left, and besides, the celestial silkworm core had exceptional restorative properties. Maxim said he couldn't wait to see the results. He'd keep an eye on it. MC thanked him and then popped the core into his mouth, a surge of energy coursing through his body. He thought calmly. He closed his eyes, concentrating his energy. Maxim, watching him closely, thought that he probably hadn't consumed any decent ones besides that underground elixir, and how smoothly he wielded the mana purified from it. Apparently, genius really does shine through in everything. Impressive. Then the protagonist opened his eyes, and Maxim decided to ask if he'd come to his senses. He thanked him for waiting, despite the late night. Maxim said, well, he'd finally reached level 3, and he congratulated him. MC stretched his shoulder and said that it felt great, even better than before. The elder laughed and said, wonderful news, and now he should rest. He'll be going. The protagonist thanked him and wished him good night. After that, he looked out the window and thought, but he didn't feel like sleeping yet. He thoughtfully reached for his weapon and, taking it in his hand, thought maybe he should try developing a spell that would help reduce the recoil. Meanwhile, at the mana station, Dryan stepped forward in surprise and asked, who's coming? No one's allowed in here. They were still checking for any threats other than the celestial silkworm. Nebula Grime laughed and handed over his business card, saying it was fine. He was from the Royal Special Investigation Department. Harak took the card and asked, Special Investigation Department? What brought a representative of such an important department here? He replied that an order had come to investigate the incident. Finding a celestial silkworm cocoon so close to an urban area is a great rarity. He would cooperate, right? They shook hands. He replied, well, yes, since an order had come from the royal family. He thanked him in return, then, covering his eyes with his hand, said that in that case, he would begin reading the mana traces. He concentrated and said, okay, I'll take a look. He stepped forward and said, 1 second-level mage and 1 fourth-level mage. The report said that 2 white tower mages defeated the monster, right? He confirmed it. They'd come here to clear the slime, but they'd found this. Nebula walked on and said, wow, impressive. So the battle had taken place here. Multicolored streams of mana were flying in all directions. Harak had said it was true. The celestial silkworm had undergone a metamorphosis here. He thought, yes, that massive clot of concentrated mana must have been the celestial silkworm's trail. One of the White Tower mages had engaged him. The speed was acceptable, but his nerves were frayed. She soon descended and was wounded, apparently in the leg. So whoever had defeated the silkworm was... who the hell was that? There wasn't even a trace left, just a blurred trajectory. Such vigorous action, and he hadn't even said a word? This was practically the purest battle scene he'd ever seen. Just how capable was this guy? Then he walked a little further and noticed a shell casing on the floor. Taking it in his hand, he wondered if the mage had used a weapon, a firearm in particular, a specialized one at that. The mana trail ended there. Did he really chase the celestial silkworm when it fled into the sky? This 4th-level mage was absurdly bold and courageous. After that, Nebula turned around and asked what the 4th-level mage's name was. Harak replied, Veronica Fricks. He said, Veronica Fricks, impressive. To think she'd defeated the celestial silkworm practically single-handedly. She has a bright future ahead of her. He apologized and asked, what? It turns out he was mistaken. The celestial silkworm had been defeated by a 2nd-level mage, a guy named Oscar. Nebula looked at him in bewilderment and thought, a 2nd-level mage could leave so few traces? It's unthinkable. Oscar? Somehow this name seems familiar. Right, that vaccine. After that, he asked, wasn't it Oscar who developed the cure for Cadena flu? He answered, yes indeed. He has a nasty character, but his abilities are undeniable. Nebula looked at the shell casing in his hand and thought, no wonder it looked familiar. This is Jack the Gunslinger's personal weapon, Trinity. But a 2nd-level mage used this crazy gun? It would be hard to cope with that kind of recoil with just mana, and he must be extremely muscular. Then he said that he would like to know more about Oscar, if he doesn't mind. What kind of person is he? Meanwhile, MC, reading a book, wondered why the hell all the books were in such terrible condition. He was in the library of the White Tower, sorting through the books on the shelf. He thought, more like a bookstore somewhere on the outskirts than an archive in a mage's tower. The White Tower Library should be a place that preserves hundreds of years of magical history, filled with priceless tomes, each legendary in its own right. At least, that's how it had been in his time. But now it's more like a junior high school library at some academy. As the saying goes, even the brightest flower doesn't live more than 10 days. Who would have thought that the stories filling this library would one day evaporate into thin air, especially since he never imagined that he himself would be the cause of it. But he's certain, before confronting the first priest all those years ago, he made copies of all the books in the library, absolutely trusting them. Edna Sol Laplace. Where did she go? She promised to fulfill her duty. Even if he died, she wouldn't disappear for 20 years, unless something happened. No, that's not about her. He just needs to find her himself. It's time to bring back the advanced spells that will allow their mages to surpass their limits. and he needs to strengthen his foundation as soon as possible. The financial issues are mostly resolved, and the potions department won't need him anytime soon. After that, he noticed the librarian and apologized. He asked if she was the librarian here. She put the book back on the shelf and, turning to him, confirmed it. He asked if she could help him find texts on dragons from the last 20 years. She said, of course, he should come down. She'll show him everything. He thanked her, and approaching her, thought, that's good. Apparently, even with the funding issues, the management spared no expense in acquiring new knowledge. Then the librarian started collecting books and said, these 3 books. The protagonist thought, wait, she took out another book. He thought, why does this all look like fairy tales? She showed him the book cover and, smiling, said, this one is especially interesting, simply top-notch. He thought, what kind of top-notch book? The librarian said, it's about Oscar Sage. When the dragons fled after seeing the high priest's terrifying spell, Oscar alone remained to fight him. The story is based on real events, so it's much more gripping than the others. He asked, is there anything about real dragons, not just ordinary fairy tales? She replied that they don't have that. Most likely, it would be better for him to contact the capital's library. He thought, after all, one could find a book like that on every corner here. Then she looked at the book in her hands and added, oh, but she heard that there was a dragon that fought alongside people until the very end. The protagonist asked, does she mean Edna? She answered, exactly her. She was Oscar's friend, right? But apparently, this dragon, too, had followed its kin who had left earlier. The protagonist thought that wasn't true. Even if the heavens had split, she wouldn't have abandoned them. She alone was recorded in the Chronicles of the Enlightened as one disillusioned with her kin. He sighed and thought that if he was going to find Edna, he'd need to find a different approach. The next day, Fidelina clapped her hands joyfully and said they'd finished distributing funds for their mage's requests for activities outside the tower. Maxim was sitting nearby. He said how wonderful. And yet, not long ago, they'd discussed selling working equipment simply to survive. They laughed, looking at each other, and at that moment, the deputy tower leader, sitting across from them, said they should prepare well so such questions never arise again. How were their young mages doing lately? Maxim replied that they continued to receive offers from outside, but remained loyal. Hamel said he'd like to reward their children for their loyalty to the White Tower. But until they recovered the high-level spells, this situation would remain. He should have studied harder while he was young. Fidelina extended her hand and told him not to be so hard on himself. In any case, there's a limit to how many high-level spells one person can learn. Maxim added that only the Tower Master has access to the advanced spells they know. She said the problem is that when Lady Shasha became Tower Master, they only had 6. Then the Deputy Tower Master took a sip of his drink and said that just 20 years ago, they possessed 64 types of high-level magic, each considered a perfect masterpiece. Captain Chester never thought of returning, right? Maxim said, definitely about this man. He says he won't return until he completes his last mission. Hamel said that if he returned, they would have access to a large number of high-level spells. They can't solve this problem right now, so he suggests dealing with it gradually. What's next on the agenda? Fidelina said there's been talk of a certain mage killer in the northern region recently. Perhaps we should impose a curfew after 10 for a while? Maxim exclaimed in confusion. What? She was surprised. What's wrong? He replied that Oscar had mentioned he was going to Baran and had already left. She shouted in surprise. What? He had to tell him to come back immediately. He replied that he had left this morning, so he was probably already far from Siren. Hamel shouted for them to contact their branch in Baran right now. They had to tell them to send Oscar back immediately as soon as they found him. No matter how capable he was, he had only reached the 3rd level. He was still a mage who needed to be protected. Meanwhile, MC got out of the car and looking ahead said, wow, lights are shining on all sides. He was in the independent city of Baran. Walking forward, he thought just 30 years ago there were only chimneys. Apparently, the casino owners bought up all the land, and it suddenly became so luxurious. Okay, is he even going that way? At that moment, Killian called out to him. The protagonist turned around in surprise, and he said he was waiting for him, Oscar. The protagonist asked in surprise, him? He confirmed it. Someone wanted to see him. MC thought, the Blue Tower? No wonder. They were just waiting for an opportunity to get revenge, huh? Judging by his mana, he was about a level 4 mage, and yet he had barely left Siren, and they had already sent someone after him. He asked if he refused. He replied that they would have to drag him by force. The protagonist sighed and asked, is that how it is? Well then, apparently, he has no choice. He noticed Killian rushing to attack. Swinging his leg, he suddenly threw up a barrier in front of himself, defending himself from his attack. Killian flew back and asked in surprise, did he block? The protagonist said that now they will see if he hits. He thought, what the hell? A shield with increased durability and impulse absorption was shattered in one blow, even without mana. If he lost control, it was all over. After that, he swung his leg and kicked a metal can at the opponent's head, but the opponent ducked his head and asked, what the hell? Some kind of tin can. The next second, the tin can exploded behind him, the blast wave flying forward, sending Killian flying to the ground. MC grabbed him by the clothes and swinging, slammed him into the ground, after which he jumped back and thought, had he really underestimated him? The next second, Killian rose to his feet and said that he was strong. He would have to take this seriously too. The protagonist told him to stop bluffing, but the next second, his opponent charged again. The protagonist thought, accelerate? No, it's a jet boost. When did he manage to cast that? Okay. At this speed, he can still react. At that moment, Killian became even faster. He thrust his leg forward, hitting the protagonist in the chest, sending him flying into the wall, cracking it. He fell to the ground and his opponent approached him and asked, "Are you still conscious? At this level, he should be unconscious." MC, rising to his feet, said, "Yeah, it didn't even hurt." Killian thrust his hand forward and said that his next blow would decide the outcome. The protagonist also thrust his hand forward and told him to begin. Even if his eyes were unable to follow him, he would never miss the movement of mana, which he had once felt, revealing himself. He thrust his fist forward and used the Oscar-style martial art, secret technique, Chapter 1, The Sound of Waves. Killian, jumping up, thought in surprise, the sound of the surf, and why swing it in the air? Have you given up or something? He noticed the protagonist's fist pointed at him and then thought, too bad. The next second, he was surprised when a powerful attack landed on his chest, sending him flying into a nearby wall and then landing on a trash can. He coughed loudly, and MC approached him and told him not to move. He must have ruptured his internal organs. He asked, "What kind of technique is that?" He answered, "Resonance. A massive wave of air is sent toward the target at a resonance frequency and its internal vibrations. Different objects shake with much greater force and vibrate at the same frequency. Entering the body, the wave causes severe internal damage, like hitting a bull through a mountain." Killian looked at the protagonist and said he didn't understand. When did he become so strong? The protagonist, coming closer, spoke as if they had already fought. He answered, "Fought several times." He asked, "Where?" He answered, "Mostly on the White Tower's combat training ground." The protagonist asked him why he suddenly started talking about the White Tower. He thought, wait, he only said it to make sure what the name of the person looking for him was. Killian answered, "Hamel Grimwiz, the deputy head of the White Tower." MC asked in surprise, "The deputy head of the tower? Why?" He replied that he had been told that a dangerous assassin, a so-called mage hunter, was working in the north, so he wanted him to return. The protagonist shouted that he should have said so right away. He replied that he had said so. The protagonist shouted, "What about how he was going to take him away by force if he refused?" He replied that the deputy head of the tower said to use force if words didn't work. MC grabbed his head and thought, what kind of people even talk like that? He seriously lacks communication skills, even at a basic interpersonal level. Okay, wait, this infuriating manner of speaking, why does he seem so familiar to him? Then he asked what his name was. He replied, he is Killian Lockwood, a mountain warrior of the forest. The protagonist thought, a warrior of the forest? Lockwood? No way. Then he asked if he happened to know someone named Raydan Lockwood. He replied, yeah, that's his proud father. He was even an ally of Oscar Sage, Raydan Lockwood, a level 8 White Tower mage from the Forest tribe and a martial artist, his closest friend and comrade, known as a White Lion. When he first arrived in the White Tower, his communication skills were literally through the floorboards, just like Killian here. So, to put it simply, he just beat up his best friend's son. After some time, the protagonist pulled Killian out of the trash, sat down next to him, leaning his back against the wall, and said, "This is bad." The protagonist replied that he knew, and it was a big deal. Killian asked if he had ruptured internal organs. What did he care? He replied, yes, there was a reason. So what's the problem? Does it hurt a lot? He said it hurt, but for a warrior of the forest, that's nothing. The real problem is that he took the task, but he won't be able to complete it in his state. MC apologized for this, and he said that he didn't say this for the sake of an apology, he would have to do it for him. The protagonist looked at him and asked if he hadn't just said that he needed to be escorted. He replied that the fee for refusing the order was huge. If he cancelled, he would become a homeless person. The protagonist felt ashamed and said, of course he can't turn into a street thug. And what is the task? Killian pointed forward and told him to look there, the voice of heaven. He took the order to guard her. Sometime later, at the Grand Baron Hotel, MC knocked on the door. Evelyn asked who it was. The protagonist said, Killian Lockwood from the White Tower. She opened the door for him and said, welcome. She is Evelyn, Miss Marin's manager. The protagonist replied that it was nice to meet her. Then she noted that in real life he is somewhat different from the rumors. He said, most likely, it's all about the suit. Then they went inside, and Marin asked, Evelyn, who is this? Maintenance? She approached her and told her to come up. Miss Marin. It was the man who had taken the request. She turned around and said, oh, hello. Nice to meet you. This is Marin Maria. In response, the MC also introduced himself. He was a 4th level White Tower mage, Killian Lockwood. Evelyn approached and asked if she could offer them tea. The protagonist replied negatively and Marin asked for water. Then the singer looked at the protagonist and thanked him for accepting the order without much explanation. She had heard that his success rate for orders was over 80%, and she thought he would be more selective. He replied that he wouldn't say he was particularly picky about his work. Then he thought, Marin Maria, according to Killian, is a singer who rose to stardom 3 years ago thanks to a unique tone of voice that makes everyone feel more comfortable after hearing it. She's been called the voice of the heavens and a singing saint. Then she put her hands to her chest and said, maybe she is overstepping her boundaries. But MC thought how he thought she got a rather sophisticated nickname in just 3 years. But she really does have a nice voice. She asked if he was a responsible person. He replied, of course he was. And then he thought, well, I guess. He is Raydan's son and a member of the Forest Warrior tribe. They have always been fiercely loyal, so he must be. She smiled and said, what a joy. She thinks responsibility is the coolest thing in a person. He said, I see. And then he thought, why such questions? After that, Evelyn put a tray with mugs on the table and said, "Marin, her water." She replied, "Wow." Then she sat down on the sofa next to him and said that she would explain the details of his mission. She would get to the point. "Please, he must protect Marin from an assassination attempt," he asked. "Assassination attempt?" She put the letter on the table and said that recently she had been receiving constant threats, calling for the concert at Baran Stadium to be cancelled. After they ignored them, death threats started arriving. They must have hired an assassin. The protagonist put his hand on the letter and asked, "Do they know who is sending these letters?" She confirmed it. Ara Sweet, their rival, who debuted 2 years before Marin, her photo is attached to the letter. The protagonist looked at the contents of the letter and asked, "Since the blackmailer is so famous, why can't they just report it to the news outlets?" She replied that it would be great if this problem could be solved that easily. Had he heard that the mayor of Baran died in his own home a few months ago? The MC replied that he saw a mention in the newspapers. She said, "Ara is the only daughter of a strong candidate for the new mayor." The protagonist asked, "What does that mean?" She sighed and replied, "Probably all the news outlets are bought because they ignore all their requests, and due to their inaction, they are unable to tell the whole truth. For the same reason, they can receive protection from the city government." The protagonist said, "That definitely sounds logical." He thought, a powerful family in such a large city with such scope cannot handle such things on an individual level. But what does such a powerful person lack to dare to do something like that? Then he looked at Marin and asked, "What does Ara gain from canceling her concert? If that's the case, wouldn't she be the perfect scapegoat in that case?" She replied, "It's precisely because her concert will be held at Baran Stadium." The protagonist clarified, "Baran Stadium?" She confirmed it. He asked, "Is performing there really that important?" She replied, "Of course it is. In the end, there will be 100,000 visitors." Evelyn added that anyone who performs at Baran Stadium earns the right to perform for the emperor himself during the New Year's holidays. And to earn the right to perform at the stadium, they must first pass a rigorous series of tests. Each year, only a select few are able to step onto this honored stage. This is the best opportunity for a singer from Baran, and this concert is the biggest turning point in Marin's life. MC understood everything and asked, "Then how many more people did they hire besides him?" Marin apologized and asked, "What?" He replied that he needed to know to make a plan. She replied, "Only him, Killian." He looked at her in confusion, and she continued, "She tried to contact the mercenary office, but no one dared accept their request." The protagonist took a sip of water and thought, people with such power would hire at least a level 4 assassin, and he had no idea how many there would be, and they would need to protect both the client and an audience of 100,000. And he was supposed to handle such a massive task alone. He then put down his mug and asked what the penalty was for refusing the assignment. Marin asked, "What? A penalty?" He replied, "Yes." He was suggesting they forget the request had even been made. He thought, even for him, these conditions were too much to bear. Better to cancel the concert for the client's safety and peace of mind. The next second, Marin suddenly said, "Listen, idiot." And what happened to her then? He wanted her to cancel the concert, even though that had been her sole goal for 3 whole years? The protagonist called out to her in surprise and she shouted, "He came here because he wanted $1,000,000. He thought the assignment was worth $1,000,000. Now it's no wonder why he said he'd go broke." She grabbed her hair and shouted, "Hey." She thought he said he was responsible. He said, "Marin," and she seemed a little upset. She ripped off her wig and shouted at him to get lost. Yeah, damn, why wouldn't she be upset? He looked at her in surprise and thought, wait, a mermaid? Mermaids are a race often found in old fairy tales, distinguished by one simple feature. They are beautiful and have pleasant voices, but instead of legs, they have fish tails. But unlike in fairy tales, real mermaids can transform their tails into legs at any time. Of course, the transformation has a certain time frame, so they need a recovery period in their natural form. Marin slammed her hand on the sofa near the protagonist's head and shouted, "So what if she's a mermaid?" This is the first time he's seen one. He replied that it wasn't. He thought, this is definitely his first encounter with a landlocked province. Now he understands why they put a bathtub in the middle of the room. Then he said he thought mermaids risk dying of homesickness after spending long periods away from the ocean. Evelyn said Marin is only half mermaid. That's why she can maintain her human form longer and doesn't pine for the ocean. The protagonist asked if by half she meant half human. She confirmed it. Mermaids are incredibly beautiful, which is why they often enter into arranged marriages with other races. The problem is that, living far from the ocean after marriage, many literally become homesick, which eventually leads to prolonged illness and death, after which their mixed-blood children are abandoned to their fate. After all, half-breeds are not welcome either on land or in the ocean. The reason Marin began her singing career at such a young age is probably, the next second she screamed, "Damn it, what is he staring at? Her parents married for love, and they're both alive." He closed his eyes and thought, well, that's good. Then he said, well, whatever, no means no. Even if he agreed to the mission, there was a high chance she'd die, and her audience could suffer too. She said there was no need to worry about the audience. The seats were equipped with a protective artifact, and even if she could die, she would never give up the concert. She was ready for it. Evelyn called out to her indignantly, and then she turned around and shouted, She knew that this had been her only aspiration for the past 3 years. Even when she was discriminated against and no one supported her, she still just endured it all. Just pretended to be naive and laughed. The MC looked at her and asked why she was so serious. She lowered her gaze and said that 4 years ago, her father was diagnosed with ocean nostalgia. The doctors told him he had 5 years to live, and he only had 1 more. Although everyone knew there was no cure for this disease, a legendary potion, an elixir, supposedly could cure him, and she had to obtain it this year. That's why she couldn't refuse the performance at Barron Stadium. Evelyn added that if she performed well at this concert, she would get the chance to sing for the Emperor and could receive just a drop of the elixir as a gift. The protagonist replied, "I see," and the elixir was supposed to cure her father's longing for the ocean. So she planned everything 4 years ago? She clenched her fist and added that the only thing she excelled at was singing. It was her only opportunity. The protagonist thought, so parents can be such an important part of your life. He didn't have parents, so he couldn't judge. How could he, a street child, know that? Then he lowered his gaze and considered, if her father was somehow like his mentor to him, the desire to do everything possible to save him, he could understand that better than anyone. He then rose to his feet and asked if he could visit the stadium right now. Evelyn confirmed it. They were interested. The protagonist added, in that case, he suggests moving. They'll need to practice some things there, Marin. He also needed to verify that the area was truly safe. If the measures met his standards, they shouldn't regret performing even under threat of death. Marin asked, surprised, what does he mean? He offered to give her a try. They should go to a rehearsal. Meanwhile, Ara's house. She was holding a glass of wine and asked if she still hadn't cancelled the concert. She knew she was stubborn, of course, but she didn't think it would be this stubborn. Her manager, sitting on the couch behind her, folded her arms and added, right there. Does she really not believe she'll be finished off? She said it wasn't true. She just decided to perform despite the fact that she could die. How fierce. She said she'd recently heard something interesting. Marin was seen leaving the hotel with a man. She turned around and asked, a man? Was she hiding a lover? She replied that she didn't think so, that it was something scandalous, more like a bodyguard. Ara asked that she had stopped mercenaries from working with her. So where did she get him? She needed to find out what he was worth. She replied yes, she'll send a couple of talented individuals. Meanwhile, the MC, the singer, and the manager were examining the stadium. At the Baron Stadium, the main character said that the protective artifacts located around the perimeter of the auditorium were flawless. He accepted the job. Then he walked further and said, he offers to clarify all the details of the contract. How will they return to the hotel? Marin happily said, hooray. Evelyn replied, of course, the contract is already ready. Then Marin asked, was that really the entire rehearsal? Doesn't she need to prepare anything else? The MC replied that this was all. This alone will help him significantly. She happily put her hands to her face and said, so now she can enjoy her free time. He looked at her and thought, well, in public, she really is an angel herself. She smiled and thanked him, and then he turned and said, well, he's just earning his salary. He noticed the presence of strangers and thought, too. After that, he snapped his fingers using wind bullets and killed both of them at once. He returned to the girls and thought, there's no point in worrying these two unnecessarily. After a while, Ara, adjusting the towel on her head, asked in surprise, dead? Her subordinate answered, yes, both of them. Ara said that, apparently, she hired a competent bodyguard. How did they die? She replied, according to the mercenary office's report, there were no signs of a struggle. Both bodies were found with holes in their heads. It was said that this bodyguard was extremely capable. She said thoughtfully, so that's how it is. She should prepare the car. She was surprised, huh? The rest of the schedule for today is empty. Where was she going? She replied, to meet this bodyguard. She asked, why? She smiled and asked in return, why else? To hire him, of course. Sometime later, the Grand Baron Hotel, a private dining room. Marin asked, how is he doing here? Cool atmosphere, huh? He's never seen anything like this in his life, hasn't he? You shouldn't worry about it. It's all on her. He sat at the table next to her and thought, this girl doesn't even try to maintain decorum when no one is around. Then he said that if you have to watch your words in public places, even this room has bugs. She asked in surprise, seriously? He confirmed it. He turned it off as soon as they entered, but she still should be more careful when he's not around. She leaned back in her chair and said, almost got exposed. Evelyn, sitting at the table, said, she seems to really feel comfortable around him, Mr. Killian. She screamed indignantly, what? It's not true. Then Marin put her hands on the table and asked, do you like it? It's mandu, a traditional dish of the Yan country. He confirmed it. He hasn't eaten it for a long time. It's quite tasty. He thought, even during the war he had grown tired of it, there was nothing else. Then she asked, what? Had he tried this before? She'd heard that everyone in the White Tower was a beggar. Apparently that didn't apply to everyone. He looked at her, and then there was a knock on the door. Marin said, he can come in. The man walked inside and bowed. She smiled, looked at him, and said, oh manager, the food is as excellent as always. Ara said, that's wonderful. She should eat as much as she wants. She'd already paid for everything. Marin asked in surprise, isn't this a private room? The manager said, Miss Ara wanted to say hello, being Miss Marin's senior. He bowed and said, please have a nice time. The protagonist thought, even as a guest here, Ara behaves completely differently. Marin rose to her feet and offered to go too. She didn't want to eat anymore. She'd lost her appetite. Her rival said that since she was going to leave, she should at least leave her guard. She screamed indignantly, What's this all about? Does she want to talk his way out of the job or something? She replied, oh my god, she's absolutely right. He heard everything, right? He should break the contract with Marin and work with her. She will pay his fine, pay 10 times more, her offer from above. Does he like it? Marin screamed. Her bodyguard would never agree to such a bribe. Then MC asked, 10 times more? Great. Marin looked at him, perplexed, and asked, what? He replied, his bet is 1 million hard cash. Can she really afford that? Still 10 million. Marin screamed indignantly. What? Ara replied that she will pay as much as necessary. Then the protagonist remarked that he liked her directness, although she should wait. He just remembered, 1 million is just an advance. The full payment should be 10 million. So they will owe him 100? Are they sure they can transfer 100 million bells? Ara indignantly asked. Was he trying to joke with her now? He replied that this was already his second joke. She exclaimed indignantly, what a little thing. Then she took off her glasses and asked his name. The protagonist replied, Killian. She thought, an amateur. In this business, you don't just reveal your name. After that, she headed for the exit and, turning around, added that she was looking forward to their next meeting. His life would be much more interesting with him. MC replied, sounds interesting. He's already quite dynamic. After that, Ara closed the door behind her, pressing her back against it. She thought indignantly, how cheeky. Her manager approached her and worriedly asked if she was okay. She screamed, what do you think? She needs to call the Woodok brothers right now. She replied, okay, she'll call them. At that moment, Woojin approached them and said that there was no need. He had been watching them for some time. He was the eldest of the brothers, an assassin from the country of Yan. Ara approached him and, adjusting her glasses, said, capable guy, how did he even get in here? He spread his arms and asked, where is he incapable of getting in? His esteemed client had even provided him with a pass. Then she asked, what about Dokko? He replied that he was running his own errands. She said there had been a change of plans. He pressed the elevator button and asked, how? They were supposed to kill the singer as soon as the concert began and pacify that voice forever, right? The doors began to close in front of them, and she added, there's another target. He asked, who? She answered, Marin's bodyguard, Killian Lockwood, and that he die the most painful death possible. He said, poor guy. Insulted the Princess Baron, huh? She asked when he would begin the task. He replied that he would infiltrate the stadium with the technical staff today and remain there overnight. Dokko would go with the lighting crew tomorrow, the day of the concert. She said she would leave the methods up to them. The main thing was that the results were reliable. He should let her know if he needed anything. He smiled and said, he never tires of saying this. He admired her straightforwardness. Ara thought, Marin, Killian, how dare they spit in her face while they were in this city? She would show them exactly what it was worth. At that moment, streams of energy passed to the protagonist's ear. He thought, so that's how it is. It's good that he managed to secretly release mana while chatting with Ara, but it's still surprising that this Woojin didn't notice anything. It's worth knowing, at night, birds hear them. In daylight, mages. He rose from his chair and asked if they should retire for the day. The concert was tomorrow. He needed them in good shape. Marin asked why he hadn't given in to her. He asked in surprise. Huh? She replied, 10 million in cash, after all. He asked if she thought he'd agreed to the mission for the money. She confirmed it, and he thought, in a way, that was true, but he still didn't like such suspicions. He asked, didn't she say she wanted to save her father? He sincerely hoped she would achieve this goal. In the past, he hadn't even had the chance to save his mentor. He hadn't even been given that, and he knew all too well how deep regrets burrow into the soul. After that, he asked if he shouldn't try everything possible until there was nothing left to regret. She looked at him in surprise, then stepped forward and thanked him. The next day was Marin Maria's concert. The workers were running with equipment. Voices were heard everywhere. Hurry, the show is about to start. Where the hell is the new guy? They're already short-handed. At that moment, Woojin, sitting on the toilet, looked at the protagonist's photo and thought, it seems like it's time to act. He got to his feet and thought that he couldn't believe he had to sit on the toilet all day. Time to go up to the top floor and meet his brother. Wasn't that room 403? If the contract weren't worth 5 million, he wouldn't have bothered so much. Brother should be in his staff uniform too, right? I wonder what he's wearing. At that moment, he stopped in surprise, noticing the protagonist near the sink. He thought, Killian? What was that freak doing here? He approached the exit and thought maybe he should kill him now. Current information on Killian Lockwood. First, he is a rising star of one of the leading magic towers, namely White. Second, he specializes in martial arts, using physical enhancement and acceleration magic. Third, he is standing with his back to him. There is a possibility of a surprise attack. The fourth, level 4, on par with him, was difficult to predict the outcome of a direct fight. He thought, yeah, no way. It would be safer to attack together. They would work according to the original plan. What if they couldn't catch him off guard, and the situation couldn't get any worse? The next second, the protagonist spoke up, calluses on his fingertips but not on his palm, which suggests he mainly uses throwing needles. He stopped in surprise and the protagonist asked, is he working as an assassin? He turned around, surprised, thinking, he's been caught, right? Then, should he attack now? Or would it be better to quickly escape and team up with Doko? After that, the protagonist added, judging by the delay, that was it. Then he threw the soap at him with lightning speed, and he thought, he can't dodge. Then he pointed the needles forward and thought, this isn't soap anymore, it's a piece of pure mana. He reacted successfully, only dislocating his shoulder in exchange for the enemy's life. At that moment, needles flew at the protagonist, and he thought that even if he were 3 times the star of the White Tower, hundreds of needles covered in deadly poison could not be dodged. The protagonist fell to the ground, his body began to shake, and Woojin looked at him and said, it worked. Honestly, he never felt confident in hand-to-hand combat, but he seemed to be an inexperienced brat, and still, just in case, it was worth finishing him off. He swung his dagger and brought it close to the protagonist's neck, and then he asked, what? He thought the blade didn't go any further. What was stopping it? Was that the sound of the wind? So the needles were in his face. The next second, MC pointed his weapon at him and said, he seems not to be such an idiot after all. He screamed in surprise, how is he? The protagonist responded, covering his entire body with thick air that stopped everything. He screamed, what? It's impossible. It can't be. He replied, it's possible. The next second, a shot rang out. After a while, the audience in the hall watching the stage began to talk. Only a minute left. It's probably too late to go to the restroom, right? The guy sitting next to him said, you should have thought of that earlier. The next second, Marin appeared on stage. She began singing a song, her smile blinding him like a ray of sunshine. At that moment, Doko was sitting near the boxes and thought, he's late. Did something happen? Are those his footsteps? Why is he so late? Then he got to his feet and went to the door, grabbing the handle. He thought in surprise, did he pass by? Where did he go? What a moron. How many times did he repeat that they would meet in room 407? Then he peeked out from behind the door and shouted, hey, he's here. Him? The protagonist turned around and said, that's where he was hiding. He asked in surprise, did he dare imitate his brother's steps? The protagonist turned around and said that in a confrontation with a professional killer, this is the minimum he should be capable of. He asked how his brother died. He answered, from a bullet to the head. He said that at least it was like that. At least he didn't have time to feel the pain. He knew this would happen one day, but it was still a bit unpleasant. This was supposed to be their last mission together. The protagonist said that his brother was dead, and he seemed quite calm. He replied that it was true. He was a killer. It was part of the job. The protagonist asked, he says this is the last mission? Are they really planning to retire? He replied, of course not. They are still too young. He just received an offer from the best organization in the industry. MC said, interesting. So it will be a duel between an assassin and a mage from the best organizations in their field. He asked, what? In which place is the White Tower the best? He answered that this will all change this year. She laughed in response, and the protagonist asked, what's so funny? He began releasing his aura and said, maybe he didn't know, but being the best in your field means at least this level. With these words, he demonstrated the streams of mana emanating from him, and the protagonist said, so, he doesn't use throwing weapons, but toxic chi. Doko concentrated the energy in his hand and said, only those who can't control toxic chi rely on hidden needles. Cool, huh? And if you can control it like he does, it turns out like this. With these words, he sent a sphere of toxic chi toward the ceiling, straightening it out. He asked, what do you think would happen to a person after it hits? The next second, a drop of toxic chi flew past the protagonist's back and pierced the wall. He turned around in surprise when it flew in the opposite direction, and then his opponent added, oh, he forgot to say that earlier. His poison affects at the slightest contact. He's already a corpse. The MC dropped to one knee and said he already knew. It was obvious at first glance. Doko said, since he knew, then why the hell was he so calm? He replied that it didn't concern him at all. The killer asked, what? He meant he was immune to all poisons? He replied that that wasn't true. He simply coated his body in mana, isolating it from the outside world. He was surprised. Then he should be unable to breathe. The protagonist said he created clean air in his lungs himself. It was no problem. He asked if that was even possible. He replied that he had to meet at least this level to be among the best in his field, right? Doko shouted. So his brother didn't die by some stupid accident. He looks pretty confident. The protagonist, looking at him, thought, 4 condensed balls full of poison. All he had to do was concentrate his mana in his eyes. Then his opponent shouted, he should try to dodge this. He started firing the balls, and MC dodged them, using his acceleration. He thought he needed to dash to the target in one go. When he got close, his opponent told him to stop. He really dodged? He's probably not level 4, is he? At that moment, the protagonist pointed the gun at his neck and fired. Doko melted the bullet with toxic chi and said it was even dangerous. The protagonist, surprised, thought, melting a bullet with toxic chi is pretty good. Then he grabbed the protagonist by the shirt and said that now he understood. His stupid brother definitely died like that, right? He kicked Oscar in the stomach and threw him down. MC landed backstage and cried out in pain. Doko jumped down after him and said, that's what he should have felt. But what will he do? No one will even notice. Oscar grabbed the forearm of the hand holding the gun and said, it doesn't matter. Doko said, he's a tough nut to crack. He twisted his arm and he didn't even flinch. Let him lie there and not twitch. The battle is over. MC pointed the gun at him and said, no, it's not over yet. Doko deflected the bullets with his mana and said, he told him so. Resistance is futile. It also began to melt the gun, and Oscar thought, this poison is so concentrated that it melts not only the bullets, But the gun itself, Dako said. How many times do I have to repeat this? The outcome of the battle is already decided. Okay. Now it really is. He stopped, clenched his fist, and turned around questioningly. Marin Maria's performance was ending on stage and fireworks appeared, and she screamed, "She can't hear them." Oscar said, "Well done." She remembered everything correctly. The sound capture activated, and Dako screamed, "Horror, what is this? No matter how much I resist, nothing will work." A wave of noise washed over Dako, and he began to make noise, clutching his head. The MC thought, he admits, he's good. He gathered the voices of thousands and brought them down like lightning on one point. The sound wave should have already turned his insides to mush, and he's still holding on. Dako fell to his knees and screamed loudly. Along with his hearing, he lost all sense of spatial orientation. Oscar aimed another attack at him and asked, "This is painful, isn't it?" He will end his suffering now. He fired a wind bullet and hit Dako right in the chest. He fell to the floor, so did the MC. He thought, thank God Marin remembered the plan perfectly. They had rehearsed this last night. Killian said they only needed to practice one moment. After she heard 2 gunshots, she should launch the fireworks and make the crowd scream as loud as possible. Marin replied, "It seemed like no big deal. Will this work?" Oscar replied, "Yes, that would be enough." For now, he said, it really wasn't that hard. The fireworks appeared on stage again, and he said how glad he was that it was enough. This is the real level of the best in the business, rookie. 3 days later, Marin was lying on the couch and asking if he was sure he could move yet. Was this really not just showing off? Oscar asked, so why should he show off? She even summoned the high priest for him, thanks to which he got back on his feet so quickly. Marin said it would be awkward if he died. After all, she found him with literally 1 foot in the coffin. Oscar thought, well, it wasn't that bad. Marin said that since he was here, they should sort out the payment. Evelyn? The girl appeared next to MC, which surprised him. He wondered where she had even popped out from. Marin said that there was 1,100,000 in the envelope. She added 100,000 as a personal thank you. If it weren't for him, she wouldn't have even had a chance to ask His Majesty for the elixir. MC took the money out of the envelope and said that she had achieved this thanks to her unbreakable will. He thanks her. Her father will get better soon. Marin replied that she really hoped so. Will he stay in town? She was leaving today. Oscar replied that yes, he still had some things to do. Marin asked him to be careful. Era Sweet was probably already having problems with her head. Who knows what might pop into her head? MC said that he would have said that she should be more careful. Marin said that it was terrifying. He was certainly confident in himself. But seriously, he won't even introduce himself by his real name at parting? Oscar cleared his throat and asked, what was she talking about? Marin asked again, did he think she wouldn't notice the colored contacts? She knew everything from the start. MC asked in surprise, did she know that he used a fake name and still hired him? Marin smiled and said, when she started talking about saving her father, she noticed his eyes and it was as if she were looking in a mirror. Marin showed him 2 fingers and said, so she decided to take a risk. And how? MC spread his arms out to the sides and asked, Miss Marin, she really doesn't even think about tomorrow, right? Marin asked irritably, so will he tell or not? Oscar answered, she is so persistent. His real name is Oscar Crucian. Marin said in surprise, she thinks she heard that somewhere. Evelyn asked, is he the genius of the White Tower who developed the cure for the Caden flu, right? Marin said, she read about him in the newspaper, and it turns out he is a genius? Well, to be honest, for a genius, he is somehow too normal. MC said, Miss Marin, she looks pretty normal off stage too. She cried out in irritation. What, this, in his opinion, is an ordinary face? Oscar asked, and yet on stage she is an incomparable diva, isn't she? Marin was a little embarrassed and said, he knows how to speak beautifully. She got up from the couch and thanked him, shaking his hand. She said that he was the best bodyguard in her life. Meanwhile, in a hotel somewhere in Baran, a guy ran into the room and shouted, boss. Kaya was reading the newspaper and laughing. The guy asked, bad news first or good? Kaya looked at him and said, it is always better to hear the good first. The guy asked, does she remember the rookie's older brother? Woojin? He's dead. Kaya smiled and replied, that's really great news. She'd been thinking about finishing him off herself, but he was just getting in the way. Okay, so what's the bad news then? The guy replied, the rookie was dead too. Kaya got angry and screamed, what good news could there be? Is he kidding me? Did he want to be the bad news? The guy started waving his arms and shouted, please don't. It's not his fault. They told him that it was her brother who finished them off. Killian Lockwood. Kaya asked again, puzzled. What? The guy replied, the target hired him as her bodyguard. Let her see. He showed her a photo and asked, that's her brother, right? Killian Lockwood. Kaya laughed and asked, who the hell is this guy? The guy looked at the photo and asked, isn't it him? Kaya asked, what, does he think his face just changed while she wasn't looking? She needs to see this guy's face for herself. Kaya Lockwood, a ringmaster for the Purple Brigade, asked why he thought he could just pretend to be someone else's brother. Meanwhile, a question rang out at the Sweet family estate. What's going on with the Hoover family? They're recruiting mercenaries, but so far there's no one worth worrying about. Mark Sweet, the head of the Sweet family, said that since they lost, they should have left with dignity, annoying bastards. The servant replied, exactly so, sir. Even though the Buzz Hoover family once sat in the mayor's office, they only lasted 2 years, and yet they act like Barron City belongs to them. Pathetic idiots who couldn't even save their patriarch. Mark said he was no less pathetic. The guy apologized, and Mark asked how the process of obtaining Buzz Hoover's classified documents was going. The guy replied, it was launched, as he ordered. Mark asked, What a worthless son Buzz has. He couldn't even decipher his own father's encryption magic. And how many months had passed already? The guy smiled and replied, and yet, thanks to his stupidity, the very existence of these documents had reached them. Mark laughed and said, apparently, the heavens themselves were on their side. Everything will be ready within 2 days, right? The guy answered, of course, they had prepared quite a spectacular show. Mark said, and one more thing, the ones who made his daughter cry. The guy asked again, is he talking about Miss Ara Sweet? Mark answered, yes, she is now beside herself with stress. Who is causing all the confusion? The guy answered, that's who he meant, the singer Maren Maria and Killian Lockwood from the White Tower. Mark replied, they will leave Maren Maria alone. Now she is connected with His Majesty, they won't be able to lay a finger on her. The guy asked, what should they do with Killian Lockwood? Mark ordered him to follow him and report everything. They will deal with him after the Hoover family. How dare he disturb his girl in the heart of his city? He crossed the path of the Purple Brigade's ringleader, the fearless idiot. It would make him regret it. At this time, the real Killian was drinking from a cup and saying it was delicious. MC told him not to choke. Killian happily thanked him for fulfilling the order. Oscar? MC asked how he was feeling. Killian replied, everything he had messed up inside was already better. Oscar said that was good. Killian told him to take the payment for the order. It was not in the nature of a forest warrior to take credit for someone else's achievements. Oscar asked, seriously? Thank you. Killian asked, where will he go now? Will he return to the White Tower? MC asked, so what? If he says no, will he drag him away by force? Killian replied, no. He is more capable than him, and he has already transmitted to the tower that there is no need to worry. MC replied, great. He needs to visit the Red Tower branch in Baran. Killian asked again, the Red Tower? Oscar replied, yes, he needs to find someone. MC asked Killian to try to be more careful for a while. He asked, surprised, why? Oscar cleared his throat and said someone named Ara Sweet, the daughter of an influential man, might have him in her sights because he'd exposed his name. Killian asked again, yes? There was one order he wanted to take, but since that's the case, he better refuse. MC thought about his unperturbed reaction. He asked what the order was. Killian replied, they were looking for someone capable of analyzing some encrypted data. They were offering 500,000 in hard cash for it. Oscar said that was a pretty decent sum. But it wasn't worth his life. Killian nodded and answered, it was true. MC asked, so he would return to the White Tower? If there was time, he could wait and they would go together. Killian said from whom, of all people, he hadn't expected such a friendly offer. Had something happened since he hadn't seen him? MC wondered what kind of reaction this was. Killian said that it would be nice to go back with him, but he needed to stay in Baron for a while. The order just happened to fall into his hands. MC asked, why? Killian frowned and replied, he has to catch the worst traitor in the history of the Forest Tribe. Rumor has it he's active in this city. That's why he's here. MC said things were more serious than he thought. Killian said he couldn't discuss details with outsiders, but that's how it was. Oscar put his fist to his chest and said he hoped he caught this traitorous idiot. Then they would see each other at the White Tower. He extended his fist, and Killian asked how he knew the traditional Forest Tribe greeting. He didn't think he was interested in their culture. MC thought, how terrible was Oscar's personality? Literally, everyone says that about him. He sighed and asked, wasn't he interested? But that's not true. Is he really going to leave him? Killian put his fist to his chest and replied, of course not. He placed his fist on MC's fist and said they would see each other at the tower. After a while, MC was walking down the street and thinking how nervous he was to address the Red Tower. What if Edna was deliberately hiding? They could even find a demon with blood, but if a dragon decided to hide, he wasn't so sure. Suddenly, his eyes widened in surprise and wondered why he sensed at least 7th level energy. He saw Kaya in front of him and thought, she's strong. Oscar was staring at her when suddenly cars separated them. After the cars passed, he no longer noticed Kaya. The assistant asked her if she thought she had been too lenient towards him just because he was friends with her brother. They were just watching them having lunch together. Shouldn't they make him pay for killing a rookie? Kaya ordered him to kill him. Not that they officially accepted him. And if anything, it's even better that they didn't take an idiot who can be taken down by a 3rd level mage. That's not what matters now. If he had deliberately tried to find him while she was hiding her presence, would he have been able to? The guy asked again. Her? He doubted it. It would have been difficult to even sense that someone was nearby. Kaya asked, does he think there could be a 3rd level mage capable of this in this city? The guy asked with displeasure. Are they playing yes or no? It seemed to him that you can't find such a thing on the entire continent, let alone in Baran. Kaya asked, then why she can't shake the feeling that their eyes met? The guy laughed and said no, she was just imagining it. Kaya said no, it's not that. What's his name? The guy answered, Oscar Crucian, the famous genius of the White Tower. Lately, all the newspaper headlines are only about him. Kaya said how curious. She wondered what the future holds for him. After some time, MC arrived and thought he finally arrived. The sign said, branch of the Red Tower in Baran. Oscar walked inside and saw a girl who asked how she could help him. MC replied that he wanted to find someone. The girl asked if he had brought the blood of the person he was looking for with him. Oscar replied, yes. She said that in that case, he could go to that room and put it in the prepared test tube. MC walked into the room and looked around. He thought, so, Edna's blood. He pricked his finger with a needle and thought, exactly. He remembers, even if it is artificial dragon blood made from his. If he uses its parameters to change the composition and structure, Although it will not have the unique characteristics of dragon blood, they should still be able to find it with this. Oscar left the room and said he will leave the test tube on the counter. He put it down and said, "Thank you." The girl screamed, "Sir, 1 second." She came out from behind the counter and said, "He can't just leave. First, he needs to choose the tariff he needs and pay in advance." MC looked at her in surprise and asked, "What? He has to pay?" The girl replied, "Of course he does. It's their job." Oscar thought about it. He'd used their services 100 times, just like that, 26 years ago. When did everything change? The girl showed him a list of rates, which listed premium tracking, first rank tracking, second rank tracking, third rank tracking, fourth and fifth rank tracking. MC said, then he'll choose the ultra-wide radius continent-wide search, the premium rate. The service used to be free, but he saw that everything had changed. The girl asked, what? She thought he was mistaken. Red Tower search work had never been free. MC said so, but he'd heard that the premium rate used to be free. Head of the White Tower. The girl interrupted him and asked, Head of the White Tower? He wasn't from the White Tower by any chance? MC smiled and said, no, he had nothing to do with it. The girl exhaled and said, that's good. They were instructed to charge the White Tower mages a 30% premium. Oscar asked, only the White Tower? Why? The girl replied, the previous head of the White Tower, Oscar Sage, used the premium rate 108 times, enjoying the privileges of the tower head. They went through difficult times, during which the Red Tower's finances experienced serious problems. The elders still grind their teeth at the mere mention of him. It turns out he was a much less pleasant person than they say. I wonder if he even knew how much the ingredients used for the rate cost. If the royal family hadn't paid his debts after the war, the Red Tower would have sunk into history. Decades ago, the heads of the Mage Towers and members of the royal family were provided free services, but these privileges were cancelled because of him. MC thought, because of him then. He reached into his inside pocket and asked, how much is the premium plan? The girl replied, 1.5 million. Oscar turned blue in surprise and asked, what? Can I pay in installments? The girl replied, of course not. MC said he could pay 1,100,000 right now and pay 400,000 in a few days. Would that do? The girl replied that if he didn't pay the rest by the appointed time, he wouldn't get a refund of the initial deposit, and they also naturally wouldn't be able to share the search results. Oscar replied that it was fine with him. The girl took the envelope from MC and said, if he agrees, please let him sign this contract. The search and processing of the results will take at least 1 day, maximum 3. MC signed the contract and said, okay, thank you. He left the building and smiled. After a while, Oscar was banging on the door loudly and shouting, Killian! He opened the door and came out and asked, Oscar, what brought him here? Oscar was breathing heavily and asked to tell him about the order he had mentioned. Sometime later, at the Hoover family estate, MC asked if he understood the client to be the son of the former mayor of Baron. So, what's going on? He asked to tell them before they met in person. And was it okay for them to come in the middle of the night? Apparently, the matter was urgent. Killian replied that they were told they were looking for contractors as soon as possible, but because the application required strict qualifications, they apparently had problems. Oscar said something probably related to data decryption. Everything could be ruined if something went wrong. Killian said that before giving details about the order, he needed some background. He knows who the former mayor of Baron was, right? MC asked thoughtfully. Buzz Hoover? Killian answered, yes. Buzz Hoover wanted to change Baron. This city may look perfect, but many residents suffer from the consequences of gambling, illegal substances, and alcohol abuse. Corrupt corporations successfully ignore this dark side of the city. In fact, they only contribute to its development. Oscar said this vicious cycle only lines their pockets. Killian said yes, and Buzz Hoover decided to rid the city of these problems and declared war on everything that distorts consciousness. MC asked, what was the result? Killian replied, victory. In 2 years, the prevalence of illegal substances decreased by 86%. Oscar said, that's awesome. Killian said, however, Buzz Hoover was subsequently found dead in his estate just before the opening of a new rehabilitation center for addicts. MC asked again, in his own home? That sounds suspicious. Killian said that some say the gangsters did him in, while other rumors say that some influential addict ordered his head from the Purple Brigade, but no one knows the truth. MC asked, so what exactly needs to be decrypted? Killian replied, the files were encrypted with Hoover's personal spell. Apparently, this is the most confidential information he left behind. Oscar said there's a high probability that someone close to him did him in. He thought for a moment and asked, what about the Sweet family? Were they feuding with Hoover or something? Killian asked again, is he talking about Mark Sweet? On the contrary, Mark Sweet was a full supporter of Buzz. He personally spearheaded the campaign to rid the streets of illegal substances. Thanks to this, he received significant public support and became a likely candidate for the next mayor. MC asked again, seriously? He wondered if her dad was actually a cool guy. At that moment, the door behind Killian opened and a guy walked in, greeting him and asking if they were the mages from the White Tower. MC looked at him and thought, a boy? He said he is the eldest son of the Hoover family, Jake Hoover. Oscar waved his hand and asked to be allowed to introduce himself. He is a 3rd-level mage, Oscar Crushian, and this is. Killian introduced himself as Killian Lockwood, a 4th-level mage. Jake yelped in surprise. Killian Lockwood? The one who guarded Mara and Maria? MC smiled and answered for him. Yeah, that's him. He is the rising star of the White Tower, who defeated the infamous Udok brothers, Jake said in surprise. He couldn't believe that such an amazing person came to him. He probably already knows why he hires mages, right? Killian looked at MC irritably and thought, so what now, Oscar? MC thought, and why is he making faces at him? Apparently, Jake thinks that Killian is the main one among them. Killian himself thinks so. He could have handled it himself, after all. Oscar said he'd heard he was looking for someone capable of deciphering certain information. Jake looked at him and replied, yes. His father had told him he'd collected some shocking data, but he'd never been able to decipher anything that important. Oscar asked if he thought his father's death was somehow connected to this information. Jake replied, yes, he wasn't sure at first, but after recent events, he had no doubt. MC wondered if he'd only become certain of this recently. He asked, and for what reason? Jake looked down and said that after his father's passing, he immediately sent out invitations to all the renowned cryptography mages in the world. But on the way to Baron, something strange happened to each of them. Someone fell off a horse, someone's engine blew up, or an entire bridge collapsed just as they were crossing it. Some were even attacked by bandits, which you don't even see on the roads these days. As a result, none of them made it to Baron. Jake waved his hand and asked, isn't that strange? He's sure someone is deliberately trying to keep this information a secret from the world. Oscar replied, it's definitely unusual. Jake said, so he should ask them to go through some procedure before accepting the order. Namely, sign the El Terra Order Pact. They know how it works, right? Oscar reached for it and replied, of course, although such a thing is quite rare. He thought it was a harsh contract, breaking which could cost you your life, and this brave guy got it. The pact stipulated that the contractor must not damage the encrypted data under any circumstances. The contractor must not disclose the details of the order to anyone. With Jake Hoover's consent, the above points can be omitted. Upon completion of the order, all terms and conditions on this page are considered null and void. MC thought for a moment. He was trying his best to fulfill his duties as both the eldest heir and a loving son. Oscar asked, before signing this contract, to let him inquire. Did everyone in the room sign it as well? Jake replied, of course. He put safety first, so they don't have to worry about them. MC looked at the guys standing behind Jake and thought, they were all level 4s. Oscar said it was not for him to judge. Please let them provide the contracts they signed. The guy cried out in irritation. He's an idiot. How dare a level 3? The guys' bodies were bound by mana, and they thought their bodies weren't obeying. MC thought, all he had to do was apply the wind correctly, and he could fool the idiots by creating the appearance of energy pressure beyond their capabilities. It couldn't be easier with level 4 mercenaries. The guy grabbed his throat and asked, what do you mean some level 3? MC snapped his fingers and said, this is what trust is based on, and he personally doesn't see any problems with it. Jake waved his hand and said, he understood. Gentlemen, they should also stop obstructing him. He rang the bell and ordered the contracts to be brought. After a while, Oscar was sitting on the couch and reading the pacts. He asked, Tonfrank and Coatberry? The guy frowned with displeasure and asked, what? What more does he need? At that moment, MC created a wind stream and attacked him. He fell to the floor and the guys screamed in fear. Barry, Jake asked, puzzled, what he was doing. Who gave him these contracts? MC answered, an official employee. He tore up the contract and ordered it to be detained too. It's a fake. They gave him ordinary papers, which did not contain an iota of El Terra's divine power. Jake asked in surprise, what? MC replied, a contract imbued with divine power. It's not so easy to break. These two are not bound by a pact. Most likely, they leaked the information they had. The knight drew his sword from its sheath and cried out, is he listening to this charlatan? Killian looked at him with displeasure and attacked, kicking the sword away. He knocked the knight to the floor and stomped on his head. The guy begged for mercy. He doesn't know anything. Killian asked who he works for. The guy screamed. He doesn't know. He was hired through a third party. Killian said nothing, but he knows what his employers know. He told them about it himself. The knight screamed, he'll tell. He'll tell everything. The number of mercenaries and their levels. That's all they know. Let him go. MC said that soon their employer will show up here with a squad significantly stronger than these mercenaries with the aim of capturing his data. Jake spoke in fear. It can't be. MC said it's too early to give up. He'll take 500,000 for decrypting the data and another 500,000 for hiring them and Killian as security. That'll come to $1 million in total. How does that sound to him? Jake shouted. He agrees. He offered to sign the contract right now. Oscar smiled and said he wouldn't regret it. After a while, Jake said he'd hidden the data in his personal nook. MC replied, his own nook. That's good. He has one too. Jake asked again, right? He was pleased to hear it. He pressed a brick in the wall and a passage opened in front of them. Jake said it was the first time he'd invited anyone else here. They're in this suitcase. It was found in his father's personal safe. Oscar looked at it thoughtfully and said, even at a cursory examination, it's obvious. An impressive number of spells have been cast on it. In particular, 3 spells have been cast: triple encryption, resistance, and explosion. If anyone tries to open it, the suitcase will explode and the contents will be destroyed. It's good that he didn't touch it again. Jake said with fear he didn't even suspect that it was so dangerous. So does that mean he can crack it? MC answered, of course. He thought that compared to military codes, it was just child's play. He said that for him, it was an elementary task. After a while, he opened the suitcase and Jake cried out in surprise. The suitcase opened. So it worked? MC replied, yeah, let him see for himself. Killian said that maybe he thought it was some kind of nonsense, but he, for example, couldn't do that. It really is a difficult skill. Jake read the documents and, with tears in his eyes, said thank him very much. MC asked, well, does he have any leads? Jake answered no. Even though the corrupt activities of various politicians and corporations are described in detail here, this kind of corruption is commonplace in Baran. Killing his father just because of this would probably end up in the red for each of them. Oscar looked at him and wondered if all the Baran children really grew up that fast. Although Lloyd had matured early too. MC said that since there was nothing special in the accounting, let him take a look at it. They would look at what they left in the diary. Jake opened the diary and offered to look. He began to read. June 10th. Almost 2 years had passed since he became mayor of Baran. The headline in the day before yesterday's newspaper called Baran a city of alcohol and gambling. Compared to the days when it was known as a city of alcohol, gambling, and illegal substances, this is an incredible success. And this is all the result of the efforts of the residents of this city, including his and Mark's. In the 2 years remaining until the end of his term, Baran will become an even more wonderful city. July 2nd. Despite the fact that they dispersed the largest gang, the volume of illegal substances trafficking on the streets is not decreasing. He is more than confident that individual dealers cannot achieve such volumes. There must be an organized group behind this. August 22nd. He arrested and interrogated about 100 dealers. Their answers were shocking. They didn't even know their suppliers. How big a group is this? Buzz can't even imagine how serious their connections are. At the very least, a corporation or an influential politician must be behind this. Jake looked down and said he thought he should discuss this with Mark. August 24th. Last night he discussed this matter with Mark. Something is fishy here. It was as if he already knew all the details of his personal investigation. Even though he doesn't like it, he'll have to follow him too. He sighed and MC asked, what's wrong? Jake said fearfully, there's more. Oscar took the diary from him and said that if it's too difficult for him, he can read it. September 1st. Mark Sweet turned out to be a complete idiot. In fact, he is a lieutenant of the largest illegal substances cartel in the Happy Ending Empire. He happily grabbed him by the scruff of the neck and demanded an answer, but he needed to be patient. The future of 600,000 Baran residents depended on his decisions and actions. Jake stood next to him, clenching his fists. MC said, the next recording is September 18th. Tomorrow is the opening of the Addiction Rehabilitation Center. And today he has a meeting scheduled with one of the government officials belonging to the imperial family. If everything goes well, he will be able to get rid of the happy ending without much hassle. For the sake of the bright future of Baran, this is the last recording. Jake cried and pressed his fist to his chest, saying, September 18th. On September 18th, his father died. Mark promised him that he would personally find the culprit and that he would continue his father's work, so he could not worry. He said this right at his dad's grave. And this man, this is a lieutenant of the illegal substances cartel. Jake sobbed and asked how could he do this to them? Oscar put his hand on his shoulder and said, he will pay for his sins. Jake cried and said, it's impossible in this city. MC asked him not to give up. He'll do anything to get punished. Jake looked at him hopefully and asked, really? MC asked, does he think they just became mages of one of the 4 great towers? Killian said, Oscar, the situation is much more serious than they expected. Baran could end up under the control of a cartel of illegal substances. MC replied, it's not just Baran's problem anymore. Baran has a population of 600,000, but besides them, about 30 million tourists pass through the city annually. And these numbers are growing year after year. What does he think will happen when the new mayor, Mark Sweet, gets all these tourists hooked on illegal substances? Killian replied, they'll all come home addicted, and the cartel will suddenly have new clients all over the nation. So, this diary is the only way to prevent his election? MC replied, it seems so. The question is, when will Mark Sweet decide to act? Killian said that if he planned to run for mayor for another term, he wouldn't allow the contents of this diary to see the light of day, and he would choose a moment when all the residents' attention would be focused on something else, so that no one would even think about what was happening in this estate. Oscar asked, what kind of moment would that be? Some kind of large-scale celebration or something? Jake exclaimed, yes, there's a festival downtown tonight. MC and Killian exchanged glances, and Jake said, they're also going to set off some very elaborate fireworks display. Killian said, that means today. Oscar replied, he agreed. They needed to start preparing countermeasures immediately. Killian asked, Oscar, Jake should be evacuated, right? They were already in deep trouble. They'd have to call in outside support. Oscar asked, wow, does he have any common sense? Killian replied with displeasure, actually, he's a normal person. Suddenly, Jake interrupted their conversation and said, no, he is not going to run. If he retreats now, when else will he get a chance to take revenge on his father's killer? He doesn't think in this life. If they think it's too dangerous, then he will break the contract and handle it himself. Oscar looked at him carefully and said that he even felt a little offended. Killian said, they won't abandon him, Jake. MC asked, but he trusted them, didn't he? Jake said, Chillin, Oscar, thank them, really. Oscar said to thank them when they succeed. Right now, it is important for them to form a plan. Is there a communication device on his estate? Jake answered, yes, but right now they can't contact the outside world. Security measures have been implemented throughout Baron since yesterday. Now he understands that this is all part of his plan. MC asked, does he have a transmitting crystal ball? Jake answered, his father liked to collect various antiques, so he has one. But why does he need one? Oscar answered, it is necessary. Where is it? They need to get through. Someone asked, seriously, this thing? Jake opened the closet and said, actually, it's here. He liked it. That's why his father gave it to him. He's ashamed. Chillin said, there's a piano in the bushes. MC put his hand on his face and told him to be quiet. He looked at the crystal ball and said, great. He asked to use it. Jake gave it to him and Oscar activated it and said, fortunately, it still works. Chillin asked, when did he figure out how to use it? He'd only read about this ancient relic in books. Oscar replied, he was just kind of bored, so he studied the mechanism. He thought, a relic? Just a couple of decades ago, it was considered a breakthrough in technology. MC waved his hand and turned off the ball. Chillin asked, did he manage to send the message? Oscar answered, yes. Chillin said, he hoped the elders wouldn't be late. MC asked again, the elders? Well, yeah, they should get there just in time. Sometime later, the dispatch manager was sitting in the control room of the transmitting crystal balls. He stretched and yawned loudly. The new junior, and also the only employee in the department, said, boss. The manager asked, what do you need? The guy asked, what exactly do they do here anyway? The manager stretched and asked again, what do they do? The guy said yes, he still hasn't explained anything properly. He thought about it. It had been 3 days since he was hired, and all his boss does is yawn. No matter how cushy a job in the civil service may be, this is a bit much. The manager asked a question. Hasn't he told him yet? How energetic he is. Does he know anything about their department? The guy cried out. He was told that hundreds of people used to work here, and it's an honor for him to work in a department with such a rich history. The man said discontentedly, what an idiot he is, he can talk nonsense. Anyway, when the ball starts to glow, numbers are shown. Their job is to record it and decipher the message. The guy said this as if it were inconvenient. The boss replied that it is today, but before the invention of the technomagical communication device, this very ball connected the entire world. Those were good times. In the past, everyone had a pocket version of such a crystal ball. Back then, to meet someone, you had to send them your unique number, and on the other end, they would immediately understand that they were looking for you. The guy asked in surprise, a pocket crystal ball? So you could carry it with you? The boss replied, yeah, the pocket version had a limit on the length of the number you could send, and this high-tech version has no such limit. The guy asked, so if you're just sending your identification number, the length shouldn't matter? The man said, you're a kid. You can tell he was born in peacetime. Had he ever heard of cipher? The guy clenched his fists and said, yes, he has. The boss folded his arms across his chest and said, the numbers received from the crystal ball can be combined into whole sentences. And during the war, this was exactly what they used to transmit urgent information. The employee asked, so their job is to transmit information? The man answered, yes. When someone sends a number, they have to analyze it, translate it into text, and report it to the higher-ups. Their office is under the direct control of the imperial family, so the code itself is top secret. Only the heads of the magic towers, dukes, and patriarchs of famous swordsman families have access to their department's line. The guy saw a ball light up behind him and looked at it in surprise. The boss said, it sounds like it might be pretentious, but no one has contacted them for 18 years. That's why they cut back so much staff. To be honest, he didn't even think they would hire anyone new. The guy interrupted him and shouted, boss? The man asked, what's wrong? The employee screamed and the crystal ball behind him lit up. The boss grinned and asked, what? Well, he certainly is a joker. He turned around and saw it. The man screamed loudly, what the? Why now, all of a sudden? The guy screamed. He thought he saw numbers appearing. The boss replied, he could see it himself, the idiot. He read the numbers and asked, Baron, this isn't a happy ending. Let him write down the numbers, he'll decrypt them. The guy replied, yes, sir. After a while, they stood at the table and decrypted. The chief read, the city of Baron is at risk of being taken over by the empire's largest cartel. Happy ending. Their plan is to flood the entire nation with illegal substances, and today is the starting point? The guy asked in surprise. Isn't this super important? The boss ordered him to contact the National Security Bureau immediately, right now. At that moment, a question rang out in the forest near the Buzz Hoover estate. Cameras? They're offline. Omar, the head of the Level 4 Mercenary Alliance, said, great, they have 5 hours. They need to retrieve the encrypted data within that time. Samuel, the captain of the Level 4 mercenaries, asked, the cameras are already offline, so what are they waiting for? Omar turned around and replied, they have a plan. He suggested following it. Samuel asked, who made him his boss? They'll manage on their own somehow. Jackson, the captain of the Level 4 mercenaries, said, then, Jackson's mercenaries will also act separately. Omar sighed and thought, what's the point of gathering 152 mercenaries? They've recruited 10 companies of mercenaries who've never worked together, so naturally, there's no organization. The main problem is the level 4 captains. Their egos are just bursting out. There was a shout, who turned off the cameras? They dare to push forward? The guy suggested the boss teach them a lesson first. Omar replied, no, it's fine. He'd expected this from the start. Their employer's daughter has put a reward of 300,000 bells on a magician named Chillin, so it's understandable why they're acting like this. The guy asked, "Are us sweet?" Then they even more urgently need to be the first. The mercenary said, "Boss, they should move before it's too late. At this rate, they'll snatch up all the profits." Omar nodded and said, "Okay, go ahead." The guys cheered, when suddenly the mercenaries stepped on something on the ground, and Omar asked, "What happened?" The guy was lying on the ground, holding his leg. He screamed, "His leg!" Omar waved his hand and shouted, "There are traps." He ordered everyone to watch their step. The mercenary said in fear, "Boss!" Omar screamed, "What's wrong again?" The guy said, "Jackson's dead." Omar ran up to him and saw the corpse. At that moment, loud shouts from mercenaries were heard behind them. "What kind of clumsy idiot doesn't watch his step?" The mine exploded. If someone steps on it, don't lift their feet. Don't step on it. It activates itself. The guys were attacked by streams of mana, and Omar ordered everyone to run towards the estate. "They're leaving the forest." The guys screamed, "We need to stick to cover. That way they won't be able to determine their location." After these words, a magical stream pierced his back. The mercenaries scattered in fear and begged to be saved. At that moment, Killian was sitting in a tree. He jumped down and said, "They were wandering around the forest so carefree. It's like they wanted him to finish them off." He killed all the mercenaries within his mana reach. The guy hid behind a tree and covered his mouth with his hands. He thought, "It's horrible. He's begging. Just let him go." The forest grew silent and he sighed. The guy grabbed his gun and peered out from behind a tree. He thought, "He's gone, right? He has to, right? He's not going to die like that." Blood dripped down his face and he wondered if it was water. The guy looked up and saw Killian in front of him. He screamed loudly in fear and started firing his gun. He ordered Killian to die, but not a single bullet damaged him. Killian said something he personally hates. The guy screamed in fear. "What? Why isn't he dying?" Killian swung his weapon and said, "It's the smell of gunpowder in the sacred forest." At that moment, MC was sitting on the roof and thinking, "This is using up a lot of mana." To find enemies hiding in the forest, he casts thermal image recognition magic on his eyes. And to deal with them, he uses a special wind bullet, tailored for ultra-long ranges, the so-called wind sniper rifle. It's definitely effective, but each shot eats up a lot of mana. Still, he neutralized 67 targets, which is already enough. Oscar said, "Scan." Mana detection began from a bird's eye view. He looked at the radar and thought, "This is Killian, and these are 2 mercenaries on their side. The rest are protecting Jake and the estate. About 50 of the remaining enemies are fleeing. Is the battle really over already?" MC looked at this thoughtfully, when suddenly he saw that the targets began to return. Oscar wondered, why are they heading back towards the estate? Are they still going to continue the plan even after everything they suffered in the forest? And the speed at which they are moving is completely unreasonable. They must be completely exhausted. MC realized something is wrong. At that moment, Killian looked at the sky and thought, the smell of gunpowder was gone. Did everyone escape? Guys ran out of the forest and shouted, "Sir Killian!" He asked in surprise, "Are they both okay?" The mercenary screamed, "Yes, they did it. Just think, the 4 of them fought off an army of 150 men. Books will be written about this colossal victory." Suddenly, Killian's eyes widened and said, "Stop." He ordered to prepare for battle. The enemy is approaching again. A loud cry rang out and the mercenary ran forward. They growled loudly, like some kind of animals. Killian looked at them and thought, no one in their right mind would return here. He hit the guy in the face, when suddenly the guy bit his thigh with his teeth. Killian clenched his fist and hit the mercenary on the head. He looked around and thought, this condition looks like the result of the technique the traitor used on the chieftain of their tribe. The guy held back the enemy and asked for help. Something was clearly wrong with them. Killian screamed, "He's coming." He suddenly stopped and widened his eyes in surprise. A voice rang out behind him, "Long time no see." Killian looked to the side and screamed, "Kaya Lockwood." She asked, "Something like 4, right?" Killian screamed, "What is she, a traitor, doing here?" Kaya put her hand to her lips and asked, "Traitor? This is offensive." Killian asked, "Is it true?" Kaya asked, "What?" Killian screamed that she stole the king's tattoo from the forest temple and made the chieftain lose his mind when he tried to stop him. Was it really her? He clenched his fist and screamed. He needed to hear it from her lips. The Kaya Lockwood he knew. She may have had a nasty temper, but she was the most powerful and respected warrior, who rose to the position of warrior chieftain at the young age of 18. She was his idol, someone who understood perfectly well which traditions were worth honoring. That's how he remembers her. So why did she cloud the chieftain's mind, turning him into a battle-obsessed madman, so that he would fall at the hands of the forest warriors he loved so dearly? Killian silently begged her to deny it, to tell him that this was all some kind of misunderstanding. If she told him, even if it took some time, one day he would be able to. Kaya interrupted his thoughts and said, "Yes, really. So what?" Killian looked at her in surprise and asked, "No excuses?" Kaya smiled and said, "So there was no need for her to make that up." He screamed loudly. The chieftain she drove mad had to meet a dishonorable end at the hands of those he loved most in the world. Not even on the battlefield. Kaya smiled and said, "What a shame." Killian grew angry and got into a fighting stance. Kaya asked, "Does he want to fight?" "It can't be that he doesn't realize the difference between them." Killian said, "It doesn't mean anything. A warrior of the forest doesn't retreat." Kaya chuckled and said, "Her stupid brother. Sometimes it's worth retreating and running. It's a smart way to survive in this world a little longer." Killian said, "His father and the chief didn't teach him to live smartly. They taught him the life of a warrior. Kaya said, well, he's a forest idiot after all. Does he think his friend can handle it if he doesn't go to him now? Killian swung his fists and shouted, Oscar is strong. He won't lose to pathetic puppets. After a while, the guys were fighting the enemies and breathing heavily. The guy extended his hand and asked for help. The mercenary turned around and thought, wait, what if he sacrifices him? He can escape. He remembered how some time ago the guy asked, is he cute, isn't he? He showed a picture of the boy and said, this is his son. He promised to go on a journey with him after this mission. The mercenary closed his eyes and, screaming loudly, rushed towards his ally. He looked to the side and saw an enemy approaching him. The guy thought, that's why there's no need to brag.